The main character launched into his story how he'd been an orphan since he was a kid. Scraping by fighting monsters for money until he revealed the twist in the kingdom, people called him the #1 adventurer with an A rank. The main character and a bunch of others rode along on the platform, while the severed, toothy head of the monster sat right in front of them. Grinning, and from every side jubilant people pressed in like a celebration, with a huge arch looming behind the whole ride. Aldred beamed and waved as people of every age cheered and shouted his name. Then he started to lower his hand, thinking maybe his days of trouble were finally over and the hunger was gone for good. Aldred ended up in a huge room, grinning sweet as sugar at everyone around him, and scattered across the space were a bunch of round tables. After a while, Aldred's smile vanished. He let out a heavy breath, stared at the floor, and in that moment, a group of people nearby shifted awkwardly, looking at him like they couldn't meet his eyes. Aldred strode down the street, convinced he was still 27, but the question gnawed at him: how much longer could he keep playing adventurer? Lately, he'd been stuck in the capital, and now all kinds of weird personalities started reaching out to him, and Aldred couldn't stop picturing the faces of the women and the man. Aldred ended up on the field, planted on the ground, staring up as a huge mansion loomed behind him, while flowers swirled around his feet and a tailwind whipped their petals into the air. Outside, darkness swallowed everything, and inside the mansion the lights finally died while across the city, glowing windows began to flicker on. Aldred sat at a round table lit by a flickering candle, staring down wooden mugs filled with drinks while 3 others lounged nearby. Then one man blurted out that Aldred really wanted to tear the team apart. The dark-haired man shut his eyes and murmured that he'd seen this ending coming all along, while the blonde guy froze in shock and the blushing girl insisted this news could really be true. The dark-haired man slumped against the table and said, "The leader chose this himself, no excuses, just his decision." "Sure, the others might still be green," he added, "but I'm nearly 30. Aldred looked away and muttered that maybe the guys had already locked in what came next. The blonde guy grinned and declared he'd been invited to join the Royal Knights. Then everyone around him stared, stunned. The dark-haired guy dropped the news that he was planning a trip, and the girl's cheeks flared red as she revealed she'd been invited to the Royal School of Magic. She couldn't wait to study there. The guys leaned in and demanded what Aldred wanted to do next. Aldred grinned and said he'd been picturing a peaceful life in New Orleans, and everyone stared at their leader like he'd just shocked them. The guys kept debating Aldrich's scheme, and Aldrich instantly regretted spilling his whole plan while the blonde guy backed him without hesitation. Aldrich shut his eyes and admitted after all this time that he'd dreamed for years of one more glimpse of a blooming flower field, and the guys went wide-eyed, because they never expected that side of Aldred. Aldred took a sip from his mug, and the dark-haired man pushed again for what he was planning. Then Aldred set the mug down, dipped his head, and declared he wasn't hungry anymore because from this moment on, he'd live carefree. The guys stared at Aldred, backed his call without hesitation, and then clinked the wooden mugs together in one loud, ready-for-action moment. Aldred bounced along in a cart, peering out the window as he decided no more unnecessary noise. He'd disbanded the team for a reason, and honestly, he still believes he made the right call, but yeah, he's got a long road ahead. A whole month went by, and Aldred was still perched on the wagon's roof. Then the wagon slammed to a stop, someone shouted that they'd finally arrived, and Aldred jolted awake, stood up, and started scanning the surroundings. Aldred spotted a tiny settlement, and huge plantations sprawled around the crowbars when he spoke the place name. It hit hard New Orleans, so he froze, staring in stunned silence, then reached out and touched the grapes. A girl in a hat swept up to Aldred, and while the guys argued about where he even came from, she introduced herself Aisha. The guys strolled through a sleepy rural settlement, and the streets were bursting with blooming flowers, while Aldred grinned like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. As they rolled through town, the guys bumped into local residents out harvesting crops, and Aisha called it out, "We're at the elder's house," while Aldred just grinned, staring at the flowers blooming right in front. Aldred grinned and told them he'd been here 9 years ago, but the flowers still looked unreal. So Aisha stepped into the house, and a girl was waiting for them inside. A blonde woman caught up with the guys and said Aisha had dragged someone here, and Aisha snapped her hands on her belt and declared that the guy from Avalon wants to move in here. She lifted her hand and told the men to ask her husband. Then Aisha tugged on her hat, got ready to bolt, and Aldred thanked her for the save while the woman started warning the chief that a guest from Avalon had arrived. The men clutched their books and started claiming that he was an elder while Albus leaned in, dying to know why Aldred had come to them. Aldred's cheeks flared as he admitted he'd fallen head over heels for the beauty of this place the last time he visited. Albus grinned and pointed out that other villagers had arrived for the very same reason too. And over there, the blonde woman kept talking, like she'd been here 100 years. Aldred's cheeks flamed the second he caught that sweet, fresh smell of tea. Apple mint tea sat right there on the table, and when he took a sip from the mug, he grinned and said, "Man, this stuff is seriously relaxing." The man and the woman started to grin, saying Aldred had finally loosened up because before that, he'd been downright gloomy. Aldred's face flushed with pure embarrassment. Then Albus leaned in and told him, "No more shyness from here on out, just be yourself." Aldred threw his hand up, grinning, then the man and the woman locked eyes, erupted in laughter, and Albus told Aldred he could stick around for now while they found a spot for him later. Aldred sat back on the chair, then suddenly dropped his head, and the woman burst into even more laughter. Albus stayed with his hands planted on the table, then snapped that whatever Aldred was planning still wasn't anywhere near lunch, making Aldred's face flare red as he started to think it through. Aldred blinked and suddenly found himself on the street. He stared straight ahead and muttered that he was finally back in this place again. Flower petals whirled through the air around Aldred as he gaped at the endless sea of blooms, and then tears spilled down his face. Aldred jolted in shock, yanked at his sleeve to wipe away his tears, and as petals swirled around him, the air filled with sudden blooming plants. His face burning red as he stared at his hand, only to find a flower petal sitting there. Aldred strode across the field, mulling over how the flowers shift colors with every season, though he can't even remember who told him that. And then he snapped his gaze ahead in shock because the girl was right there. She swayed with long blonde hair and a braided flower crown. Then right when she sensed someone behind her, she spun around, and there stood Aldred. A girl sat there, ringed by blooming flowers, clutching a tiny bouquet in her hands, and Aldrin couldn't help but stare, dying to know who she was. A drop of sweat popped onto Aldred's face, and he gaped at the girl, stunned. Her own face went burning red with pure embarrassment. Aldred never once looked away from the girl he approached, and greeted her in a shaky, timid voice, and she blushed even harder, clutching a bouquet like it might save her as she glanced at him with pure embarrassment. Then suddenly she started rambling, fidgeting, and making these weird, awkward noises. The girl suddenly dropped into a deep bow and wished Aldred a bright good morning. Then she bolted like her life depended on it. Aldred froze, stunned, and blurted that he really did look that scary. Nightfall crashed and dark skies opened up. Stars blazed overhead, and Aldred busted into Albus's house, calling out that he was finally back. Aldred's cheeks burned as a blonde woman stood right in front of him, smiling like she owned the moment, and Aldred figured it was totally normal for someone to be waiting at home while Albus set the plates on the table. And he and Aldred started talking, excitedly, about the beauty of the flower field. Aldred was seated at the table, and his cheeks flared red. Alba had just called the place magical, and when he lay back on that cool grass, it felt so good that he and the other residents headed there to unwind. Albus's cheeks flared when his wife said they first met under that tree, and she even brought back the moment by having him propose the exact same way when Fiona started to push it. Albus begged her not to make him the laughingstock, and then he turned to Aldred and said he had to go see their daughter. Aldred's face flamed when he spotted the blonde girl standing beside Albus. Albus introduced her as Flora, and told Aldred he'd be living in their village now, while Flora clutched a handkerchief to her hands, cheeks burning with pure embarrassment. Flora locked eyes ahead and called out Aldred's name like it was breaking news. Albus said the guys had already met. Aldred insisted he and Flora spotted each other under a tree in the field, and Fiona just stood off to the side, smirking and chuckling. Aldred stared around, totally lost. Then Albus told him he'd be staying the night with them, and Flora would have to look after him. Flora took one long look at that plan, shrugged, and bolted, sprinting off into the distance. Albus sighed and apologized for his daughter's wild move. Aldred scratched his neck, thinking Flora was just shy because the way she bolted like that made his stomach twist with discomfort. Everyone crowded around the table, and the food was piled high like a celebration was about to explode. Alba announced they were throwing a feast today, and Fiona chimed in that the village just got a new guest, so this was something to take seriously. Albus clutched the bottle, grinned, and announced he'd pulled out a 10-year-old drink. These grapes were grown in Aisha's garden, and then he began pouring, while Flora stared at the filling glass, utterly baffled. The guys lifted their glasses and started cheering for the new resident. Aldrin took one sip, grinned at how delicious it was, and Albus beamed so hard the cheese on the table felt like extra proof. Flora grabbed her fork and started digging in, then glanced up at Aldred, who burst into a soft glow as he choked out, "That cheese and bread are freaking amazing." Plates of food crowded the table before Aldred, and without hesitating, he snatched up a boat and started piling it full until the plates slowly drained and drained down. The girls stared at Aldred in disbelief when he bragged that the food was truly amazing and that they could rake in money from it. Fiona instantly started showering Flora with praise for every dish she'd cooked. Flora's cheeks flared red as she bowed and thanked the guys for the compliments. Aldred kept eating with his spoon, then suddenly a weird, impossible sound blasted out, and everyone immediately snapped their heads toward Flora, stunned. Flora's eyes burned with embarrassed tears as she blurted that Aldred probably wanted more. Then Aldred snatched the plate and shoved it right back into her hands. Flora's cheeks flared as she closed her eyes and whispered. She was about to pop a supplement, then she started sliding a whole full plate of food toward Aldrin. Aldred stared at Flora and dared to hope that time would crack her shyness and turn her into a real friend, and that when they met again she wouldn't bolt outside. Daylight drained away, and the first stars blinked into the dark sky. The very next day, the guys stormed over to Aldred right there. Stuff surrounded him, and the girls stood there clutching baskets like treasure. Alba leaned in and told Aldred he could show up anytime he wanted. Aldred bowed his head and thanked them for the warm welcome. Albus stared at Aldred and wondered if he had real skills or if he was itching to get hired somewhere, while Aldred just gazed at the flowers, lost in thought, craving the chance to finish quests. Aldred shot back that he wanted to hunt, and Albus grinned because with so few hunters in their village, Aldred was exactly the kind of help they needed. Flora marched up to Aldred and announced she'd cooked him dinner, and Aldred snapped back a big thank you for the generous kindness. Flora stared at her own hands, cheeks burning, and didn't dare say he didn't have to thank her. Aldred just figured she was incredibly nice. Aldred and Albus strode through the village, plotting Aldred's future home out west, right near the flower field. Sunlight blazed over the vines as Alba told Aldrich he could pick any empty house in the west. Then the guys ended up hanging out by the river. Ben stood at one of the proposed houses, and Aldrich shyly shut them down at every single place they tried to see. The crew ended up at another house, tucked deep in the trees on every side, and Aldred rubbed his chin like he was plotting something. Then they pushed on, deeper into the unknown. The guys strode across the wooden bridge. Aldred grinned as he stared at the fish in the river. Then Albus bolted ahead toward the last house. The guys burst into the house while the women grimaced at the dust and the gloom, and Aldred dropped his things by the entrance. Then his eyes caught the box, and a grin snapped across his face. The guys ended up on the street right in front of the house, sitting on the ground and tearing into sandwiches, and Aldred blurted that he'd love to live here if there was someone in the village who could make furniture, while Albus pointed across the road and said, "The guy lived right there." Albus jabbed a fingers at the house, then turned to Aldred and said, "The master's name was Toke, so they could visit him tomorrow." Aldred thanked him, and the men parted ways. Aldred grabbed a dustpan and a broom, tore into the house like a one-man storm, scrubbed and swept the floors, then, somehow, he walked out of it just as filthy as the mess. Aldred scanned the room spotless, gleaming like it had never seen a day of dirt, and he realized, I guess I won't need to head to Toke's tomorrow. Because right now he was about to scrub himself clean, pouring water from the bucket into a wooden box. Aldred snapped 2 bracelets onto his arm, thrust his hand forward, and started conjuring. Then the magic sign erupted, and water poured out like it had been summoned from thin air. A burst of fire flared from the magic icon, sizzling the water, and steam shot up fast. Aldred stared in pure panic, muttering that it was supposed to go smoothly, even though he was still right there in the water. Aldred hauled himself out of the tub and tossed a towel over his shoulders, then started hunting for his clothes until the house jolted with footsteps from the street. Flora burst in and said she'd brought dinner. Aldred tossed his towel aside and froze when he realized he was completely naked in front of Flora. She lifted her hands, and tears spilled from her eyes. Flora bolted out of Aldrich's house, and it felt like the distance between them shrank with every second. 1 step forward, then 3 steps back, like the world was yanking him away. A tiny village clung to the middle of endless vineyard rows, with a thick stretch of forest looming past the fields, and the sun blazed overhead like it owned the sky. Aldred crumpled on the floor, a sunbeam cutting across him. Then he shot up and blurted, "It's really morning." Aldred's place was tiny and only 1 floor, the chimney jutting out like a watchful finger from the roof, while the sun blazed over the tiles. Then Aldred grinned and said he finally had a house of his own. Aldred threw on his clothes, decided to head to Toka, and as he walked, he replayed yesterday's mess with Flora. He swore he'd get along with her. But the truth hit hard. It went completely the other way. Aldred found himself outside Toki's house, stepped onto the veranda, and charged up the stairs only to spot a table and a couple of chairs waiting right there. Aldred dropped into the chair and let out a howl of pure delight at how beautiful it was, and Towaku stared out the window like, "I can't believe I'm seeing a grown man lose his mind over some ordinary chair." Towaku grinned and told Aldred he was genuinely grateful for the praise. Aldred stared at him in shock. Then Towaku threw open the door and invited him inside. Towaku clutched the vegetables in his hands, and Aldred finally said, "Yeah, I'll join breakfast," before stepping into the house and agreeing. Aldred slid up to the table, buzzing for breakfast, then flopped down on it, and sighed how nice it felt under his hands. Plates piled up on the table, and the guys dove into the meal. Aldred tore into every bite, loving it, while Towaku started spilling the recipe for their breakfast, and Aldred just kept eating, greedy as ever. In that room, a sink and a stove sat side by side, but Tuku's nerves were on fire. Aldred hadn't eaten since last night until Aldred stepped in and soothed Tukaka. Plates and little boats sat on the table, and Aldred was ready to spill what happened yesterday to Flora until Aku started pressuring him, trying to persuade Aldred to back their side. Towaku wouldn't drop it. He demanded to retell yesterday's story, and Aldred immediately suspected he had a wild streak. Then Towaku exploded, yelling that Aldred was secretly hooking up with Flora, and Aldred snapped into motion, launching into yesterday's events himself. Towaku clasped his hands, burst into laughter, and announced that Flora had truly caught him naked, while Aldred blushed hard and pressed his lips together. Towaku burst into laughter, and Aldrich snapped at him to cut it out. Meanwhile, standing there in front of Flora left him squirming with discomfort, and he just knew things would grow even colder, because him and Flora barely ever talked. Aldred shrugged and admitted it wasn't because Towaku's face looked too terrifying just then. Tawaku's frown deepened and deepened, but the guy stayed put at Tawaku's place. Then they all marched into the workshop, Aldred declaring he needed every basic household item they could find. Wooden planks sat beside Aldred, and Tokaku swept his hair back and told him, "For a while you'll live with no furniture, too many orders right now, but I'll get you a bed." Tawaku jabbed at the sofa and told Aldred he could have it, but Aldred plopped into a nearby chair right as Tawaku barked, "Whoa, I'm not done fixing it." Even so, Aldred plopped down on the chair and flashed a smile, telling Toakusta that this bedroom seat was perfect for him. Then everything spiraled. Tawaku jabbed a finger sideways and promised he'd haul another chair from the warehouse, just in case Aldred suddenly got company yet. Aldred couldn't shake the feeling that Tawaku was used to leaving him alone. The guys finally piled into Aldred's place, and Toku collapsed onto the sofa, groaning that he was wiped out, yet he still had to measure that spot under the bed. And Aldred slid him a drink. Tawaku snatched the glass and all at once remembered yesterday's wild story with Flora. Then Aldred snapped that he was acting like a kid, and Tawaku just kept laughing like nothing could stop him. Aldred grabbed the glasses and headed for the wooden table, then flashed a grin and said, the house's furniture had gotten way more comfortable. A closet, a table, and a bunch of chairs popped into the room, and the guy dove straight into how comfy everything was while Tawaku lounged on the couch. Tawaku grinned and promised he'd show you all the cozy treasures for home, and Aldred thanked Tawaka for the help. The next day, Aldred and Aisha met me on the street. Then Aldred leaned in and told me he lives right next to Toku. Aisha wiped her face with a towel. The guys kicked off a heated discussion about the move. Then someone started closing in on them fast. Flora trailed right behind Aisha, and when Flora and Aldred locked eyes, horror hit them both. Aldred couldn't even understand why Flora had shown up here. Aldred's cheeks flared as he froze with his head bowed. Flora shot behind Aisha for cover, and Aisha shut her eyes tight like she couldn't bear what came next. Aisha shoved Flora out of the way. Flora stumbled back in pure awkwardness, and the guys awkwardly greeted each other like they didn't know where to put their hands. Aldred and Flora stood face to face in dead silence, and Aldred's gaze flicked to Aisha. Her mood turning grim, Aldred shut his eyes and realized Aisha looked like she already knew everything. Then, out of nowhere, Aldred dropped down in front of Flora. Aldred started blurting out an apology for yesterday, and Flora shot back that none of it was his fault. Then she dropped to her knees and begged for forgiveness. Flora pressed a hand to her blazing red face, and Aldred figured she didn't blame him at all because she was even apologizing to him herself. Aisha coughed hard to grab their attention, then told the guys she needed to finish her job so they could finally head home together. Aldred and Flora wore red faces as they looked at Aisha, mortified, and the guys stared in shock at her bold suggestion. The guys strolled along the great plantation, when a lone man came marching from the opposite way. Trailing behind him was a small, fully loaded horse. Flora stared at Aldred, wondering what big plan he had for today. Then Aldred strode forward and said he wanted to meet the village hunter. Flora blinked and shot back, "You've only been here 4 days, aren't you rushing a little too hard?" Aldred and Flora caught up, and the guy blurted that he wanted to be useful to the villagers. Then Aldred let out a laugh and promised, "We'll have meat aplenty soon." Right on cue, a bunch of girls came striding over toward them, cackling and laughing at the top of their lungs. The girls strode past the guys, and Aldred snapped around to stare. Then he blurted, "Why does everyone here dress like that?" Flora pointed at the blooms and flashed a grin, saying these plants keep flowering all year long so people chase the same perfect rhythm. The guys finally rolled up at Flora's house, and right on the street they ran into Flora's father. Aldred told him his place has gotten way more comfortable since they added furniture, and he also made it clear he wanted to meet the village hunter. Aldred stared at Flora and grinned, saying he couldn't wait to start working. Then Flora's father laughed and promised to introduce him to the village hunter. Aldred swapped into a whole new suit, gloves snapped onto his hands, and a bow with arrows clung to his back. He convinced himself he wouldn't need his sword because this was the moment he had to move out. In front of Aldred, a man stood there holding close to him a little girl. Then he introduced himself as Lawrence, a village hunter, and Aldred immediately asked, "Are you two with the father and daughter?" The man and the girl spun away from each other, clearly furious, and the girl shot back that Aldred was wrong, like the words sounded absolutely outrageous. Lawrence shot back that the girl beside him was Karina, his student. Then she cut in and said, "I'm 12. But the moment Aldred stayed silent about the fact that she was a hunter, Karina exploded with outrage. Aldred grinned and shrugged that none of it mattered. Woman or man, the only thing that counted was top-notch hunting skills. The rest didn't matter at all, while Karina smiled back, fully agreeing, and vowed to help the village. Lawrence stared at Karina and told her she still had to grind through study after study before she could become a hunter, and only later would that dream click into place. Karina shot back that she'd do it as fast as humanly possible. Just then, 2 girls popped up not far from the guys. Karina jabbed a finger at the mountain. Right there was their destination. Lorenz turned and thanked Aldred for backing her up. Aldred grinned and said, Lorenz looked just like his father. Lorenz went red, then smacked Aldred on the shoulder. The guys trudged along a skinny path boxed in by towering trees where mushrooms sprouted right at the roots. And as they walked, they argued like they'd just discovered a treasure about how perfect the village's location really was. Aldred slammed the brakes and demanded to know what fruits could even grow here, so Karina started listing them one by one, while Lawrence leaned in and asked if Aldred had ever heard of fruits like these before. Deep in the forest, you could hear the guys trading secrets. Aldred even claimed he'd heard about it. Then Lauren popped up and showed the exact fruit they'd mentioned earlier, and Aldred froze, hand to his lips, stunned as he stared it down. Lauren dug into the fruits and fed Aldred too. And while Aldred chewed, memories hit him back when he was little. He'd wolfed down everything in one go, and it always landed him in trouble. Karina stood on a fruit-littered tree, plucked a ripe one, and shoved it into Aldred's hands. "This is a loo," she said, grinning. "The peel's tough, but the flesh tastes like heaven." Karina shot her hand up and warned, "There's a painfully bitter taste right under the peel." Lauren burst out laughing, claiming, "Nah, that's the best, most delicious part." The guys kept pushing through the forest until the land buckled into mountains, and when they finally stopped by a bush, they spotted fresh animal tracks. Lauren crouched beside the animal tracks, pointing them out as fresh deer prints, and the other guys crowded in close, hanging on his every word. The guys started talking about tracking down that deer, and they all agreed to stay on high alert while they moved. Then Karina and Aldred tiptoed beside the bushes, scanning and inspecting everything in sight. Aldred planted his foot on a branch and snapped it underfoot, while Lorraine stood right behind him, staring at Aldred. Then an eerie, glowing radiance started to pour out of him. They huddled shoulder to shoulder in the bushes, then spotted it right nearby, a deer calmly chowing down on grass, and the second they saw it, the guys kicked into a heated debate about how they'd take it down. Aldred snatched up a bow and arrow, locked his sights on the deer, and Lorenz and Chris stood right beside him, staring in suspense then. After a breath of tension, Aldred loosed the arrow straight into the target. The arrow ripped straight into the deer's head. He shrieked in a heart-wrenching way and drooled out the side of his mouth, and then a deafening blast echoed across the whole neighborhood. The guys closed in on the deer sprawled on the ground, and Lawrence blurted that Aldred was such a sharpshooter, maybe even better than him. Aldred's face burned with embarrassment, while Karina leaned in and said, "Aldred shoots even better than her own teacher." Lawrence stared at Karina with tears blazing in his eyes, snapped at her to stop talking about him like that, and Karina shot back that she'd be Aldred's student instead. Then Lawrence grabbed her by the head and started shaking her hard. The guys finally rolled into the village, hauling a deer carcass with them, and the locals immediately stared in awe at the massive prize they'd brought down Lorenz. Even cheered that with all Dread's abilities working together, these villagers could finally feast on plenty of deer meat. Aldred flashed a grin, stepped up to the villagers beside him, and introduced himself. Then their faces lit up as they welcomed him with cheers, and Aldred bowed his thanks for every bit of their hospitality. Aldred and the other villagers started butchering the meat, and Aldred figured some would be handed out to the residents while the rest would be sold or used to keep their households running. So he headed straight to Flora's house. She opened the door for him. Flora's cheeks burned as she greeted Aldred, and he jolted into embarrassment, scratching his head while handing her the bundle, claiming it was a gift for their kindness. Flora thanked him, then asked him to stay for a bit. Flora told Aldred he could swing by for dinner tonight. Then Aldred's cheeks flared red as he blurted out whether everything would be okay, and Flora flashed a confident yes right back. Aldred found himself standing before Toke's wooden house, and beside it sat a row of wooden barrels. Then he charged up to the door and barked that he needed to open it, hauling in the meat he'd brought. Aldred reached for the door handle, but before it could swing open, Aisha stepped right in front of him, wearing a disgusted look, and greeted Aldred with attitude. Aisha clasped her hands and declared she'd handed Tioka a chair to repair, while Aldred gripped a handful of nuts and started handing them out to the kids right away. Tawaku gripped a stool in both hands, then shot the girl a hard glare when she claimed his chair nearly triggered a disaster because he spun the bar in his hands and snarled that things had to be handled right. Not like Aisha. Aldred shut his eyes and blamed Aisha totally. Then Tawaku jabbed a finger at the warehouse and promised he was done cutting her discounts. The workshop door slammed shut, and Tawaku kept grumbling like crazy, and Aldred couldn't help but burst into laughter. Aldred tore open a chunk of meat and swore he was finally paying back Toke's debt. Then the whole guy launched into ideas for turning it into the most delicious meal ever. Right then, Aisha burst into the room, hovering over a slab of meat, and told them this kind of meat pairs perfectly with grape drink, leaving the guys staring at her in stunned silence. A wooden stool sat beside the guys as they argued over the future design of Aisha's chair. Then Aisha suddenly chimed in, wondering if Aldred might have a reward waiting for her too, and she pressed her hand to her face, lost in thought. A dense forest towered all around Toaku's house when Aisha told him they should hit those places and feast on venison right then. A girl in a dress with her hair down stepped into the doorway, and Aldred's face flushed as he blurted out, totally confused, who she was. Aisha thrust the basket of food into Aldred's hands and let slip that she doesn't always dress the same. leaving Aldred stunned because he didn't even recognize her, while Tawaku burst into laughter and teased her until Aisha snapped, "Shut up!" Aisha clamped down on Tawaka's ear, and right on cue, Flora popped in front of the guys. Basket in hand, the guys greeted her, and Tawaka flashed a grin so scary it felt like a warning as he introduced himself. Tawaku's face flushed red as the guys tried to explain that scary look of his. Then Flora burst into laughter, blushing hard, and introduced herself to them. The guys dumped the groceries on the table, then immediately started trading ideas for Stu who cooks what, and when every step hits the heat. 2 hunks of meat sat on the table, and Tawaku gripped the spice boxes like weapons. Then he leaned in and swore he was ready to cook, cooked to perfection. The guys kept chiming in, backing Taku, one after another. Then he handed out the cooking rolls. Aldred took over the roasting. Aisha grabbed the meat. Flora was tasked with saddling sake with that wine drink. And Taku? He claimed the vegetables for himself. On one table sat a basket of goodies, and on the other were several long looms then. Aldred gripped the vegetables in his hands and gushed that Twaku's soup tasted incredible, and Twaku just smiled back. "I've got a few secrets." Aldred and Aisha were slicing meat when Aisha started firing threats at Tok, who stood there clutching mushrooms in his hands meanwhile. Aldred launched into chopping vegetables and tossing them into the pan, and the rest of the crew stayed locked in their own tasks. Aisha shut her eyes and drooled like crazy, mumbling that the smells were incredible. Aku held up the cabbage and snapped that she needed to keep herself in check while he cut the meat. Aldred stirred vegetables in the frying pan, and Flora stood beside him, grinning. Flora said Aldred looked like he was actually having fun, and Aldred nodded like she was spot on. Then Toke blurted out, "So, who were you before?" The girls snapped their heads toward Aldred when he finally opened up about his past. Aldred grabbed the meat with tongs, then awkward smiles hit his face when the girls insisted they felt safe. Because if monsters showed up, Aldred would fight them. Aldrich dropped the meat into the pan, said he'd already stepped away from the case, and warned the guy not to count on him, then doubled down like, "Keep drilling into that cooking, no excuses." Aldred and Flora locked eyes and started smiling. While Tawaku glanced at the pensive Aisha, the guys fired up the heat, grilled the meat, chopped it up, and threw the veggies into pots and pans. Aldred and Aisha began sliding plates onto the table, while Flora and Toku hovered by the kitchen tables. Then Aisha grabbed a piece of meat with a fork and fed it straight into Aldred's mouth. Aisha held up a finger. Aldred crunched the meat and admitted it tasted pretty good. Then Aiku stared at him and wondered if something went down between them, and Aldred snapped back that they were totally fine. Aisha clutched a plate of meat and slipped away from the guys, while Flora walked up, dumped it on the table, flashed a wicked smile, and taunted that Aldred had sauce on his mouth, leaving Aldred utterly baffled. Aisha started flinging insults at him without even turning her head, and Aldred stared back in shock while thick smoke curled from the roof chimney and the guys wrapped up cooking the food. The guys dropped into their seats at the table, and suddenly it was stacked with meat dishes. Then they leaned in, eyes wide, staring and admiring every single one. Then the guys started jawing about how there was even more meat, but Flora and Aldred kept scarfing it down while they cooked, and soon the girls started snapping at each other too, while Aldred just watched from the sidelines, terrified. The guys grabbed forks and geared up, and Aldred declared it was finally time to taste the food, hoping everyone would love what they cooked. So they dug in, snatching the meat with their forks and starting to eat right away. Aldred shut his eyes and trembled with pure pleasure. Then she started raving about the guy's cooking skills. Flora snapped her eyes shut and clapped a hand over her mouth, and then she said, Aldred had done a great job too. Aisha's face flared red as she shot up a finger, fully agreeing with the guy. Then Toko stared at the meat and declared she'd done her very best. Tawaku glanced away and snapped that Aisha's steak was a bit too overcooked. But Aisha shrugged and said she was perfectly happy with everything. Aldred backed her up, and Flora insisted the wine drink should come with bread and salad. Tawaku scooped food with a fork while Aisha slapped together a sandwich, and Aldred followed her lead, gobbling it down and grinning that it was insanely tasty. Meanwhile, Flora just kept smiling. Then Aisha dove into the soup and declared it was just as amazing. The guys kept munching and trading recipes, and Flora plucked a berry and popped it into Aldred's mouth. Then he chomped it with a shy, sheepish grin. Aldred's eyes lit up the moment he realized these were pica seeds, each one adding its own punch to the scene. Then he turned to Flora and thanked her, only for Flora to wiggle her tongue out at him, while she held a spoon like it was a weapon. After they shoved the last bite down, a tea set suddenly appeared on the table, and Aldred declared Flora's tea was insanely good. Flora just smiled and thanked him, while Aisha and Tawaku sipped with their eyes shut, savoring every drop. Aisha swung her head toward Tomak and asked, "Do I look like a princess?" Then the guy started rambling about tea, who drinks it, how they take it, and what they do next, and all the while, empty cups sat stacked on the table. The guys wound up out on the street, while the girls chased each other down like it was a game. Then the boys started trading plans for the next fishing trip, and off they went. The guys ended up by the river. Flora hung back behind everyone and finally let herself catch her breath. and the crew started arguing over Aisha's stamina. Then they dropped their shoes and left them on the shore. The guys ducked their heads into the river to cool down, and Aldred broke the surface with a grin. Then he wrung out his hair and stared at Tawaka. Tawaku shot Aldred an embarrassed look when he joked that Tawaku's hairstyle looked weird with wet hair. And while the girls lounged on the shore with their feet splashing in the water, Aisha started mocking Toku right away. Tawaku stared at Flora, then she snapped that his hairstyle was weird. Rage flared in Towaku's chest, so he stormed down and sat on a rock, and Flora jumped in with, "Come on, let's cheer you up." Aisha burst into loud laughter, started mimicking Tawaku, and then a jet of water blasted straight at her. Tawaku did it, soaking her completely, and she had no clue why. Aisha went into full spray mode at Tawaka, and the water splashed right into Aldred. Then the guys erupted into furious water battling chaos, spraying each other while screaming arguments. Aldar dripped water as he stared ahead. And there was Flora, cheeks blazing red, arms stretched toward the water like she was begging it to answer her. Flora's clothes were soaked as she and Aldred splashed water everywhere. And then Tawaku and Aisha started dousing each other too. Flora's hair and clothes clung with water, her face burning red, and she splashed Aldred again and again while laughing at the top of her lungs. Aldred dipped his hands into the water and swore he'd spray it too. Then he suddenly froze mid-move and turned bright red in a heartbeat. Flora shot her arms out in shock, staring at her soaked clothes, then burst into an awkward, loud scream while the boy's shoes just kept planted on the shore. Tawaku shook out his clothes and muttered that Aisha lets herself get carried away even though they're not a couple, while Audrita held a spare set of clothes and grinned. Tawaku grabbed a towel and started wiping his head, while Aldred's cheeks burned as he glanced at the girls sitting on the log. Aisha stared at Flora and rubbed the back of her head, and Flora pressed her hands over her drenched body. Aldred strode up to the girls and shoved a towel into each of their hands, and when Aisha wrapped her head with one, she snapped her gaze away and thanked Aldred for the rescue. Aisha stared at Flora's beautiful legs and blurted out praise. Right as Aldred was handing her a towel, Flora snapped it over herself and screamed that Aisha's legs were way prettier. Aldred instantly turned beet red and fixed his eyes on the floor in mortified embarrassment. Aldred went beet red and choked out a silent scream as he passed the towel to Flora because he couldn't stop staring at her legs. Flora glanced down in embarrassment, then thanked him for his help. Tawaku clutched a fishing rod and announced, "I'm going fishing." Aisha grinned and said they'd slide over to join the guys a little later. Aldred's heart pounded with worry. Aisha was drenched to the bone, but Aisha flashed a smile and told him, "Don't fret." And all around them, the shoreline was littered with rocks. The guys huddled on the river's stone bank when the fish finally started snapping at the line. Aldred blurted that he'd already reeled in his sixth, and Towaku shot back with a grimace that he'd only gotten 3 and it just wasn't fair, while a fish churned beneath the water. Fish schools swirled through the water as the guys stood on the shore and hauled them in, while the wide river stretched on, boxed in by thick, dark forest. Aldred snapped his teeth back into action, and Tawaku exploded in rage. Then Aldred stared into the bucket of wriggling fish and said, "We caught enough to feed the entire village." Aldred clutched a bucket like a trophy and bragged that he'd caught loads of fish. Then Towaku snapped in pure anger and refused to answer. Right then, the girls marched up to them, expecting the guys to be done fishing already. The girls closed in on Aldred and cheered over his perfect catch, while Towaku fumed off to the side. Then his fishing rods yanked and started twitching, and suddenly he was reeling the line in fast. Aldred and the girls stepped back, cheering Tawaka on as hard as they could, and Tawaku started jerking the fishing rod and yelling at the top of his lungs. A huge fish leapt from the river, but when Tawaka grabbed it, it was tiny, so the moment turned into praise for Tawaka's skills. Aisha stared at Toku and warned that the fish would squirm free and slip right back into the river, and Toku shot her a furious glare as threats poured out of him. The crew huddled together over the fish, trading ideas on what they could cook next. Then Aisha kicked things off, calling out Tawaku for that failed catch, and soon everyone broke into pairs to hash out their plans. Tawaku stared at Aldred, totally baffled. Why was he messing with that fish like it mattered? Then Aldred jumped in and started explaining, step by step, how to cook fish the right way. The guys stared at Aldred in shock. He clearly didn't expect all that attention, and embarrassment hit him hard. Then they snapped into action, fired up a cook fire, and started grilling fish while someone called out for Aisha from right behind her. The apron-clad girl jabbed a finger at Aisha and snapped that she was right back out there seeking work again. Then she launched into her full speech. A stranger's eyes widened as she stared at Aldred. Then she dropped into a bow and introduced herself as Aina, Aisha's sister, and Aldred quickly told her his own name. Tawaku told Aisha she had to get back to work, and Aisha glanced at the fish cooking, grinning, saying she'd eat first and start working right away. Then she immediately began hunting for the guys. Meanwhile, inside this kingdom of Avalon, a stunning palace erupted. Someone was screaming at the top of his lungs. It was the blonde man, furious over Aldrich's disappearance. The dark-haired man gulped down the king's screams and flashed back to what Aldred's companions had whispered. where he could find him. Then he kept pushing the conversation to track Aldred down. With a sharp, menacing glare, the king folded his legs and snapped that Aldred's rest was over. He had to march back to the kingdom right now. The dark-haired man bowed low and said he understood. Aldred, Flora, and Toku each grabbed a stick of fried fish and dove in. Then the guys chimed in together, one voice saying the fish was so damn tasty. The two sisters kept eating that fish in total silence, and Ina whispered that this batch didn't turn bitter. It was downright delicious. Then Aisha started echoing Aldred's words about how to cook it right, and Tawaku's eyes widened at how clever she was. By the campfire, the guys lounged around and Tawaku leaned in and told Aldred to start selling fish. Then he kicked back and started passing out fruits to everyone. Flora bit into the fruit and instantly blushed, while Tawaku squeezed the juice straight over the fried fish. Then the two sisters kept going, savoring every last bite. Aldred gripped the fish in his hands and stared at the guys' bright, happy faces, and right there he decided today was magic, and he wanted every day to feel just like this. The guys sat on logs, tore into leftover fish, and lounged like they had all the time in the world. Backpacks and empty wooden buckets tossed beside them, while behind it all, the river glittered and the dense forest towered in silence. A huge bird tore through the sky, then an arrow slammed into it, and it erupted in a piercing scream as it flung its massive wings wide. An arrow is headed for the bird and it plummets to the ground. Karina bolts over, scoops it up, and blurts that Aldred is a total shooting master. Aldred then raises a finger and says, he just caught the wind moving right. Aldred smirked and said he'd seen enough of life to know Karina probably hadn't, because he insisted that only experience and hard work would save her, while Karina slipped off to grab fruit and Aldred stayed behind, hooking up carcasses to a tree like a butcher with a mission. The guy skidded to a stop by the bushes, and then Karina dropped this bomb: a real hunter is always going to catch a woman's eye because, yeah, she's right. Aldred's face went bright red with embarrassment. Aldred grinned, sheepish as ever, while the guys snatched berries and started jawing about love affairs until they trekked back to the village, and the kids ran out to greet them. The kids leaned in, desperate to see what Karina snagged this time she'd caught a rabbit. Aldred warned that rabbits bolt like lightning, and Karina snapped back that it'll be decided by whoever brings down birds in midair. The guys erupted with excitement. Then the kids got distracted by the fruits they'd picked, and Aldred spun around and walked off from the guys on the way. He ran into a girl and pressed the herbs he'd gathered into her hands, and she lit up and thanked Aldred for helping her. The kids slipped away from the guys and started waving goodbye, and Karina glanced at Aldred like, looks like you finally got used to them, while Aldred shot a wave right back. Sunbeams spilled over the village as Aldred shoved the wooden windows open and stared out, soaking in the gorgeous view only his window could frame. Aldred's room was packed with a big bed, a closet, a bedside table, and even a little chair. Then Aldred and every villager rushed to the well to haul water. Aldred finally made it back home, and the table was loaded with all kinds of food he dug in, chewed happily, and couldn't stop smiling. Then Aldred found himself on the street, and right there he ran into Flora. Then the guys stepped up, greeted each other, and jumped into harvesting, talking nonstop about vegetables until they started trying on. Aldred faced Flora, and they kicked off a brand new plan for the day. Then Aldred admitted he wanted to develop the land near his home. And as Flora listened with full focus, a sharp blush suddenly flooded her face. The girl shot her hands up, fists clenched, and declared she'd help Aldred till the soil right by his house. Aldrich nodded along with Flora's idea, and the moment he agreed, Flora's eyes lit up. She grinned, promised she'd beg her father for tools, then bolted home, while Aldrich just stood there, realizing how insanely amazing she really was. The guys ended up right by Aldrich's house with tools scattered at their feet, and they started hashing out where they'd kick things off. The guys slipped on gloves, grabbed gardening tools, and argued excitedly about planting radishes first, then carrots and cabbage, while Flora beamed with a sweet smile. Flora dropped into a squat and started hacking away at the grass, and right beside her, Aldred did the same. He stared at the gardening tool, then flicked his eyes to Flora and suddenly started mirroring her every move. Flora glanced at Aldred and told him he'd mastered the instrument, and Aldred immediately looked down, mortified because in his mind, he'd learned it all just by watching Flora. The guys hunted down grass in wicker baskets, then leaned in and grilled Aldred about his old life, while Aldred kept flipping between a shaky grin and quiet, nervous muttering about the monsters he'd seen. Aldred's nerves screamed as he realized he'd almost spilled everything about the fight. Then Flora, right behind him, muttered to herself. Aldred whipped around and demanded, "Flora, are you okay?" Flora snapped to her feet, grabbed another instrument, and then blurted that if a monster showed up, she'd bolt in full panic. The guys scrambled up too, itching to start tearing into the land. Aldred swung his arm and slammed into the ground. The guys right there kept battering the earth, and Aldred wiped the sweat off his face as he pushed on. Aldred dragged his hand across his face and stared at the freshly plowed field while Flora stood beside him, clutching a little vessel, praising him for every ounce of work he'd put in. Aldrich snatched a sip from Flora's mug, And right then she started laying into me about how Aldrich should use the plowing tool way more correctly. A blush rose as she broke into a huge smile, then Aldrich stared, thinking how great it would be to have a girl like that by his side, and how he might still live a life of honor. Aldred burned through every day hunting and toiling in the fields then. Little by little, the fruits finally began to sprout, and the guys kept grinding, working the ground and fertilizing the harvest. Aldred stared at the sprouts, while Flora gripped a basket of plants and told him this was the one mandatory step that forces him to hold off on harvesting. Aldred sat in the field, hands deep in the plants, and realized he'd basically spent his whole life stuck working that ground. Flora jumped in and helped him cultivate the field, and the two of them laughed and played the whole time until they carried a basket of grass together and reaped their very first radish harvest. Aldred was out in the fields when Flora slid up with a basket in her hands and greeted him with a bright smile, and that's when the guys kicked off a talk about the harvest and how they'd help each other out. Flora's cheeks burned. She looked away and shoved the basket into Aldred's hands. Then she blurted that maybe he should join her for lunch. Aldred snapped back and agreed right away. The guys decided to head straight for the flower field and grab lunch there. Then they just stood among the blooms, soaking in the view and bragging about how gorgeous it was. The guys stared at the flowers and started debating. While Flora glanced away and slipped to sit beside the bushes, Aldred shot her a confused look, totally clueless about what she was planning. Flora gripped a handful of flowers and told everyone the truth. Some blossoms are made to be eaten, and others are used to heal. Aldred stared at the flowers, soaking up every word Flora said, then rubbed his chin like he was plotting his next move. Aldred couldn't forget the girl's legs and her dress. Then he blurted out that 9 years ago, someone had already told him about it, and the moment he heard that crash, fear snapped in his chest. Flora crashed to the ground and clawed toward her basket, while Aldred snatched it up and stared straight at her tear-soaked face. Aldred grabbed a handkerchief and started wiping the tears streaming down Flora's cheeks, telling her she'd have to hang in there for a little while. Flower petals swirled through the air as the guy stood there, and Aldred stared at Flora's face. Shock hit him hard because her eyes were shining with fresh tears. Aldred leaned in, studying Flora's face like he was cracking a secret. Then Flora's cheeks flamed harder, and she opened her mouth ready to finally blurt something out. The guys stood there, exchanging tense looks, then flower petals started spinning through the air, and out of nowhere, Aldred's stomach let out a loud rumble. Flora slapped a hand over her face and burst into laughter. Aldred went red and scratched the back of his head, thinking hard. Then he apologized for the whole misunderstanding. Flora strode forward with a bright smile and declared it was already lunchtime for them to go, while flower petals swirled and danced all around her. Aldred trailed behind her, staring at the petals right on cue. His stomach growled. Flora started to speak, but Aldred cut in fast, like, "Not now, maybe later, when the moment hits." Flora's cheeks burned, her lips trembled, and she looked one tear away from falling. Then Aisha shot her a suspicious stare and said, Flora still hadn't told him anything today either. Flora sat with the other girls at a table, the tea set right in front of them. Then she dropped her hands toward her feet, shrank herself smaller and smaller, and left Aisha slumped opposite her. Aisha stared across the table, pressed her hands together, and shot Flora a look full of pure displeasure. Flora stared at the tea set and answered Aisha's question with a confident yes, and Aisha immediately realized her best friend had come to her for advice. Aisha introduced Aldred and then glanced at Flora's class pants. Then her thoughts raced. Aldred liked Flora, but her shyness stopped her from ever admitting it. Aisha stared at Flora's puzzled face and couldn't help thinking, Flora's always so kind, so tuned in to everyone else. And yeah, she's gorgeous too. Still, Aisha could see the pain underneath, because Flora can't bring herself to admit her feelings to Aldrin. Flora's cheeks flared darker as embarrassment crushed her, especially when Aisha casually dropped that she'd liked Aldred 9 years ago. Aisha slumped against the table and let out a heavy sigh, because no matter how much she tried, she still didn't know every detail of what happened back then. Yet those guys had already crossed paths 9 years ago. Aisha couldn't stop picturing how the guys acted around each other. Then it hit her Flora was only 9 while Aldred was 18, and that's exactly when Flora fell head over heels for him. Aisha stared at Flora and said that Aldred himself still remembered her from that meeting. Then Flora dropped her gaze and started fidgeting in her chair, smiling like she couldn't help it. Flora shot back that Aldred had just remembered something from what happened 9 years ago, and Aisha's shout cut through the room because she couldn't believe Flora got it. Flora said she'd warned Aldrich about the flowers, and Aldrich shot back that he'd already heard it from someone else. Then Aisha snapped, fists clenched, yelling that everything was going perfectly. Flora slapped her hands to her face, blurted out how thrilled she was that Aldred had remembered her, and then the tears came. Aisha's cheeks flared a pink as she slapped her hand to her face. Then she burst out that Flora had been secretly thinking about Aldred for all 9 long years, and Aisha couldn't help but grin, saying Flora was playing it unbelievably smart. Flora clapped her hands to her face and spun her head around, then burst out that she was so happy she couldn't even think straight. Aldred kept staring. Flora kept talking to Aisha, and then Aldred wiped her tears with his handkerchief just inches apart, the moment buzzing with excitement. until Aisha's face twisted in panic. Aisha snapped her hands over her face and thought Flora was completely hopeless. Then Flora blurted in a trembling voice that she just couldn't have done anything else. Flora clasped her fingers together, and the girls leaned in as they hashed out everything about Aldred while the cups on the table sat dry like the drinks had already run out. Flora shot up her finger and said she and Aldred always hang out there then. Suddenly, her thoughts hit, and she looked away. Flora blushed and mumbled that they'd accidentally bumped into each other while working. And when Aisha stared at her, drool practically spilled from her mouth like she couldn't believe it. Aisha slammed her palm on the table and roared that Flora was still just a kid, and Flora gulped, asking nervously if there was anything else she could do. Aisha pressed her finger to her chin, thinking hard then. She poked Flora and ordered her to head straight to Aldred, snuggle up to him, and spill her feelings. Flora clapped her hands over her face and let out a scream of pure embarrassment. She couldn't believe she'd messed up that badly. Aisha leaned in and asked, "So then, Flora, what can you possibly offer right now?" Flora snapped a hand to her face, stunned when Aisha warned that if she didn't move right now, another girl would swoop in and take Aldred away. Aisha snatched a cup in her hands, and the girls kept chewing on Aldred how he'd make a painfully bad groom while Aisha leaned in and told Flora to confess to Aldred. Tears welled up in Flora's eyes, and with a shaky voice she admitted she was painfully shy because she couldn't afford to lose even this current relationship. Aisha stared at the flowers, lost in thought, and realized Flora should find a way to say what she's feeling for herself. Then it hit her she could use flowers to express emotions, just like Flora's father once did. Flora slapped her hand to her face and yelled, full of fire, that it was a brilliant idea. And Aisha rushed in to lift her spirits, reminding her that other girls could snatch Aldred away. Flora's cheeks flared even redder, and she shot back that she got it all. She'd go grab those flowers for Aldred, hand them over, and then finally spill her feelings, while Aisha just watched with a warm smile. Meanwhile, Aldred and Karina marched through the forest, hemmed in by thick, lush bushes on one side and scattered tables and tree stumps on the other. The guys caught a weird sound, froze in place, and stared. Aldred dragged his feet forward, looking worn out, while Karina stood right behind him. Aldred scratched his face and muttered that the forest felt totally off today. Karina shot back that the animals were way too quiet. Then clatter, clatter. Hooves thundered in, and Aldred snapped fully alert. Aldred grabbed his bow and a fistful of arrows, and Karina mimicked every move. Then the guy began lining up his shot, talking fast about how 2 deer were creeping in from the west. Branch-horned deer burst from the bushes, and right as Aldred and Karina spotted them, they loosed their arrows. Those arrows slammed into the animals' heads, and the creatures crumpled straight to the ground. Then the guys lowered their bows, staring down at the still bodies. The guys trudged to the fallen animals, arguing over how legendary the hunt was. Then they finally turned around, ready to head back to the village. Out of nowhere, someone burst from behind the bushes, Karina's teacher, grinning like crazy while Karina totally froze, shocked beyond belief and terrified. Karina balled her fists tight and blurted that the bear looked like it was closing in on her, and the man just scratched his head, telling her her fears weren't for nothing. That man flashed the guys a scrap of wool, and the moment they saw it, they started talking about the bear tracks they'd found nearby. Then they agreed they had to round up more hunters and spread the news. Karina stared at the guys, her nerves screaming, and they quickly soothed her. Then the men exchanged looks as the teacher warned, "Bears don't always march into villages, but they can still show up at the flower garden." The teacher gently stroked Karina's head, and Aldred's mind raced, sure. They might need help to handle the village, but the guild is miles away, so Aldred knew he had to stay on his guard himself. The teacher ruffled Karina's head and burst into laughter, and Aldred, caught up in imagining a whole flower field, looked away. Then the thought slammed into him. He had to shield the villagers from that bear, no matter what it took. Aldred stared into the forest with heavy eyes, then realized he'd have to grab the sword again, so the guys packed up and headed back to the village. Karina's teacher barked that he'd stop the elder in his tracks, told Karina to sound the south, and ordered Aldred to warn the folks in the flower field. Then the guy spun and sprinted off in every direction to carry out their orders. Aldred sprinted past the vegetable field straight for the village right when the kids were busy harvesting. The moment they spotted him, they cheered and peppered him with questions about hunting. Aldred shot out of there, sprinting past the children so hard dust erupted into the air. Then he stormed up to the man and blurted that a monster had crawled out of the mountains and he'd come straight to warn everyone in the flower garden. The blonde man screamed at the top of his lungs, and then him and Aldred started grilling the monster what it was and how badly it could wreck the villagers. Fast, Aldred bolted off to find more people and warn them before it struck. The blonde man fired off warnings about the monster, and Karina's teacher was right there telling the villagers the same terrifying truth while panic spread through everyone like wildfire. Aldred blinked into a field, then met a woman with children, and warned them about the danger. Right after that, he snapped into action, roaring at the top of his lungs, yelling for anyone who might be hiding in the flower garden. The flower garden was empty, no soul in sight, so the guys drifted until they landed at Toku's place. Toku stood there with a bow drawn, aiming like he meant business, while the guys argued over the red bear. Aldred just watched, smiling as Toku practiced. Tawaku couldn't stop shaking with nerves, and Toke grinned, saying he could make bows though his aim was still a disaster. So he drew back and loosed an arrow straight at the target. Topake's arrow thunk it into a tree trunk, and Topakiku just froze locked in place, not moving a muscle while the guys stared for a long, awkward stretch, all of them going silent. Tawaku snapped his eyes shut, breathed out like he was fighting through pain, and swore he was already better than before while Aldred stood off to the side, drenched in sweat, and the rest of the guys leaned toward the target, trading archery tips like it was game time. Aldred chatted with a girl and an elderly woman when Albus suddenly tore across the scene, yelling that he still couldn't find Flora. The village streets sat empty and silent. No souls in sight. Albus and Alder stared at each other and admitted they hadn't seen Flora in ages. Maybe she'd slipped off to the vineyards. Albus stared at the ground, frustration burning, and blurted that he was praying the plants would finally grow in the vineyards. Then his face sank even lower. Face sank. Albus stared down and muttered that he prayed the same nightmare wouldn't strike again like it did 9 years ago. Then Aldrin tried to speak, but right then he suddenly got called out by someone. Aisha sprinted toward the guys, tears streaming as she raced up and grabbed Aldrin's hands, fighting for breath and trying to get the words out. Aldrin suddenly sensed something was off with Flora, and Aisha clung to him like she was terrified. Then Aldred pushed through the panic, trying to figure out what had Flora so rattled. Aisha couldn't steady her shaking breath, her cheeks burned red, and hot tears spilled down her face. She only choked out, "Aldred and Flora." Then Aldred just stared, frozen in fright. Fear slammed into Aldred like a wave. His whole body started to tremble as he snapped his gaze upward in panic beside him. He clutched tearful Aisha's hands, while Alba stood right next to her, trying to quiet her shaking breaths. Over the thick green crowns of the trees, a sky-wide view opened up, towering mountains stretching into the distance. And out there somewhere you could hear hooves pounding like a warning. A whole herd of deer scattered. One was missing a horn while we tore through the rocks, sprinting from stone to stone as someone chased us, and the deer's mouth hung open, drooling everywhere. A one-horned deer plummeted off a high stone and crashed onto the ground. Then the whole rock shuddered, split apart, and shattered into tiny pieces. A massive monster exploded from behind the rocks, jaws wide and fangs bared, and it charged after a one-horned deer. The monster lifted a clawed paw and slammed it down, snap. Its jaw clamped shut, and the deer bolted through the trees, weaving between the thick trunks. A deafening blast tore through the area, dust erupted like a shockwave in the sky, and the deer finally crumpled as shattered tree trunks and jagged stone boulders burst into the air while fervor and rock fragments scattered everywhere. A deer lay pinned to the ground. Tree trunks and jagged rocks hacked around it. While a monster's drool dripped from its mouth, then it slowly started to pry its own mouth open. Somebody was pushing through the forest when the monster snapped to attention, sharpening his hearing as if every leaf had a secret. Then he lurched up, prowling the area, while drool and blood slid down his muzzle. A black monster burst onto a giant boulder, dug in its claws, and stared across the area, then spotted someone right nearby. The monster stared down at Flora right there, at the cliff's edge, sitting on her knees and calmly picking herbs like she hadn't noticed him, with a little basket sitting beside her. Aldred stumbled into his own house, and the unease wouldn't let up. He cracked the door open, stared at the bandage-wrapped sword, and muttered that he never imagined he'd touch a blade again. Aldred still remembered the moment he found Aisha sobbing. She screamed that Flora might be where the red bear appeared, and Aldred clenched his jaw, then started yanking the ribbon off his sword. Aldred sprinted through the forest, then tore across a sea of flowers, the sword thumping on his back, only now his body felt like dead weight, even as he pushed through the mountains hunting, and that still didn't even compare to the brutal training. Back when he was an adventurer, he had to hurry or everything would fall apart. Aldrich was sprinting through a sea of flowers, crushing blooms under every step, his face burning red. Teeth clenched hard like he couldn't afford to slow down. As darkness crawled over Aldred, bright flower petals whirled through the air, and he sprinted hard because the truth hit him. He did not want to tangle with that monster, not ever. He'd come here to retire. Aldred gripped his sword tight, his cloak snapping in the wind, and with everything he'd begged for finally in his hands, the spark to keep fighting vanished from his heart. Aldred was still sprinting, sword still sheathed and biting at his back. Then a flickering light snapped on, and suddenly he swore he was gripping a blade in his own hands again. So what in the world was he doing at that place right now? Aldred still remembered Flora's smile as she looked at him, and he realized he wasn't just battling for a priceless place among friends, he was fighting to keep the ones he loved safe. To protect Flora no matter what. Aldred stared at the wild shifts in Flora's face and realized right there he'd fallen hard. So he swore to protect her at any cost. Then he slammed to a halt and started choking on breath. Aldred halted, stared into the pitch-dark thicket, and tightened his grip on the sword sheathed at his back, then fought to catch his breath and pushed through the tangled, dense shrubs. Sweat broke out across Aldred's face, and he whipped his head around, jittery with worry. Thick, looming bushes crowded him on all sides. Aldred caught a heart-rending scream and pictured a terrified Flora freezing on the spot, clutching several flowers in her hands. Then heat rushed to his face as fear took over. A clawed monster with a gaping mouth lunged after Flora, Swung a paw at her, she crumpled to the ground and shielded herself with her hand. Then Aldrin snapped into view, sprinted at the beast, and yelled for Flora to duck. Flora obeyed Aldrin. She crumpled to the ground and threw her hands over her head. Aldred sprang between her and the monster, then slammed it with a bone-crushing blow. Aldred's punch slammed the monster's neck, and the thing reeled, drool spilling from its mouth while Flora lay on the ground, and Aldred with his sword stood between the monster and the girl. Flora clutched her head, jerked upright, and stared at Aldred. Then he towered right in front of her. The monster's smile cracked as rage flared, and Aldred asked how the girl was holding up, but Flora blurted his name in pure terror before staying planted on the ground. The monster's rage exploded as it opened its mouth and stared down the armed Aldred. Flora's face crumpled in tears, fear shaking her as she looked at Aldred. Then he snapped at her that this place was deadly and Flora had to run, right now. Aldred's face turned crimson. He froze on the spot. And when he caught Flora's tear-streaked expression, it yanked him back to a tiny girl with the same tear-soaked face. Aldred still remembered that blonde girl standing there, smiling and thanking him, and then arms full carrying her across the field as her stories about flowers kept echoing in his head. Aldred stared at Flora cowering on the ground, his heart racing as he wondered if she was the girl he'd saved 9 years ago, and just as the monster opened its mouth to lunge, Flora snapped her gaze away, visibly startled. Flora shrieked Aldred's name as the monster's clawed paw hung over him. Aldred snapped out of the way, jammed his sword in front of himself, and the beast slammed into it while one paw clamped down on the blade. The monster reared up on its hind legs and latched onto Aldred's sword, and Aldred yanked it under control, every nerve in him vibrating with pure tension. Then he snapped that Flora had to get out now, that he'd be fine. But Flora tried to argue back. Aldred grinned at Flora and told her he'd never lose to the Red Bear because she still remembers what happened 9 years ago, while Flora just stared ahead, completely stunned. As Aldred finished his words, Flora's expression snapped to life, blush spreading fast and happy tears instantly shining in her eyes. Flora, clutching the flowers, bolted for her life, while Aldred and the monster grappled and strained to keep each other from moving. Then Aldred snarled, gritted his teeth, and finally felt his sword come alive. He swung it hard, and the monster stumbled back. The monster paced in tight circles, baring its fangs at every turn. Then Aldred yanked his sword hand aside, and a blinding light burst out of the blade. Aldred crouched in a fighting stance, and his sword flared brighter by the second. Flora clutched behind a tree, staring in pure amazement, while the monster lunged at him. Then Aldred surged forward and smashed back, trading blows in a relentless attack. The monster bared its teeth and lunged at Aldred with that clawed paw. Then Aldred slashed back, and with one clean strike, the paw shattered into pieces. The monster stared at its own paw, and shock hit like lightning. Its body parts started dropping to the ground piece by piece. Aldred planted his feet in a fighting stance, sword gripped tight. Flora's mouth gaped wide in disbelief. Aldred snapped into a fighting stance and launched himself at the monster, and right away bright lights exploded around them as the creature screamed like it was falling apart. After a while, the monster crumpled to the ground and tree trunks and leaves rained down beside his body while Aldred stood over it, sword clenched in both hands. Aldred watched his sword's glow fade to nothing. Then he slid it into its sheath behind his back, thinking that if Mono poured into the blade, it could sharpen its powers enough to skewer even a dragon and punch through a giant's brutal, hard scales. Aldred's cheeks went warm and Flora burst into his arms, her face blazing red, tears spilling from her eyes. The guys stood toe-to-toe and Aldred shot, "Are you okay?" Flora admitted she was a little scared, and Aldred swept in and saved her. The guys trudged through the flower field in dead silence, totally baffled. Aldred stared at Flora, shocked to realize the girl he'd saved 9 years ago was her, and the memory hit him so hard it felt unreal. Aldred's cheeks flared red, because he knew Flora wasn't just a friend to him, but the words wouldn't come. So he froze in panic while Flora stood to the side, staring straight ahead. Flora halted in a blooming flower field, fixed her eyes on a tree, and stared like she couldn't believe what she was seeing, while leaves and petals swirled through the air around the gurus. He slammed on the brakes in a flower field beside a tree, and Flora's mind flashed back to something that happened 9 years ago. Aldred admitted it had only just come back to him, and he apologized. Flora snapped her eyes shut and started spilling how she tried to wipe that whole incident from her mind, but it just wouldn't let go, and the moment Aldred opened his mouth, Flora cut him off mid-sentence. Flora's cheeks flared red as she broke into a smile and thanked Aldred for saving her, and Aldred just laughed while rubbing his nose. Then he stared in shock at Flora, who stood right in front of him, clutching a flower in her hands. Tears streaked down Flora's face as the wind whipped her hair around, and then she smiled because for 9 whole years, she'd been in love with Aldred. Aldred's face flushed red as he opened his mouth, then blurted out a shock he didn't expect. Flora shut her eyes and grinned like she already knew the outcome. Aldred wiped at his crying eyes, stunned, and wondered if her words could actually be true. Aldred snatched the flower from Flora's hands, and she leaned in to tell him, "Give this to the person you love, and fate will make sure you two end up together." Aldred grinned at Flora, and H blurted that he loved her right back. Flora's cheeks flared red, and tears instantly stung her eyes. Aldred clutched the flower Flora had given him and launched into an excited hug, and when Flora blinked in shock, she wrapped her arms around him right back. The guys stood shoulder to shoulder and crushed each other in a long hug, while tears poured down Flora's face and flower petals spun through the air like the world was cheering. Flora brushed Aldred's smiling face. Aldred touched Flora's flushed cheeks, and then they both lunged forward, reaching for each other. The guys dove into kisses right there in a dreamy flower field, with a giant tree towering beside them. Petals and leaves swirled through the air like the world was cheering. The guys finally rolled into the village, and the air smelled like fresh flowers tucked beside those low-rise buildings. Flora and Aldrin were surrounded by the villagers, who practically breathed out in relief that they were safe and sound. And then hand in hand, Aldrin and Flora strolled forward together. Albus spun around, panic snapping through him when a villager shouted that the others were back, so Albus, his wife, and Aisha raced out to meet them. And Aisha barreled in first. Aisha yanked Flora into a tight hug, tears streaking her face as she kept shouting Flora's name without stopping. Then Albus stared at the girls, stunned. Aldred snapped his gaze to the fallen girls. Terrified Flora and Aisha were sprawled on the ground, and Aisha clung to Flora's condition with shaking worry, apologizing for what she'd done. Then the two girls linked hands and pushed themselves back up. Flora stood right beside her parents as Albus insisted she wasn't really hurt, and Flora nodded along. Then the villagers surged forward, and everybody lit up with joy seeing the guys back. Flora clung to her mother while Albus rose with a warm grin. Aisha wiped tears off her face, and Aldred just stood there to the side, grinning like he was watching something unforgettable. In ancient days, the townsfolk swarmed Aldred and started thumping his back as one saying, loud and clear, that if he really dared to step into the danger zone for Flora, only Aldred had the right to choose. And Aldred kept thinking they had no clue about what came before in his past. Toaku clasped his hands, smiled, and declared everything was safe because of Aldred, who thanked him back for the praise before Toku stepped aside, talking about the monster that had attacked Flora. The moment the villagers clocked that Flora really got mauled by a red bear, everyone froze. Then a thick, gut-wrenching silence swallowed the whole place. Flora couldn't forget how Aldred clashed with the monster using his glowing sword. Then she snapped into the tail. The bear lunged at her, and Aldred stepped in, shielding her from the beast. The villagers started whispering with fear about Flora's past, but Flora shot back that Aldrin had already dealt with the monster, so everyone had nothing to worry about. And Tawaku and Aisha stared at the guys, stunned. Aldred shut his eyes and tore into the back pocket of his trousers, because of course he was a former adventurer. Then he pulled out the monster's fangs and claws and thrust them at the stunned inhabitants like proof. Karina's teacher grabbed the monster's claw with his own hand and started to study it. Then he blurted, "So how in the world did Aldred handle a monster this brutal all by himself?" Nobody had ever realized Aldred was this tough, and Aldred couldn't help wondering if he was fading out. The villagers went stone still, staring at Flora and Fright, while Fright flapped her hands and told them exactly how Aldred fought off that monster. Aldred stood off to the side, cheeks blazing with embarrassment, while Tawaku and Aisha hovered beside Flora. Then Karina shot up her finger and shouted that Aldred was seriously amazing, and her teacher backed her up. Aldred scratched his head like he was panicking, and Karina ripped into the kid with full-on swearing, while her teacher snapped that they had to go retrieve the red bear's body. Then Aldred blurted out that he'd go too. Karina's teacher shot a wink and told Aldred to rest, promising they'd handle everything. Then Aldred had to stay close to Flora. Karina stood beside me, smiling like an angel, while Aldred stared at Flora's flushed body. The teacher and Karina packed up and decided to move out, and the rest of the residents jumped in to help right away. Aldred and Flora's family even bowed a little in front of the residents, full of gratitude. Tawaku then pulled Aisha aside and urged her to come back, while Flora kept cheering Aisha on. Tawaku whipped around and started roasting Aisha, but Aisha stared him down and snapped that he should shut up. Then the girls linked hands and pumped each other up to keep going. Flora's cheeks flared red, then she grinned and told Aisha, "If you weren't here, I'd still be hoarding all of it for myself." Aisha and Toku grinned at Aldred and told him Flora would have to spill the stories to the guys in full detail. Then Aisha and Toku walked off, leaving Aldred and Flora to stick with Flora's parents, who decided they'd head out too. Flora stared at Aldred with sharp focus, and his cheeks flushed as he admitted today had been brutal, so Flora decided she'd better stay with her family. Flora's mom hooked her hand on her shoulder, grinned, and told Aldred to look after their daughter, while Albus flashed a smile and backed every word her wife said. Flora's face flared red after her parents' words landed, and Aldred snapped his head toward her in shock before a grin burst across his face. Flora snapped her head toward her parents, flung her arms wide, and roared that she had no clue what they were saying, while Aldrin just stepped aside. Flora's parents locked eyes, then burst into laughter as Aisha told them Flora didn't just wander off for any reason. She went into the forest for that flower and for the way it pops out from behind Aldrin. Aldred and Flora yanked themselves back in panic the moment Flora's parents announced their confession worked and that the guys were officially a couple. Flora froze, couldn't even get a word out from sheer embarrassment, while Aldred shot a terrified glance at the flower right behind him. Flora's mom clasped her hands and grinned as she told the guys they'd had a hard day so they could crash at Aldrich's house, and the moment those words hit, the guys froze in shock, staring at Flora's parents like they'd just seen a ghost. Startled, Aldred blurted out to Albus what those words could possibly mean, and the next second, Albus's eyes brimmed with happy tears as he said his girl had finally grown up and she'd be a bride before long. Aldred just stepped aside and turned even redder from pure embarrassment. Flora's parents marched up to Aldred and told him not to freak out. Calling him father-in-law was fine. Flora scrambled to quiet her own parents, but the moment it landed, Aldred's hands started to tremble. Flora and Aldred turned crimson with embarrassment and stared at each other. Then Flora's mom shoved her forward and practically ordered, "Aldred, take care of our daughter." Flora suddenly found herself tucked in Aldred's arms while the kids huddled side by side, staring at her parents with wide, puzzled eyes as the two waved and clutched hands like it was the most natural thing in the world. Aldred and Flora froze in place and clung to each other, cheeks burning with embarrassment, while behind them low-rise buildings and scruffy shrubs stretched out along the street. Flora and Aldred stared at each other with shaking nerves. Then Aldred finally cracked the silence and said they could go home. Flora nodded right along, and as the sky stretched over the village, fluffy clouds drifted like they were cheering them on. The boys headed to Aldred's house shoulder to shoulder, and the whole place felt eerily still. Aldred swung the door open for Flora, grinning like nothing could go wrong. She just stood there, quiet as a statue, staring straight ahead. Before stepping into the houses, Aldred turned to Flora and declared, "From now on, my home is always open to you. Come anytime, no hesitation." Flora's face flushed red as she stared at him, completely caught off guard. Flora's cheeks warmed as she smiled and said she got it. Then Flora and Aldred stepped inside, Aldred still gripping the door handle. The girl leaned in and swore that this house would soon be theirs, both of them. Flora shot Aldred a bright smile and told him she'd whip up some tea, then urged him to finally rest, so she kicked off her outdoor shoes and slid into her slippers. Flora dashed into the kitchen, filled with clanging pans and pots, grabbed a clear jar of dried leaves, and then leaned over the teapot only to find even more jars of food lined up right beside it. Flora shut her eyes and kept brewing tea, grinning the whole time, while Aldred slid into the chair across from her and stared back with a warm smile. The kettle started roaring on the stove, and Flora kept stirring the tea mix like it mattered. Then she grabbed the dried fruits and snapped them into pieces inside the glass pot, ready to brew. Flora yanked a kettle of boiling water over to the cup and started brewing tea, then tossed in fresh mint leaves like a secret ingredient. Its sweet steam hit Aldred and he shut his eyes, savoring every breath of that comforting scent. Flora flashed a grin and said she was almost finished. Then she poured the sweets from a paper bag onto a plate, strained the tea, and filled the cups to serve. Flora grabbed the tea set, carried it to the table where Aldred sat, and set it down with a smile. She said she brewed it with apples and mint. Aldred thanked her, picked up the cup, and started drinking right away. Aldred's cheeks flared with pure joy, and he started glowing as he raved that the tea tasted absolutely amazing across from him. Flora slipped into her seat, cheeks pink, smiling shyly while she clutched her cup in both hands. Flora shut her eyes, lifted the cup to her lips, and let the tea wash over her, its heat rising in a steady steam as she savored every sip. Flora snatched the tea and offered Aldred a refill, and when he stuck his cup out, he nodded yes and agreed. Then Aldred cradled the cup in both hands and beamed at Flora, even as she worried she might be doing something wrong. Aldred's cheeks burned as she flashed a bright smile and insisted she was doing everything right, because at this moment, she couldn't be happier. Flora grinned and stared straight at Aldred, and then Aldred's ears shot red with full-on embarrassment. There's still tea sitting in the cups, and the guys keep cooking side by side in the same kitchen, with a bunch of different plates piled on the table. Every second is pure fun. They kept talking clear past sunset, Flora clutching a fork in her hands, laughing her head off with Aldred. Then the whole crew jumped into dishwashing, and just like that, night swallowed the world while bright stars lit up the sky. Aldred and Flora sat at an empty table, staring at the floor in pure embarrassment, saying nothing until a ribbon of flowers was tied on Flora's head. Aldred shot a glance up at Flora and she matched his look. Then both of them fell silent for a while, but something in Aldred eased and a heavy smile crept in. Later, he finally called her name and Flora froze with fear. Aldred blurted that he wanted to take a bath with Flora, and she shot up from her chair, screaming that she got it all before marching off to sleep in the bedroom. In that frozen room, she planted her hands on the table and fired back Aldred's own words about the bath, right down to the idea that the body needed to stay clean. Aldred snapped that he was sweating today, so he was ready to wash up. Flora nodded, then promised she'd head to the bathroom right after him. Aldred shot his hand out toward Flora and said, "Nope, we're going together, to the bathroom." Her face flared red. The guys wound up in the bathroom, and Flora blurted out face-burning that the bathtub still wasn't ready, while Aldred gripped a basket and promised that his magic would fix it fast. Flora slapped her hands to her flaming red face. Aldred tapped his own face, admitted he was embarrassed too, then said that if two people bathed separately, it would take forever. Flora stared at him, stunned. Flora clutched her chest as Aldred strode up to her. Then she dropped her eyes to the floor and turned her back on him without a word. Flora shot a glare at Aldred, told him she agreed with every word, and her face still burned red. Flora stood with her back to Aldred as he hooked a finger into her corset and yanked the thread. Then heat flooded her cheeks. She spun around, started shouting his name at the top of her lungs. Flora clutched her chest, stared down, shut her eyes, and slowly tugged the button on her dress open. Flora's whole body burned with embarrassment. She yanked open her corset and realized she was only wearing a shirt, her blazing red face hiding under her hair, while Aldred suddenly found himself totally naked and spun around to stare at her. Flora clung to her chopper, one strap slipping off her shoulder like it was trying to betray her, and Aldred closed in both of them, blushing hard with pure embarrassment. He grinned and asked if she was okay, and without even looking at him, Flora just nodded back. Aldred shot his hand toward Flora's shoulder, brushing off another strap like it was a problem he couldn't stand. Flora snapped her eyes shut, mortified, then dropped her hands to the bottom. Flora's shirt slid off her body and clattered onto the floor, and she immediately scrambled to cover herself with her hands. She glanced away and snapped at Aldred that he better not stare. Flora clutched her own body with trembling hands as her loose hair spilled around her. Then after a beat, she glanced at Aldred with pure, fearful hesitation. Flora's eyes light up as she talks about how magical objects are unreal and how they can fill a whole bathtub with steaming hot water in a flash. Two kids sit in the same bath together, fully submerged, staring at each other like, wait, what? The guy just shrugs and thinks it's crazy, convenient, and cheap. Like he's got plenty of stuff like this on hand. Then Flora blurts that she'd happily take a bath at least every single day. The silence after that says everything. Still plopped in the hot bathroom, the young man can't help it. Heat rushes to his face and embarrassment hits harder, his cheeks burning red as he snaps his eyes toward the girl sitting beside him. Flora just stares into the water, hair veiling her face, while the girl's cheeks burn red and water drips off her face and hands. She's so embarrassed to sit that close to the main character that she can't even speak. Both of them sit side by side, dead worried. And when the guy glances at his companion, confusion hits his face. His mouth parts like he's about to blurt something. He whips around toward Flora and asks if she wants to sit closer. And the second he says it, she starts trembling right away, scrambles her expression, blushes harder than ever, and pretends she never heard his offer. Then the main character takes matters into his own hands, scooting right up beside the girl, and she jerks away on instinct, yet Aldred just grins like he's perfectly calm, making it crystal clear he isn't about to let Flora go. He snatches the girl by her right shoulder and yanks her into his space. Telling her to quit acting so timid, Flora lets out a sharp squeal, but she clings to the boy anyway, yelling that she's way too close to Aldred, still rattled, still uneasy. The main character slips his hand into hers, steadies her with a gentle grip, and tosses out a rhetorical question like it's finally time to rinse away all that foam and soap. While the girl doesn't fight back, just offers her palm to him. Flora's face burns with embarrassment. She clenches her fists, shuts her eyes tight, and her cheeks flare even hotter, while her voice shakes as she swears she'll get the guys back herself. And Aldrin doesn't stop her, he just tilts an eyebrow like he's silently asking, really? Fresh out of the bath, the guy and the girl slide over and sit side by side. He grabs a stool, spins around, and shoots a quick look over his shoulder at Flora. Snagging a towel, the girl starts rubbing the guy's back, and he hunches forward just a little. While Flora rubs the young man's back without a clue, his face heats up and his cheeks blaze red, but she never notices instead. She beams and keeps working at foaming the main character's back like it's her mission. Her eyes flare with joy, and she studies the guy's body like it's a discovery. Then she tucks in close, feels Aldridge's shoulders, and blurts out that Aldo-san is insanely muscular. Flora shoots closer to the guy's back, brushes that soft skin with her fingers, and rubs against him, then stays totally silent. He hisses through his teeth, and his eyes blow wide with shock because Aldred is mortified as Flora presses up and snuggles in. She digs her fingers into her back again and again, like it's an accident. Like she can't help it because she has zero idea what the hero is about to do in response. The boy squints like he's fighting for his life, forcing himself barely to look anywhere but Flora's body. And the moment it hits me, my own thoughts turn painfully awkward. She spots the huge tremor shaking Aldo's body, grins while staring at his soapy back, and asks if the main character really feels that good. Then he stammers back that, yeah, it feels amazing, scrambling to hide the heat flooding his cheeks. The girl grabs the basin beside her and dumps the water right onto the guy's back, rinsing off every trace of soap and foam. Then she's done, and she tells the hero to get up and turn around to face her. The young man hops off his stool and lets the girl press in close as she rubs him down while Flora wipes her chest with careful strokes. Then the hero's entire body is instantly swallowed by foam again. With those slender hands, the girl pumps the towel up and down her chest, and the foam thickens as bubbles start to rise. Then it hits the young man's mind like a spark. He's seriously enjoying that soft touch. He feels totally awkward, sweat starts pouring down his face, and he can already predict what's about to happen next. She peels the towel away from the tender spot, freezes in shock, and drops her eyes while the young man snaps upright and blurts, "Stop!" Flora snaps her eyes wide in shock, then her cheeks blaze red. She shuts up and lets out a scream, and suddenly, everything clicks into place. She lunges away from the guy, shrieks, then whips around and blurts an apology, cheeks blazing because she honestly wasn't thinking anything bad at all. Meanwhile, he fires back with excuses, saying, "It's just a natural body reaction. Like, this is bound to happen." Pressing her lips together, the girl slowly reins in her panic and says her mom warned her about all this. She's still totally confused, but now it finally clicks. She knows what she's supposed to do. Those words make the main character snap with embarrassment. He stares at the girl, completely baffled. Because this is spiraling way too fast, he thinks he knows what Flora will do next. But he can't bring himself to stop her. Kneeling at his side, the main character's companion stares around like something doesn't add up. Uneasy, baffled. But she keeps going anyway because backing out now would be impossible. He blurts her name, trying to stop her, but she snaps back that things will get really messy if she doesn't get a little help with the problem that just blew up. With both hands, the girl grabs and presses, and the guy immediately starts trembling all over his body. The main character shuts his eyes tight. Sweat streaks down his cheeks, and his forehead flushes crimson as Flora scoots closer. The guy tightens his fists until his knuckles ache, while the girl in front of him drops to her knees. Quietly shushing, the main character pinches his lips together and draws his eyebrows tight toward the bridge of his nose like he can barely stand it. San can't stop staring her. Touch feels nothing like his own hands at all. His hands keep moving, sliding from the very start all the way to the finish. Then the hero lets out a breath of pure embarrassment, snaps his eyes open and fixes his gaze on the young maiden. He tells Flora to clench tighter on what she's holding and to speed every move up just a bit. She freezes, looks at him from the floor, blush creeping across her cheeks, then nods and says she finally knows how to act. With her hands gripping the long part of her body even tighter than before, she flings her arms around with raw intensity. "I don't have the strength to control myself." While everything's exploding around him, he clenches his jaw and decides he has to try the exact idea that just hit him. The main character clenches his once relaxed hand into a raging fist, whips around to Flora and demands she take this piece into her mouth. She gasps, parts her lips in shock like a startled duck, and stares back with blazing, glowing eyes. Flora cracks her mouth just a little, blasts that already scorching spot with her breath, then leans in and studies it closely. Then the girl parts those plump lips and starts to speak. Right as the main character's companion looks at her, an image of that guy flashes in her mind, the exact awkward stare he wore earlier still stuck on his face. Then it hits her, she's got a crush on Aldo Sons. Flora can't stop seeing the hero giggle at those little things, his wet, messy hair making him look absurdly cute, his grin blazing as he hands her flowers, and now she's scrambling to figure out why her heart hooked onto him in the first place. On the flip side, he's hit with flashbacks to when he first met Flora. That little girl in a magnificent dress, she beamed at him, squinted like she was studying him, and for that moment, he remembers her liking him. The hero recalls how he saved Flora the moment he saw her, and now her older face flashes in his mind. She's right there, standing with a basket, wiping sweat off her forehead. He remembers her tears of joy when she got the flowers, and then it hits him hard. He's in love with her. That young man suddenly realizes he's got real feelings for Flora then. From the bathroom, wet squelches and chunky grunts burst through the door. Flora's companion pants hard, gripping herself with her hands so she won't crumple to the floor, her whole body shaking as that extra rush hits from the guy's praise because he just tells her, "Flora, you're simply incredible." The young heroine crushes it, and the moment she hears he's already rushing over, she slams the gas and gets ready to reap every bit of what she's fought for. She mumbles under her breath and keeps snapping her head around like it's second nature. You don't have to tell her a thing. She knows exactly how to behave. Flora suddenly freezes, tears blazing in her eyes as she hums in uncertainty. Warmth spreads in her mouth, and she doesn't flinch, she just swallows wave after wave. The girl feels a slick spill run from the corners of her mouth, slithering into her saliva, and she buries her face in something soft while the man doesn't even try to push her away. Her hands shake so hard they're impossible to hide. If she didn't brace herself against the floor, she'd topple right. There, tears spill from her lashes as she mumbles under her breath. Eyes squeeze shut, brows pinching together so tight they drag up to the bridge of her nose. And once it's over, she just shuts up, no words, no explanation. Right after the magic snaps into place, he swivels his gaze to his companion, still dazed, still slightly blurry, while Flora locks eyes with the main character. He cups her cheek in his palm, and they just stare at each other in perfect silence, like every truth is already understood. The tense silence cracks when he speaks in a soft voice, thanking her for helping him, and that simple gratitude lights up her face with a sweet smile because she finally got to make the one she loves feel cared for. The heroine slips the man's hand into her warmth and presses it against her hot cheek, then shuts her eyes as her smile blossoms while Aldo watches, thinking, This night is about to burn. They leave the bathroom and slip into the bedroom. Then the hero pins her to the bed, plunges into a fierce kiss, and locks their fingers together until there's not a single inch of space left between their bodies. While quiet, breathy murmurs ripple through the room, he jerks away, then taps his nose to hers and exhales right into the girl's parted lips. Right as they're about to kiss, Flora crashes in, and the man lets out a furious breath, then shuts his eyes tight. Flora bursts out in an instant, screaming that the main character and his wild, unrestrained hands are the reason everything went up in flames. Suddenly, the main character yanks the girl by her inner thigh, and with one sharp jerk, flips her from her stomach so she faces him. Flora Ike's eyes widen, and her blush deepens as she locks with the young man's gaze. Aldred soothes her, insisting this is normal and she has nothing to be ashamed of. Then the girl's whole body jerks with a shiver as she moans softly, covering her eyes. She jolts awake, sensing she's at the finish line, and tells the guy, "Keep this pace and I'll get this job done." The heroine grips the sheets with trembling hands, her whole body shaking as screams and grunts ricochet off the walls. I can't help rewrite that line as written because it's sexually explicit if you want. Paste a toned-down, non-explicit version EGE, focusing on shock, recovery, or emotional overwhelm, and I'll rewrite it in the same high-energy style. The main character blurts out, "Is everything okay with Flora?" And she nods, "Yeah," then grins like she's ready to push on next thing. You know, the girl reaches out and taps his hand with hers. But then Aldo-san drops the bombshell he's entering. The young man parts his lips, then freezes for a heartbeat. The girl shrieks and scrambles to crawl up, wincing through the pain. It hurts, because that sharp jolt hit way harder than she ever expected, and her mouth falls open in a silent moan. He glances at Flora and halts for a beat, not wanting to hurt his companion. Then she slips her hand into his, laces their fingers tight, tears burning in her eyes, and still begs Aldo-san through the pain not to stop. The heroine hooks both arms around the man's neck, hugs him tight with both hands, and pulls him closer while Flora squints, lets out soft little moans, and crumples her eyebrows down over the bridge of her nose. She blinked open her eyes, cracked her mouth just a little, and stared at the young man across from her. Confused, breath caught because they'd already gone too far, and now it's game over to stop. They both just want pleasure. Sorry, I can't help rewrite explicit sexual content. If you share a toned-down, non-explicit version of the line, I'll rewrite it in the same high-energy storytelling style. Flora's ready to shout the main character's name, but when she opens her mouth, only broken syllables spill out, nothing that makes sense, while her hair keeps falling over her face, hiding everything. Aldred leans in until his breath hits Flora's lips, stares straight into her clear eyes, and says nothing. Because words would be useless right now, they both already feel, with total certainty, how deeply they love each other. Flora and Aldo lock in their feelings with a tender little kiss, and the blush spreading across both their cheeks goes wild, so the guy and the girl jerk their hands over their eyes and mumble sweetly into each other's mouths. Her companion hoists a leg and yanks away, but the man surges forward again. Then the girl clutches the crumpled sheets with her left hand and lets out a scream she can't control. Flora, even with embarrassment burning her cheeks, declares that something big and solid is happening inside her and she loves every single sensation, while her gaze locks onto the guy's face. Her cheeks go red, and her messy hair falls over her eyes as she stares. Aldo tells Flora, "Just a little more, then I'll be ready to finish," and the moment he clamps his teeth shut and lets out a shaky breath. He lunges forward, pushing with everything he's got to reach the finish line. With a trembling voice, the companion nods and tells him he can go finish it, swearing it'll all be fine. Then the man squints hard and hisses that he's almost ready. After they finally traded feelings with each other, Flora and Aldo locked eyes and burst into an amazed laugh, flustered to the core, cheeks blazing red, sweat beading on their faces, but yeah, they pulled it off. Flora tilts her head and kisses him, playfully nipping his lower lip, and the guy hurls his strong arms onto the bed, then covers his eyes as he gently brushes against someone else's lips. The next morning, the first sunbeams slid through the glass windows, and the main character, still tangled in his companion's arms, slowly came to, wrapped in a blanket on a comfy bed. He spots sunlight spilling into the room, blinks awake in a groggy daze, and there's Flora still curled on his chest, dozing hard after that brutal, stormy night. He snapped his head toward the sleeping young maiden, still squinting like the morning light was too much after that long, dark night. Flora's eyelashes flutter as she lets out a soft sniff, pressed close and clinging to the main character's warm chest, eyes still shut. Aldo-san reaches for the heroine and brushes her face with his fingertips, sweeping the hair from her eyes while she's still lost in sweet dreams, totally unaware of his touch. Flora hums softly. The young man snaps his eyes open, stunned by what he sees, then scrambles to figure out how to wake his sleeping, stubborn companion. With slow, careful knuckles, the main character brushes the sleepy girl's cheek and strokes her as she mumbles half asleep, feeling nothing at all while she tightens her lips into a thin, quiet line. The kid makes it even bolder. He jabs his index finger into someone else's cheek and keeps repeating it, over and over. while Aldo fights to hold in his laughter and keeps stroking his companion's hair. It doesn't help she just smashes her face into the pillow like she's trying to swat him away like an annoying fly, and when nothing else works, she jerks up, goes for Flora's ear, and bites down. Flora's eyes pop wide as she screams in shock. The guy lets out a giggle, crowing that the girl has finally snapped awake, so Flora immediately blurts if the main character saw everything. And when that kind of reaction hits him, he flashes her a bright smile, even as she trembles with nerves. The girl feels sick to her bones, ducks under the blanket, and tugs it up over her nose, muttering that in the morning, she'll look absolutely terrible. Then the man softly cups her sharp chin and reels her into his arms. The young man swears all he saw was that sweet sleeping face then. Still half asleep and slow lazy, he presses a gentle kiss to Flora's lips, right on purpose and oh so carefully. And the two of them throw their hands over their eyes, embarrassed all over again after what they did the night before. Meanwhile, two hooting owls perch by the window, watching the lovers, then grinning as they quietly crouch to get a better look at the main character and his companion. While Flora holds his face and covers their eyes for a beat, the young man grins and tells her, "Waking up next to someone you love is unreal." She reaches out and brushes the guy's cheek, and he snaps his eyes open, staring at the heroine like he can't believe what he's seeing while Flora's fingertips glide over the young man's skin. Beaming, Flora squints at the hero, then practically drags them into cooking together. Laughing, meeting the guests because the big takeaway is simple. They're finally not alone anymore. He shoves the other guy's palm against his own chest, flashes back to the night. He saw dark cloak, steel sword, all of it. And after a beat of silence, the guy nods fast, agreeing like it's decided. The young man nods and vows that from this moment on, he and his companion will tackle everything together, starting right now with cooking breakfast. The girl grins, shuts her eyes, and you can tell she's thrilled to pieces. Flora pushes herself up from the pillows, shrugs off the blanket, and with a bright nod she agrees, then asks Aldo and her if they'll whip up breakfast using radishes he's grown himself. She tugs the blanket with her fingers and lets her eyes lock onto him. When she finally climbs out of bed, her curvy silhouette slips into view, and the young man's eyes snap open, face flushing as he panics and blurts out loud in embarrassment. The scene rips us straight into the vineyard. Two people in wide hats crouch by the vines, baskets in hand, yanking huge grapes from hiding places, while the sky blazes so clear not a cloud dares appear. And yet the calm feels like a warning before rain. Since morning, Owina's been hanging on every word of her sister's friend swearing Aldo Sand wiped out the red barre all by himself. Then she snaps her eyes open, shock hits her hard, and she clenches one fist. Aisha nods and asks Ayana if she really expected something like this from that young man. Then the white-haired guy lights up and says he's just happy the main character showed up from New Orlando, and Ayana's like, "Aldo is seriously cool," while all three of them crowd around a table in the clearing, trading wild, interesting news. Toke lets out a chuckle and says that when Flora was in danger, Aisha totally freaked out while the girl beside him folds her arms tight, puffs out a pout of pure displeasure, and stares straight ahead like she's numb with irritation. Right then, before he can even finish, Aisha stomps down on the young man's bare leg with her heel hard, and he yelps in agony, shutting his mouth fast so he won't ruin her name. Toke shoves his face into the table, fighting to choke back the pain. Sick moans, while the girl turns away like she didn't see a thing. Then brushes it off, saying, "Everyone got saved thanks to Aldo," and mocking them for ever trusting an idiot who can't even manage a bow. Rage and embarrassment flash across Tullingox's face. Then Asia asks if she did something wrong, and he won't even answer. He stands up, spins around, and storms out, leaving Athena staring in stunned silence. The girl watches the boy vanish in silence, then snaps her eyes to her sister with a sharp frown of pure disgust. Aisha flips her gaze away and insists the truth is nothing like it looks. Uena tries to protest, but Togax's words don't match at all, so Aisha instantly rises from the table, shuts her eyes, and declares that everything is exactly as it should be. Then she slips out and stretches lazily like she just woke up from a dream, leaving the sister with zero time to speak. Aina laughs so awkwardly it hurts, saying her sister will never become her sister at this pace. Then the moment hits, and she can't hear that line anymore. The story cuts to the village, and everyone springs to their feet, staring at the gorgeous garden while their kids run wild and laugh between the flower bushes. Right then, the main character and his companion stand atop a hill staring down at the village like they've got the world in their hands. Wooden houses, tilled fields, everything laid out below. He slides his arm around her shoulder. She clasps one hand behind his back and the other over his chest. Then both lean back and stare into the horizon with a gentle smile. Aldo can't help but say the view is absolutely breathtaking. The young man flashes back he's from New Orleans, and now he can't believe it's over, because he's finally free from the royal capital. In his memoirs, the main character flips through pictures of his triumphant return to the capital, honors thrown his way, crowds applauding, everyone celebrating yet. When he looks at it all, joy never hits him. He snaps his head toward his companion, calls Flora by name, and blurts out his love for her again. Eyes burning with joy, soft, tender, and overflowing with it. In the middle of the clearing, the hero stares ahead and admits he's never felt anything like this, then turns to Flora and thanks her for handing him new emotions. While the girl, barely above a whisper, says she felt it too. Tears well up in Flora's eyes and spill down her cheeks, not from sadness, but pure, blazing joy as she blurts that she loves Aldo-san II and gazes at him like he's her whole world. He yanks her closer and clamps her in a tight hug, arms locked behind her back, then hides his eyes as she buries her face in his shoulder and sobs with pure, joyful relief. With a calm hand, the hero gently pats her head, steadies her breathing, then shuts his eyes and smiles like he's finally found peace. Flora yanks onto the young man's shoulder and sobs into him, overwhelmed and unable to hold it in, and now the two of them can't stop believing it. The legend of the paired flower really was true. The spotlight snaps to Karun, the long-haired heroine and A-rank adventurer and a former member of the Black Silver Squad now teaching at a magic school. A dream she chased since childhood until one terrifying problem flips everything. A girl with a high tail strides into the headmaster's office at the School of Magic, stopping in front of a glasses-wearing woman with painted lips. Then Karune steps up and drops the bomb he's quitting. And just like that, he walks right out. The director doesn't trust the teacher's words. He flings himself off the table, tells Kuruane-san to wait, and swears he'll fix this. But she shuts him down, refuses to hear a word, and storms out of the office. Once Karune slips out of the school building, she grips her magic wand tight, spins back for one last look, then marches straight ahead. Right where her eyes lock on next, only to realize the magical school is nothing like what her girlfriend ever pictured. An image slams into the heroine's mind. Headmistress and two other teachers clustered around her, and she remembers how class discrimination infects the school with noble formalities shoved in everyone's face at every single meeting. Deciding she's done tolerating this, Kurune storms out of the School of Magic heavy-hearted. Sure, but choosing freedom is still better than being stuck around people like that. And because one of the Dragon Slayers was suddenly famous, aristocrats swarmed in just to marry Karuna no matter what it cost. Down a long hallway she walks, and then she spots a white-haired guy rushing toward her, clutching flowers in his hands. He slams to a stop in front of the girl, grins, tightens his grip on a single rose, and greets Kuru Nyson Earl Clark Raymond, the head of the Raymond family. The young man steps in and slips a flower into Karuna's hands. And sure, it's awkward as hell still, she takes it without a word, staring at the blossom like, "Okay, what am I supposed to do with you?" But the knight standing ahead of her royal and relentless keeps demanding Aldo's whereabouts and at the same time blurts out marriage proposals to him. Curran clocks it instantly. Earl Clark Raymond's smile is just another act, all staged. Even now, as he lifts the corners of his lips and meets her gaze head-on, he tries to sell her confidence like it's real. The girl swears she's done with playing nice with the aristocracy. Then the moment Karune hears Aldo's about to leave the team, she's totally stunned, doesn't get what he's doing at all, and only feels a sharp sting of offense. But now the heroine finally gets him, because right then, an image flashes before his eyes, a young man grinning wide, telling his companion he's headed to New Orleans. All because he's done chasing chaos and just wants a calm, steady life. The girl strides deeper into the pitch-black alley, magic wand clutched tight in one hand and a bag of supplies in the other. When it suddenly clicks in her mind, Aldo totally told her where he'd be, and of course it was a little village out in the countryside. Catching that blinding light at the end of the transition, the former teacher of the School of Magic thinks she's found the truth. There's nothing wrong with a quiet life among ordinary people, teaching them magic and handing down everything she knows. The story bursts into a bright, sunny city alive in every corner. People stroll and trade words, hauling on with their days while horses pull sleds stacked with goods. Shops swing open and shopkeepers wave everyone in like, "Come on in." She lets out a shaky breath, shuts her eyes tight, and whispers that maybe, just maybe, this chaos is leading her somewhere good. As Karune strode past the village kids, the little boys and girls practically shimmered with magic-obsessed curiosity, eyes brighter than the noble children's. Like that's exactly what the School of Magic teacher had been wishing for someone to step in as their mentor. Jammed in the middle of the crowd, she can't stop wondering how Aldo's holding up now because, yeah, he practically lives on sword work. He's great at hunting. But growing vegetables, that's a skill he can barely manage. Riding in the cart, the heroine can't stop thinking about Aldo. He never cared about courting girls, so she doubts the main character will snag a girlfriend anytime soon. And yeah, she's pretty sure he's lonely right now. A flustered smile just slips onto Karune's face the moment she daydreams about someday being the bride of a young man, and she scrambles to shove those sweet thoughts away even as they light her up. The fight gets shoved hours into the future, and the royal capital vanishes under choking dark clouds and brutal torrential rain so thick that you can barely see a thing. The black-robed hero trudges forward through the puddles, a dark hood shadowing half his face, and his lips stay shut. He won't say a single word. A shadowy stranger in dark clothes pulls up at Raymond's grand mansion, then freezes and stares at the lit windows like he's hunting something inside. Knight Zoke yanks off his clothes, his hair and the whole suit are drenched. Then he balls his fists and snaps at the prince. "Why the hell did you come here in this weather?" In front of a middle-aged man, a young prince leans in and tells him the message quick, clear, and straight to the point. On the king's orders, they have to send back the killer of the dragon, Aldred. Zohak fires the question. Are Aldred's men hunting the king? And suddenly my mind throws up a scene of the ruler on his throne, decked out in those expensive robes, talking like it's all business. A grin flashes across the page like it says everything's fine, but the truth is, only Zoak can pull off this brutal task. Realizing it's not as simple as that, the man shoots another question, does Clark have something up his sleeve again? With a quiet chuckle, the young guy leans back harder on his couch and asks if the dark-haired old man is in a foul mood right now. Clark realizes Zoak is still stuck on Aldred and on revenge. The moment it clicks, the man's face collapses into a dark scowl and his lips clamp tight like there's no way he's letting that sit unanswered. Sensing the shift in the air, the Count blurts, "So, what kind of creepy face is Zoak pulling now?" But no one answers, and the man just turns his back saying he'll go find Aldo. The Count reveals what he just learned, that a suspicious figure slipped out of the kingdom and headed west, and Zoak leans in, hanging on every bit of gathered intel. Clark says it's almost certainly not the Empire of Vespania or the Kingdom of the Sylphs because the witnesses' clues line up perfectly with the moment he vanished. And the wanderer heading west was almost certainly Aldred. You can see it in what the farmer says. The guy he helped along the way is proof enough. Zoak signs on, and it's clear the main character just can't stop poking into other people's business because this time, help is going to hit him sideways. The man's still stuck in the room, so the Count figures he's about to press for more, and when he nods, he lays it out. Can Aldred be collapsed in any way they can find? Staring the mercenary down, Clark tells him he'll do whatever it takes. Just one rule, don't kill him, because Clark still needs him alive. The Count hooks his leg over the other and watches that dark figure shrink into the night. Then Zoak steps out into the rain after dark to get back to his job. With his mouth shut tight, he stares straight ahead as rain lashes his face this time. There's no way Aldrin slips away. The scene snaps to the garden there. The main guy and his buddy Flora are sitting down, and he spots a radish poking up from the dirt. "Can I pull it out?" he asks. Flora leans in just a bit and nods, agreeing. Aldred clamps his fingers around a radishin, yells, "Go on!" and yanks it from the ground with every ounce of strength. Then the girl grins wide because he nailed it. This young man stares at the perfectly round radish and blurts out that it's nothing short of wonderful, and just like that, he finally gets what joy Flora meant from harvesting. Clapping her hands, the girl beams and swears she understands Aldo-san perfectly because she felt the exact same thing too, picking her own vegetables in the garden with her own two hands. The guy steps up and offers to pull the next one for Flora since both of them planted that crop side by side. He refuses to let all the glory land on just one person. Suddenly, the girl jerks in pain, drops to her knees, and trembles like she can't hold herself together. Then the young man rushes closer, panicked, and demands what's wrong. Flora whispers that since that very night, everything hurts because it was the first time. Caught by his guilt, the hero blurts out an apology for going too far, and his companion waves it off, saying it's all good, just a bit uncomfortable. With just a flick of her fingertips, she yanks a radish from the soil, and then another. Both spots taste amazing. At least to their proud little mouths, the guy then nudges her to taste the fresh, grown bounty. Right then, the hero and the young maiden sink their teeth into radishes they just plucked. While Aldo chews and crunches the veggies, he grins and says they're sweet, with just a little kick. Flora declares that combo perfect. Aldo then starts claiming you could chow down an entire mountain of radishes, and the other guy shuts him down, saying no way. The heroes jump into making a radish salad and pile on as much as they can for breakfast, while Aldo clutches the baskets and tests whether radishes can be planted in the same spot. And Flora insists they must first harvest every last old crop. Only after that, she says you can finally plan the new plantings, and then, once you're back at the house with huge baskets of crops, the main character points out they can push the field even farther because the next harvest is going to blow the last one out of the water. Flora crosses the doorway and blurts out an apology for bothering them. Then it hits her like a slap. This isn't some stranger's house at all. Pure embarrassment floods her, and she just can't find the words as Aldo's soft giggles drift on. With the basket clutched in her hands, the girl blushes and admits that after yesterday, there's nothing left she can do. So the main character gives her a gentle laugh, then rushes to apologize for how he acted. Flora steps in and asks Aldo if he can enter her house like he owns it, and Aldo shoots back that there's no way Elga-san could because it's too much for him. He grabs the basket from Flora, but the guy tries to jump in. She waves him off, insisting it's nothing, it'll be quick, and she wants to cook the main character's food herself. Aldo stops fighting, blinks in confusion, and like it's the first time he gets it, he thanks the girl as he lets her steamroll straight through every plan. Flora snatches up the apron and asks if she can put it on, and the main character nods right away, eyes fixed as her companion ties the perfect bow on her back. She turns to the young man. tells him to wait a little and slips into the kitchen to prep their food apron tied tight so her clothes stay clean and a flower wreath perched on her head like pure decoration. Those cheeks are burning red, and he can't look away from the heroine because in that outfit, in her apron, she's ridiculously cute now. Flora finally sets the table, then blurts out an apology for the long wait, but the guy doesn't even look up. He's locked in on the red dishes, and he wants to know why they're like that because radishes did it. The girl's eyes sparkle because the dishes look even more mouthwatering now, and the main character just stares at every single meal they made today with pure awe. The young man insists they start eating right away, but Flora grabs the chair, shoves it back so she can sit, and still twists through discomfort. Last night's events have her hurting badly. Clenching her fists, the girl dares the guy to start eating. She's dying to see his reaction. Then the hero slides him a spoonful of soup and tells him to enjoy the meal. Then he picked every bite with total care, tasting it like it mattered, and the verdict hit hard. The food was absolutely phenomenal, especially that killer aftertaste from the radishes. The main character spots that Flora isn't eating a single bite, so he demands what's wrong, and she just smiles. She's dying to watch him try her food, because she's always dreamed of cooking for the one she loves. Trying to clear his throat to hide the embarrassment, Aldo blurts out, "So you really kept staring at me the whole time I was in your house the first time?" She starts talking back, insisting she couldn't help it because the second she resigns herself to never meeting a man she likes again, he actually shows up on her doorstep and the guy only smirks like it's hilarious. When I catch the young man smiling, Flora shoots me a curious look, asking if what I said is really that funny. Then she studies my face with pity and takes a small bite of the food she just made. He flashes her a bright, warm smile and tells her, "I'm just thinking breakfast turns into something magical when my beloved Flora is sitting right there beside the table." It hits the hero having someone he loves right by his side, turns even the most everyday chores into something wild, fun, and way more interesting. At the same time, the School of Magic's ex-teacher hopped off the cart and tore down a new path, hunting for Aldo. Mercenary Zoke rolls right in after him, chasing the main character too, but his mission isn't friendly. He's hunting with blood in his eyes, taking orders from the king and the count. He has zero clue what's coming, so he just digs into breakfast with his companion, dreaming, this peaceful moment will never end. After a few days of sharing a home with Aldo and Flora, she has to pack up and head back. Then she and her lover go over everything, and when she drops her heroin bombshell, he's left completely stunned. Flora finishes stacking the laundry and everything else into a tidy pile, then proudly tells them that mom and dad let her stay here, but she admits she's aching to visit, because she misses them more than anything. Flora locks eyes with the hero, hope blazing bright in hers, begging to have him beside her on this trip because she refuses to face it alone. Caught off guard by the wild offer, the hero blurts that of course he'll go because it turns out he and his companion are a couple now, and that means he's got to swing by Elgus and Fiona, the parents of the woman he chose. But that wasn't even the end. He fumbles, hesitates, then forces out the words while his partner stares at him, locked in, hanging on every second for the next thing he's about to say. With a nervous rub behind his ear, he blurts out that he wants to ask Flora's parents for her hand in marriage. Usually the marriage ceremony changes depending on where they live, city streets or a quiet village, but if there's a church in their town, that's where the couple slips their vows into God's hands. Or they could have just announced it in the middle of some jam-packed meeting like a harvest festival, but in a tiny village, those big celebrations don't happen, so they'd have to get the okay from every single parent one by one. Flora goes quiet, clamps both hands to her chest, and the main character stares at her, holding his breath because he's terrified something's wrong. He leans in a little lower to catch the girl's face hair veiling it then. Right as he starts to ask a question, Flora bursts into bitter tears and clamps a hand over her mouth to choke back the sob. That behavior leaves Aldo stunned. He freezes on the spot, staring at the girl's tears, and realizes he has no clue what to do with her anymore. The young man finally blurts out that maybe he messed up and rushed everything too much, but through trembling tears, Flora swears he didn't. Only the reason behind those tears is something else entirely. She tilts her head up, flashes a bright smile, wipes her fingers clean with her own, and tells him she's just happy with what she heard. Then quickly adds that she's sorry if her crying scared the guy. But at this very moment, the main character finally realizes he never should have doubted his companion. She's the right one. He flashes a bright smile, reaches out, cups the girl's cheek, strokes it gently, and wipes away those hot, dripping tears. In the middle of the room, the crew huddles together and clings close, and Flora presses her head into Aldo's shoulder while the main character pours out his gratitude for his companion's acceptance just the way he is. The moment Aldo's lover finally calms down, her guy pushes the idea that she should get moving on business. Yet that's not what happens. Karina shows up and catches him with the girl, right on the doorstep of the open door. No one saw this visit coming. The man freezes in stunned silence, then forces out a greeting to the unexpected guest, praying she won't spill a word she doesn't need to. Giggling to beat the band, Karina slides right into the chat and straight into the wrong kind of talk. She blurts that Aldo and Flora finally hooked up, swearing she thought it would drag on longer because the guy is totally useless at love, and Flora's the type to bloom way late. All of it boils up in the guy's rage. He hits the girl and snaps, Shut up! Karina instantly screams, shocked, not getting why the main character would do that, but he fires back that it's all for prevention. After she finally calms down, the girl blurts out that Flora and Aldo are a sweet couple, then snaps her own words back, grinning as she declares they're not just lovers anymore, they're the bride and the groom. The young man blares that right now, he and his beloved are finally getting official permission, while Flora turns bright red, insisting it's not a big deal to shout stuff like that. Karina only cringes harder, yelling even louder that once this news hits, everyone in New Orleans will know. The girl crouches behind the main character's shoulder, and he leans in, trying to save everything by asking Karina what's really going on in that forest. She lets out a soft chuckle, then answers anyway, because that's exactly why she showed up. She threw her hands up and started wildly gesturing. Then the girl announced the red bear was delivered after that. She and her squad swept up every scrap of meat and useful materials they could find. Karina still remembers how she and her crew rushed to gather the materials the red liquid pulled in a swarm of tiny monsters. But the hunters held the line and pushed them back cleanly, and she's relieved it all ended without any needless trouble. That girl tried to bring Aldo some meat yesterday, but the teacher snapped at her to drop the guy and bring jerky next time. With a sharp throat clear, the hero demands to know when they can finally step into the forest, and Karina insists that if no new monsters wreck their path, they'll likely be in by day 4 or 7. The young man slings out a huge thank you, then heads off with Flora toward the house of Elgas, while Karina sends the heroes off with one sharp warning. Stay alert on the road, then they embrace and set off together. After a bit, Flora and Aldo finally burst into the gorgeous house of the girl's parents, and the second they step inside, Mom and Dad rush over, greet them like they've been waiting forever, and congratulate them on coming back. The girl's father pumps the young man's hand hard, grinning like he owns the world, while the main character nods, wishes him a good day, and size-ups the guy, and then the girl's mother gestures them to keep going into the living room. Flora steps right up to her mother, and she can't help noticing her daughter is brighter, happier, and even more beautiful than ever. Then she urges her to speed up before the food turns cold. The dining table's piled high like a feast, with dish after dish begging to be tasted, and the guy just can't stop thinking, man, this all looks delicious. Fiona, though, was already plotting. If her daughter shows up with her lover, then she's not holding back in the kitchen. They all packed around the same table like a real family. Then the 4 of them clinked glasses and cheered the moment one family was born. Flora's dad grins like the sun, and right then she blurts, "Why does your face look weird?" He grips a glass in both hands, beams like everything's perfect, and the happiness just pours out of him. The man bursts into joy, saying he's ecstatic. Flora finally stops treating Aldo like just a friend, and now brought him home as her boyfriend. Meanwhile, the young virgin can barely handle the shock, blushing hard as she begs her dad to stop. But Fiona doesn't fall into doubt. She backs her husband and tells him she's been with him every step since Aldo-san rolled in from New Orleans. Wondering when their story would finally turn into a couple, her heart melts watching her daughter act, blush and all, her face burning red with emotion. Elgas swings his glass side to side and claims that every time Flora drags Aldo out for lunch, he and his wife can't help but wonder if anything's actually moving between them. Then the main character drops his head, throws out a heartfelt apology, and admits his weakness. Flora shoots up from the table, wails that Aldo-san isn't some weakling, and vows to protect him right now. The girl keeps talking, and she reveals the guy never clocked the desperate hints and can barely remember what happened 9 years ago. So Flora's parents lean in and beg for more, while Aldo's heart can't figure out if his beloved is backing him or throwing more shame on his face. As Flora keeps talking, she tells everyone how the main character took care of her and even battled the monster to save her, so she demands they stop calling Aldo a weakling. Her father listens to her speech, breaks into a gentle smile, then shuts his eyes and murmurs a quiet, unmistakable, "I see." Elkas leans in and tells the guy, "If Aldo hadn't stepped in, our daughter wouldn't be sitting in this room right now, and you have no idea how much we owe you. Me and my wife truly appreciate it." Fiona and Elga bow to the hero to show respect and gratitude. Then he cuts them off fast, insisting they don't need to do any of that. He tells them this is just how he is because he's chasing the person he loves and he'll do anything to save them. But the family's head snaps back even if Flora is his beloved. Not everyone has what it takes to battle a monster and stare down their own fear. Flora and Aldo locked eyes, smiled, and nodded. Then she leaned in and basically told him, "Go on, make the offer we talked about this morning." Thank you. He snaps around and faces the shocked head of the family, forcing himself through that awkward, shy panic because right now he decides it's time to get his act together. He pushes himself up from the table, scans his parents and his beloved, and you can practically see the panic crawling over his face before he finally speaks. Aldo blares out Elgas and Fiona's names, and the main character's companion freezes, stuck on her breath with her hands jammed to her chest while the head of the family's wife snaps a hand to her mouth in shock, then lets out a startled exhale. That young man bursts out, proclaiming he's marrying Flora, then straight up goes to her family to beg for their approval and blessing. Flora holds her breath, staring at the hero, then snapping her eyes to her parents. Then she waits for the answer with the same trembling dread as her loved one. To honor his family, Aldo's son bows low, shuts his eyes tight, and prays in his head that he'll get the okay to marry the girl he wants. Elgus and Fiona lock eyes and grin. He doesn't notice a thing, but that smile says everything, and Fiona just understands it instantly, staying quiet. Flora's mother drops the biggest yes and even asks Elgus to marry their daughter, so Elgus shrugs off any objections, saying there's no reason to block the match if San is the intended, then pushes the idea of announcing the wedding at this year's harvest festival. And just like that, both parents are fully on board. The guy rises, staring in disbelief like his brain still can't catch up, and then when he hears that Elgus gives the okay and even backs the marriage, he whips his head toward the future bride and joyfully beckons her over. Aldo and Flora finally got the right to marry, and now pure joy has them wrapped up tight. Flora flings herself into Aldo's arms, hugs him like she'll never let go, and sobs happy tears as she blinks them away. Meanwhile, her parents beam with the same warmth, and Fiona wipes tears from her own eyes too. Then bam, a brand new life kicks off, and when he finally talks to the family head, he blurts out in shock, asking if he really is going to be the next elder of Norland. Rubbing the back of his head, he looks to Elgus, just realizing he missed the point. Flora is his daughter, and then, totally flustered, he blurts out a shaky, confused, "Yeah, I guess." Realizing the truth, the man shoots back, asking if the boy really forgot that Flora's father is the village elder. The kid flushes with embarrassment, blurts out an apology, and admits he'd been treating Elgus as Flora's dad the whole time. The man isn't even mad. He just bursts into laughter, joking that Sand can be oddly absent-minded sometimes. Elgus's wife turns to Flora and tells her to look after her betrothed. Flora rolls her eyes in embarrassment and nods, and as soon as the talk ends, it's dessert time. Over tea and heavenly cheesecake, Flora and the main character trade stories like it's just the two of them, bursting into laughter with pure joy written all over their faces. Elgus slices through the silence and blurts out that the moment he sees his daughter with the young man, he just can't stop smiling. Then the young man asks whether Flora's long-held wish has finally come true, and that single question instantly makes the future newlyweds squirm with discomfort. Fiona finally spills her daughter's secret. She tells everyone that 9 years ago, Flora sobbed like her heart would break right after Aldo stormed out of the village, and the girl scrambles to stop her mom from blurting the whole truth. Back when Flora sobbed into her pillow for hours, her mom finally spills the truth she needs Aldo to understand what an adult woman endures just to soothe a crying child. Flora tucks her burning red cheeks away while he watches, wearing a gentle, soft smile. With a shaky little giggle, he snaps his head toward his betrothed and blurts out his thanks because the fact that she's thinking of him nonstop makes him feel like he finally has someone who's truly got his back. Still clueless what to say, the girl blurts out that she's happy about it too. And after all those stories and words, her cheeks are burning pink with blush. Aldo pushes for the rest of the story from Fiona, and when she has no clue what to do with herself, she snaps her hands up over her face and lets out a strangled little mumble of pure discomfort. Fiona's father keeps going, saying his daughter was so rattled that even her favorite food couldn't snap her back to her senses. Forget about any parental pleading, too. When the girl stares at her parents in terror, she's sure they're about to blurt something out again. Elgus's wife tells him that Flora was crushed because she couldn't answer the main character's question about the flowers, so she tugged her mom close and demanded she spill every last detail about them. And honestly, it was incredibly sweet. Finally spotting Flora blushing bright as a tomato, the girl's mother breaks into laughter and asks if they should keep going. Then the young maiden snaps, "Stop!" because embarrassment has her completely wrecked. The girl's father finally blurts that Flora was dead set on it back then. And right on cue, the girl shrieks that it's time to finish. At this point, trembling grips him and tears streak down his cheeks, but he can't rein in the storm of feelings and emotions. At the table, panic creeps in and everyone starts fretting. Then the main character's beloved rushes in with, "What happened?" and anxiously worries about him right away. With a shaky voice, the guy blurts that he's sorry he never had a family like that, and he can't help but feel thrilled by everything he just saw and heard. Fiona and Elgus trade worried looks. Trying to steady the panic and jolt the hero back to his senses, the man tells him they're one family now, so he can't keep hesitating to lean on the others. And Fiona chimes in, saying she's glad to see a son-in-law like that. The main character starts to apologize, but Flora barrels up to him and clamps him in a tight hug, pressing him to her chest and covering her own eyes. Tears shimmer in her eyes, but she keeps holding on to the one she loves, insisting everything's okay while Aldo stands there totally baffled, like he doesn't know what to do with this new, messed-up moment. Still, the main character clamps her hand even tighter, and thick tears spill from his heavy lashes as Flora leans in, telling him they've got each other. Now nothing to fear while he nods and thanks her. She steps into the yard, eyes the stacks of trunks, and snaps that they've got to be moved first. Then the young man nods right away, ready to jump in and help. Elgus drags a cart with rolling wheels behind him and tells Aldo to use it, so he won't have to struggle, and the main character immediately thanks him for all the kindness. The man steps in to help Aldo so the load doesn't crush him alone. Then they team up and haul the cart together. Elgas shoves from behind while the other guy drives it from the front. The man thrusts his head out and tells him straight up that what he said about becoming the village elder is nowhere in the near future, so the main character won't have to chase that path at all. Aldo's head of the family shuts it down and says, plain as day, he's not ready to leave his post first, he has to learn life at his own speed. Aldo exhales hard, nods, and spirals over the same question. Why did he even agree, and why does he have to step up as an elder right now? When he finally makes it back home, the young man grabs his rescuer by the heart and thanks him, then promises he'll handle the job by himself from here while Elgas nods and says, Aldo's busted his butt all day, so he better sit down to a proper, hearty dinner. The story cuts to Karina, where two sisters and their friend crowd in. One girl spills every detail she's uncovered about Aldo and Flora, and then they all lean in, asking the same urgent question. Is the main character really planning to tie the knot? Karina shrugs off every question, awkwardly blurting that they're going to need official permission or something. Then she slips away with a good luck, heads off to cook red bear meat, and asks if she can get a hand. Aisha's jaw drops. She can't buy it. Two people who couldn't even talk to each other not long ago are suddenly forging a bond stronger than a mere couple or a friendship. Toke figures the new couple's going to need furniture, and he's already convinced Aldo will have to shove walls aside and expand the house for Flora's room. Aisha slaps her hand over her face and mutters that the girl only came to her for love advice because she's clueless and now she's about to get married. Horror flashes across her face because if Aldo and Flora keep going at this pace, they're going to have kids, and Aisha will be the one they call Aunt. And Tokei just can't figure out why his girlfriend reacts that hard. Tokes scoffs at the idea that Aisha's about to become an aunt, then shoots jealousy back at her because she gets the real opportunities while he doesn't. And with that, he mutters he'll start making furniture for a couple, insisting that if there's demand, there'll be an offer, while he just silently watches the whole thing unfold. The argument keeps exploding, getting louder by the second, because he's sure nobody's going to lock their whole life to Aisha while she fires back that it's impossible to picture a guy with anyone. And yeah, they're not even talking about kids yet. They just keep trading brutal insults, one after another. Ina lets out a quiet sigh, watches that couple like a hawk, and can't stop wondering when they'll finally start dating. Fiona hustles beside her daughter, packing every bag and jar with sharp care, while her daughter is off caught up in something else. All fired up, she whips her head toward Flora, and there, a long-haired girl stands holding a freshly painted plate in both hands. Leaning in, Flora's mother tells her she can take the plate with her, and Flora whirls toward that voice, asking if she's truly allowed because this plate is the crown jewel of her mother's whole collection. She gently places the dishes into the girl's hands and tells her those plates can spark fresh, happy memories with Aldo. Holding Flora's hands, the heroine's mom whispers, "Don't ever forget no matter what. You've always got a place waiting for you." And that place is her family's home where she truly belongs. Tears shimmer in her eyes as she locks gazes with her mother and squeezes her hands even tighter. When they finally say goodbye for the last time, the mother and daughter crush each other in a tight hug, letting the tears and everything they can't say spill out all at once while the family head lurks by the corner, sobbing with his face buried in his hands, too broken to step in. Aldo and Flora shove a cart loaded with supplies. He struts ahead, yanking a heavy load behind him until Flora slips, and then she lets out a full throttle scream. That nasty incident fades away and the main character snaps, "What happened?" Only for the girl to peek out from behind a heap of stuff and mutter, "I just tripped and fell." Suddenly, a voice shouts to the heroes, checks if everyone's okay, and every resident offers to help, especially if that cart's too heavy for them yet. Aldo shuts it down, insisting he didn't want to be a bother. A resident rushes up to Flora and blurts, "Are you okay? I heard a monster attacked you." Flora shakes it off, insisting she's not hurt, and that the whole ugly mess is already over. Then the real question hits. Why would a girl her age even wander into the deep forest? Flora pauses, scrambling for what to say next. Then another resident jumps in, blurts out that the girl walked off right then straight to that ultra-special paired flower. After a bit, the villagers jumped in and shoved the cart loaded with gifts all the way to the home of the newlyweds, and Aldo turned around and thanked every single one of them for their help. From the crowd, a voice yells, "What happened to the flower in the end?" And someone shoots back, "It's all obvious now." Flora moved to Aldo, and that was the answer. With a glowing smile, the main character strides up to his beloved, slips his hand into hers, and holds it there right in front of everyone who's watching. One who's boo. Flora gasps in terror, snaps her eyes to the guy, and clamps a hand over her mouth. Right then, the main character blurts that he and his beloved girlfriend are ready to marry at the Harvest Festival. The crowd erupts in cheers and roaring joy, and someone yells, "Touch Aldo, and you're finished. Try messing with our floor, and you'll deal with me." All day long, the crowd keeps surging toward the heroes, eager to grill them why that choice, and what's really going on with the wedding. Sisters Akina and Aisha finally meet the main character, beam at him and congratulate him for the wedding to come, then they gush that they're thrilled. Algus and the others notice them too. The young guy thanks the girls for their congratulations, swears he just wanted to tell them sooner but got swamped by other stuff, then finally decides to spill the whole story right now. Right then, Aldo spots the token closing in. He plants his hands on his hips and fires off. "So you really decided to get married after all?" And that question hits like a warning siren. With a laugh, the protagonist's friend blurts that Flora is painfully shy and Aldo is totally clueless, like nobody could have predicted they'd fall into a relationship this fast. Then the young man realizes, too late, that he's already started to regret coming over to talk about it. Once the jokes die down, Toke snaps into serious mode and starts thinking straight. This new family is going to need fresh furniture and the main character gets it fast. But his friend just can't figure out what else he's supposed to be thinking about. He fires off a proposal to expand the house, and the main character snaps out of his spiraling thoughts. Stunned, what does expand even mean and why do they need it? Toke points out that family fights are totally normal, and here, they might need separate rooms, while the poor guy never even thought that couples argue all the time. While the quarrel fizzles out, Aldo's friend blurts out, "Once they have a kid, that little room won't be enough, you'll still need your own space?" It hits Aldo like a gut punch. Do I really have to be there already? And right then, a friend swoops in with the worst timing. "Don't worry, baby cats are always taken." Asking Tawaku if he's having fun only makes the guy fume harder, because he can't figure out what in the world that question was even about. Right then, the main character bolts after the blonde guy, trying to swing on him, grumbling that he'll still be dancing the moment he decides he's getting married to it. When the talk turns to the wedding, one sister's eyes sharpen. She's convinced To has finally given marriage some real thought, and she decides it's time to push her older sister into his path as the bride. Aisha keeps herself distant from everyone, and Flora can't believe how far she's come, yet she still clings to those same love tips like they never left her. He grinned with his friends, but deep down he knew he wouldn't get a moment of peace while he stayed in the royal capital. Yet he still couldn't even bring himself to imagine what was happening now. The story rockets to the capital. Avalon, then the king explodes, yelling Baruch's name. Baruch snaps upright, and the old man demands, "So, when will you finally find Alderd?" The man under his breath says, "That guy slid in so careful and left almost nothing behind, so yeah, we're going to be searching for a while." That answer doesn't cut it with the old man. He roars even louder than before, shouting, "What's going to happen if another kingdom or some aristocrats get to Aldred first, then demands they moved?" But the count is the only one in the throne room who doesn't realize this. Someone's already racing toward their goal, and they're shockingly close. Karuna shifts to the next stage. She's sprinting toward Norland, map pressed in her hands, and she realizes with a jolt that she's heading the right way. The sorceress stares at a picture of the main character, wondering if Aldo will get shocked when he sees her again. If he'll be so moved, he'll pull her into a hug. Then a quick, crooked laugh yanks her back to reality, and she knows it can't happen. Still, Karun wouldn't mind a bit. So with the same thought swirling in her head, she sets off again, humming to herself as she goes. He's finally heading home, grinding up the mountain, eyes locking onto the house, only it's not just him living there anymore. He swung the door open, and the guy grinned, saying he was finally home. Then his eyes went huge, like it was the first time he'd ever seen a girl. Flora stands at the kitchen table, spreading everything out, including the plates her mother handed her. Then she spots her lover at the door and breaks into a warm smile. She gets pulled off her grind, then lights up the moment Aldo's son comes back, because now they can finally be alone together and steal a breather from all the chaos. The boy clutches his chest, blinks hard to wipe the tears away, and when the girl asks what happened to Aldo-san, he answers with shaking relief, because the more it sinks in, the more he's certain he's exactly where he belongs. Wiping away someone else's tears with her handkerchief, the girl flashes a smile because she feels it too, and she's been waiting all day for her loved one to finally come back. Flora and Aldo slide onto the same sofa, wrap each other in a tight hug, and Flora blurts out her thanks for hauling everything into her brand new home while Aldo brushes it off, saying it's no big deal and he'll always be ready to help. With a bigger grin, she says, "This time I'm leaning on my lover." And he shoots back, "Then I'll lean on Flora too." Flora and Aldo lock eyes, pause mid-conversation, and then finally reach out to share that long-awaited kiss. At last, their lips finally meet. Flora and the guy melt into each other, trading every bit of tenderness and care that's been missing for too long. And as the moment swells, Flora murmurs against the kiss before gently pulling away. She drops just 2 words, begging to be taken to the bedroom, and the guy instantly gets it all, no hints needed, because he's not trying to mess around. He wants the exact same thing as his future bride. With Flora still wide-eyed, the young man scoops her up and hauls her straight into the bedroom, and the shock hits them both like a thunderclap. Awkward as hell, but burned into memory, she curls into the warmth of his shoulder, and he only squeezes her tighter in his arms. Kneeling by the bed, the young man tucks Flora onto fresh, soft sheets. Then she tilts her gaze down the hem of her trousers, staring at him like she's got questions. The moment she tries to ask a question that's basically obvious, the guy panics and blurts out that the whole embarrassment happened just because of a tiny kiss. To keep the heroine from getting overwhelmed, Aldo tells her she doesn't have to talk to him at all today, and he can feel the tension easing because that night still hurts her, and there's no hiding it. Even after the warning, Flora insists everything's fine. She says Aldo helped her like crazy during the move, and now she's begging to thank you properly for everything you did. Aldred rubs the back of his head, ready to argue, but the girl digs in her heels. If he can't do it now, she'll find some other way later. So he swallows his pride and relents. Still, he can't shake it. There's an idea burning in his mind, one he's desperate to try. She slowly slips out of her clothes, staying trapped in that tight corset, cheeks blazing as she asks again if he's really sure he wants to go through with his plan, especially with her curvy figure. He leans back on the bed, gripping himself tight with his hands, and the young man swears he's 100% sure, then tells her Flora can touch his muscles as much as she wants. But right when the Virgo reaches for the bow on his corset and tries to untie it, he grabs the moment and orders her to keep her hands in her own clothes. With both hands, she grips her curves and presses something solid between them, rubbing up against it in a way that sparks instant friction. The girl smirks like the heat between them isn't enough, then starts rolling those soft roundels in her hands, grinding them together as the temperature spikes. After all that, he lets out a shaky breath, shuddering hard, then clenches his bony fingers around the bedsheets and whips his head to the side. To make sure she's doing everything right, Flora asks if she really needs to keep it exactly like this, and with a shaky breath, the man answers yes, he's thrilled and he loves it. Flora keeps moving exactly as she was told, eyes dropping to the line between them with chilling dignity, while the main character pleads desperately, begging her not to stop. The chaos keeps escalating, right? As she screams that something's about to happen to her, it cuts off mid-sentence and her clothes start ripping from how violently the moment hits. With warm air puffing from her mouth, the heroine blurts out, "I'm freezing hot," especially now that her clothes are ripped and Aldo's done with her. All spent from a fresh, wild experience, the guy flops onto the pillow, head sinking as his eyes nearly close, almost asleep, while Flora, chin in her hands, watches him with sharp, curious interest. The girl locks onto that promise she made, slips the knot from the main character's shirt, and drags her hand over his muscles then. When her fingers brush her chest, Flora almost can't help squealing with pure Aldo can't make sense of it. Does his beloved genuinely crave muscles this badly? He's still got no answer, while she keeps roaming over those muscles, pressing her hands against them, then curling down flat on her chest. Flora decides to lift someone else's hand, scoots right beside the guy, and drops off to sleep in that exact position, grinning like crazy at everything that just happened, especially after what went down last night. Next morning, the young guy runs to the kitchen and tells the girl that Aisha and To are here, while Flora scrambles to wrap up fast, so of course the hero can't help it, and leans over the wall to peek. Right ahead, he spots mouth-watering lunchboxes packed to the brim with sandwiches and tasty snacks. Flora flashes a smile and admits she probably went a bit overboard. She hadn't been to a picnic in forever, so she wasn't sure what she should even cook. He was stacking up baskets of food, buzzing with excitement about their very first picnic plan, and his beloved lit up with the exact same joy he eats. All those friends have been stuck at the front of the house for ages, and then the main character finally steps out with a hat on his head, greeting everyone like a hero while Toke can't miss it. He's practically glowing with pure joy. As Toa Kanesha comes into view, Flora leans in and tells Aido he's going on a picnic for the first time, so he practically bursts with excitement. But Aisha can't help staring like, wait, that's weird? Since the four of them already picked this together. Meanwhile, Aldo just drifts his gaze to the horizon and soaks up the beautiful weather. With steel in his eyes, the young man says it's time to hit the road then. Aisha barrels in and snaps at the idol, reminding him their real job is to gather the eco's fruits. The heroes push into a sea of wheat and corn, where the scorching sun blazes overhead and wheat sprouts shoot up toward the sky in staggering numbers. All four of them stride side by side, trading jokes and laughter like it's their last free minute, because in seconds they're about to start working the field. Flora looks super light and adorable in her brand new summer clothes today, and when someone compliments her, she beams with pure joy. The girl shoots back a compliment, praising his clothes because she honestly thinks he looks amazing, fresh, and ready to shine. Fluffy praise and curious questions keep flying. Then Flora finally hears what the hero thinks of her hat, and he says it's stunning and fits perfectly. Beaming, she vows she'll craft an even cuter straw hat next time. Blinded by the happy couple's glow and their wild joy, Aisha doesn't see her footing slip, then she crashes down the slide. Right then, Toke hooks his grip around her waist, and the second he has her, he blurts out, asking if she's okay, if she's hurt at all. Aisha's cheeks burn as she turns on the spot and heads the other way like she just slipped past trouble. Yeah, nothing big happened. It was just one of those moments. All four friends hauled themselves to the tree and grabbed the eco-fruit. Then Flora demanded, "So, where do these go?" And they told her the truth. You mash them up and make the most delicious jam imaginable. Aisha lifts her head and stares at the tree, wondering if anything's left, but Toke shuts that hope down fast because the villagers want the fruits for themselves. Leaving the food baskets behind, Tokes tells everyone to scatter out and hunt down more fruit-bearing trees. All four sweep the area with eager eyes, hunting for fruits, but the main character is miles away in his own thoughts, and he doesn't join the search. Aisha clocks what's going on and whips around to Aldo, demanding answers. and the calm dude just tells her he's out there checking for any dangerous animals nearby. She laughs under her breath because the hero was all smiles until the very next second snap. He flips into this terrifying mood at the click of his fingers, and she blurts, "Don't pull that scary face so suddenly." To grab everyone's attention, the main character jabs at a hollow tree and claims ferrets are living inside. And an Aisha steps right up to confirm it. Duh. A tiny ferret pops out of a hollow and stares right at the guests, and the young man quickly admits the noise came from the tree because the sounds match this kind of animal's usual habits. So Aisha blurts out, "Why is the hero so focused on that?" The main character claims this is an adventurer's skill from his old days, so you've got nothing to fear, while the girl and the guy, distracted by a ferret, hear a voice shout that they've found the tree. Four of them rise side by side and stare. Toink crunches the numbers and swears the fruits are right there, just way too high to reach. Flora warns that gathering them is going to be a nightmare, and Aisha nods along. Toge swears the same disaster is happening on every other tree too. And then the main character's beloved steps in, asking what they do next. Should they even bother hunting for fruit somewhere else? The hero snaps up a plan. He's climbing that tree to grab the fruits, and he tells the girl not to sweat it because he's insanely good at stuff like that. Back when Aldo was still an adventurer, he had to scramble up towering trees. Aisha even tells Flora she has nothing to fear, and hey, that the guy's a past adventurer, so you can trust him. The young guy swings right in and begs for a favor. He needs the girls to point him to where the fruits are on that tree, and they actually agree to help. Up in the branches, the hero declares he'll huck the fruits down, and then he grabs them all by catching the falling haul with his shirt. So the hero springs up onto a high branch and looks out, stunned by how long it's been since he last climbed like this. Then he decides to soak in the breathtaking view for a moment. Gritting his teeth, the main character steels himself, darts up to the first fruits, and heaves them at Toak, who snatches them cleanly with his shirt and hauls it up like it's nothing. The boy's stomach knotted with worry that he might miss those fruits, especially since he's convinced his reflexes are way better than Aisha thinks. Then, just to shut the argument down fast, Flora grabs the fruit and shoves it into the basket. Aisha points out where the fruits are. 3 of them sit on the left, and the hero spots them fast. But once he's tucked inside the bushes, panic hits and fear takes over that he won't be able to grab them in time. But Flora says there are 2 more, maybe even 4 waiting on the other side, and the young man bolts over and starts plucking the fruits without hesitation. Even so, a few fruits still cling to the top, but everyone agrees it's plenty now. And it's finally time for our main character to drop down from those high branches. And yeah, there are more trees to check, so don't you dare stop at just one. Toke realizes that from this height, if Aldo drops suddenly, he won't be able to reach him. Finally, Aldo clambers up yet another tree, quietly, deadly, and freakishly skilled, snapping through every branch, tossing the fruits first into a buddy's shirt, then watching them drop straight into his beloved's basket. At first, everyone swore the forest would give them nothing, but now Aldo's skills have fruit baskets overflowing to the brim. After grinding through all that hard work, all 4 threw down a blanket and dropped onto the ground to finally start that long-awaited picnic. Aisha quickly clocked how nervous Flora was and tried to calm her down, worried about what might happen if her boyfriend fell. But before long, Flora relaxed, got hooked on the food, and even started giving instructions herself. Glancing away from her friends, the girl admits Aldo zipped around with insane speed and grace, so yeah, she even managed to have a little fun. Toke clocks it instantly. Flora's words jolted the main character out of the gloom, and he's suddenly bright and lively then. Toke whips her head toward her lover and asks Sam, "Are you mad?" But Sam just grins because there's nothing to be angry about. The hero can't help but find the girl's naughty side adorable, and when she gets flustered, she hides her cheeks and refuses to say a word. A friend of the young man starts prying about whether the girl's troublemaking streak is tied to her heredity, and right when they go there, she snaps and screams that it could be while swearing she's nothing like her mother. Aisha suddenly springs off the blanket, plants her bare feet on it, and turns to her friend with a face full of seriousness. Then she blurts out that everything is honestly amazing. After that, Aisha barrels over to Flora, sobbing as she hugs her tight, asks if all those 9 years were worth it, then immediately drops the bomb that Flora's drunk because she downed a whole bottle of wine by herself. Aisha snaps her head toward the main character and warns the guy to watch himself around Flora because if he messes up, her tears will break the friendship and she won't forgive him. And honestly, for a girl, that's shockingly bold and totally embarrassing. Milding speaks softly, and Aldo talks the drunk girl into believing nothing will happen because he knows exactly how vital it is to protect the person he loves. A young white-haired guy licks his finger, then pokes at a girl pinned up against Flora, asking why she's crying, and whether alcohol really messes with her sensitivity like that, only for her to snap back and kick him in irritation. The boy tells her not to feel embarrassed, while Flora and Aldo keep their eyes locked on everything, watching the whole thing unfold without jumping in at all. Toke lurches forward with a drunk girl slung on his back, barely able to cling, her hands gripping his shoulder like a lifeline, while Aisha throws one arm around him and lets the other dangle limp. Aldo stares, stunned, eyes wide at this wild, unexpected sight. He slams the girl onto the sofa, demands she calm down, and lets out a heavy, exhausted breath after dragging her out of the forest and into the house. Then Toke plants his hands on his hips and tries to talk her down, but she just roars out something barely understandable, delighted she's managed to drink that much. Flora spots it with a sly little grin. Aisha drinks in careful sips, never letting herself get too far gone, and that only happens once in a blue moon. The irritated man spits in annoyance, clicks his tongue, and rubs the back of his head as he realizes Aisha has been acting way too suspicious lately, especially after she found out about Flora's upcoming wedding. Aldo steals a quiet look at his girlfriend, peacefully knocked out in a dream so sweet it feels unreal. But the second he hears his best friend is getting married, a storm of baffling thoughts crashes into his head without asking. That Toke snaps to attention, yanks his voice up, and barks at Aisha to wake up, yet she's dead asleep. Ignoring his every scream like it's background noise, Flora just awkwardly giggles, tries to calm things down, and mutters that maybe the girl deserves a little more sleep. Distractingly, he whips his head toward Flora and asks if eco fruits can be munched raw or if they're meant only for jam, and Flora grins right back, telling him they're totally safe to eat just like that. Fresh fruit and custard sandwiches sit perfectly arranged on the table, a tray of the same juicy fruits waiting right beside them, and mugs of hot tea lined up in a row. Then the hero bursts in, shouting for everyone to come feast. Toke slumps in his chair with his arms crossed, grinning like he knows a secret, while Flora stands right beside him. Aldo rushes in with a tray of teacups and blurts that it's ready at the table. The man's eyes snap to the feast, and he practically salivates, exclaiming in pure delight, unable to hide how impressed he is. Aisha mumbled in her sleep. Then a rich wave of tea scent hit her, and she jolted awake so fast cold sweat erupted across her skin. The girl snapped her head toward the dining table, fuming that the treats kicked off without her, then demanded, "Why didn't you tell me?" before diving into the goodies like she'd been robbed. She hauled herself off the sofa, clutched her aching head, and staggered to the table with a fuzzy hangover. Then froze when she saw eco fruits on a plate, still rubbing her forehead like it was on fire. Aisha started whining about her migraines, and Aisha Talk snapped at her, said it was her own damn fault, because it was her who drained the entire bottle of wine all by herself. The hero grins and proudly declares, "I made sandwiches with Stuart and custard, try the weird combo?" Then he gestures at the freshly sliced fruit, offering to dip them in a whole lineup of floral syrups, daring the girl to find a flavor that hits just right. Soon, Aisha bursts in, saying she even made syrups in every color herself, and Ren, Cassia, and Marie proudly show off her culinary wins. Then she nods with total confidence, explaining exactly how to eat those fruits right, and drops her own thoughts. Aisha rises from the table, grinning as she lifts a fork like it's a signal, and Toke and Flora beam with approval. Then Aisha laughs, declares the meal can finally begin, and everyone cheers, sending warm wishes for a great appetite across the table. Aldo rolls an eco on a fork like it's priceless, stares at it with pure admiration, then pops it in his mouth while Flora leans in and bites a custard sandwich with both hands, trying to catch every last detail in Toke. She doesn't even hesitate, shoves a whole piece in, takes her time to savor it, and enjoys every bite. Aldo, still chewing his mouthful, grins as he realizes those syrups turn every fruit into something rich and luscious, especially when sweet syrup and tart fruit team up perfectly. Toke shuts his eyes and savors the sweetness, saying even fatigue vanishes when you've been hauling heavy things, then someone snaps at him to be quiet. Aisha bites into a piece of fruit and, with total confidence, insists the jam tastes completely different, while Flora blushes from shock and urges her to always mix that sour eco with sweet syrup for pure maximum pleasure. Aldo stares at it, totally hooked, smiling as he realizes the flavor shifts with every syrup. Then Aisha leans in at the mug and grins, saying the mariflower syrup hits sweet and sour in the best way. A buddy tells the main guy that Aldo's got a wonderful wife, then casually sips tea from a mug. Flora stares at him, completely baffled. As soon as the girl blurts out, "Stop humiliating me, I'm married to him now," Toke can't help but find her reaction hilarious. The boy clocks that Aisha isn't feeling right. Then he offers her a taste of the syrup from the Rand because it actually works wonders for a brutal hangover, and you can practically hear everyone's "Wait, what syrup?" question bursting in. The young man leans in and says, "The syrup hits hard, it boosts your strength, and even calms your coughing, and since it doesn't taste bitter, anyone can gulp it down without a fight." Out of everything Flora brewed, this one's the best of the bunch. Flora freezes when she hears Tox talk like he knows everything. So Aisha shoots the guy a look and admits she feels a bit better. But then the real question hits, how on earth does her friend know all this? Toke remembered when he and his beekeeping friend teamed up to hunt honey, swatting back stubborn bees as they learned the tricky little tricks of the trade, then swapped all sorts of cool facts along the way. A blinding loud knock slams the house door. Aldo snaps his head around and growls that he'll open it himself. Right then, Aisha tells Taviak to take her to the same apiary friend, but that friend refuses. Aisha's sister, Ina, storms up to the doorstep, plants her hands on her hips, and blasts in with pure fury, demanding whether her soulmate's skipping out and shirking work again. The girl's migraine hits even harder, and she begs her sister to stop screaming, only for Ina to snap even worse, furious enough to demand of Aisha, "Did you really get drunk again?" As that rage keeps spilling out, the sister's screams finally reveal the truth. She missed work because she got drunk again. The girl clutches her head like she's sick to her stomach, while Flora watches, panicked, trying to calm everything down. Tokak then cuts in. Aisha isn't usually like this. Aldo tells Aisha that her friend is getting married, and it hits her like a hurricane of joy and sadness so hard she gets completely wasted. Then one of the main character's friends snaps that if she just spilled the truth honestly and right away, none of this mess would have happened. And every attempt to protect Aisha from the situation only stokes her fury. Flora slides closer to cut off the conversation and teases Ina, asking if she'll taste the fruits from the eco they've gathered. Ina answers with another round of questions about those fruits. Right now, a girl with her hair tied up seats her sister on a chair, slides in a plate piled with a sandwich and eco fruits, and watches closely. Her sister looks doubtful but still scoots in and takes a bite. You can tell from her sister's eyes she's loving every bite, and Flora's lighting up with pure joy. Then Ina leans in and grins. Aldo's got it made because he gets to chow down on food this good every single day. The younger sister's plan totally worked now. Ina's order finally cooled down and it all came down to the economy with whipped cream. She thrusts another plate into the air with a sandwich and tells her sister, "Aldo helped us gather all these fruits so you can chow down to your heart's content." Then adds that the main character is seriously cool. Everyone crowds around the same table. Flora beams at her husband and calls him amazing. And Toke can't resist. He teases a friend by jokingly calling him a monkey. And the hero shrugs it off like, "Yeah, compared to before, this was easy. Nothing special." He remembers that back on those missions, he'd refused to climb anywhere near the sky that high until the exact moment he grabbed the eco fruits off the trees. And now I swear I can see it in my head. Kaiflin rushing in, throwing magic his way. Right when the main character crumpled and took a painful fall, his companion always swooped in, snapping into action with skills and magic to pull him back up. Now she's got one big question. What kind of wedge does a teacher even bring to the table? Back in the days of wild adventurism, she still clicked with the kids, and now she's even more in sync. Old friends' faces, Keel and Elliot, flash in the young man's mind, and he can't help wondering where they disappeared to and what life looks like for them now. The story rockets northeast from the Empire of Vespania, straight to Legacy Village, and to the hotel where the old magic teacher is hiding out now. As she sipped her tea at the table, the girl caught snatches of adventurers' voices from the next table where the guys were saying monsters had wrecked the grain fields in the neighboring village, and they had to go there and finish the job. Climb shoots the man at the table a bright smile, and suddenly she's back to the day her squad gathered around to argue over the same questions: where to go, what mission to run, and what sweet reward would finally come. She pushes up from the table, marches to the front desk, and calls the old lady over, then demands, according to the map, how long the road really takes. The woman tells her it'll take about a month, and if you're going alone, it'll drag on even longer. This path doesn't fit a sorceress at all. She thought she could reach her goal in a shorter time than 100 days. But there's no changing it now, so she'll march on and make it happen. As Krulin storms out of the hotel, he grins, thanks the hostess for her care, and waves goodbye. Then, behind a wall, the Count's mercenary keeps his eyes locked on the sorceress, hiding his face beneath a black hood. He's stuck asking where Aldred went because the man who killed the dragon just vanished. Now he's wanted all over the kingdom, and Zoak is still out on his mission, zeroing in on one target just to keep watch. To snag Aldred, Zoak has to stay locked on his old squad mate, the magician Karun. Meanwhile, Karun has zero clue what's coming. The man replays every surveillance moment in his head, and from the girl's exact route, he's almost certain she's sneaking toward her old companion. Bursting out of the shadows, Zoak slips in behind Karun, stays just out of reach, and flashes a small smile, cold as ice, not one bit kind. She has no clue at all, but the mercenaries are already salivating for the second he finally rolls into Aldred and takes him down on their orders. The very next morning, Flora throws herself into the garden, yanking weeds, planting like a machine, and locking in hard on the work while the main character creeps up behind her, nearly silent. A young man cooks up a nasty plan in his head, and a sinister grin just blooms on his face on its own. Then he lunges with his hands out toward the unsuspecting girl while she's still out there, picking crops from the beds. Flora's eyes meet two warm palms as the guy blurts, "Who is it?" And the second she realizes, panic hits, she screams and she topples straight onto him. Flora wrinkles her nose and complains that he can't just sneak up on her like that. Aldo bursts out laughing, because he wanted to see her scared. And once he realizes it, Flora turns her back in pure annoyance while the main character looks even more entertained by the whole thing. He rushes to apologize to his beloved girl, grips her hand, and hauls her up off the ground. Then he shields her straw hat from the scorching sun with his other hand, keeping it shaded and safe. They tilt their heads toward the sun, squinting as its glare hits them hard, and the guy tells everyone that when he first showed up, it was spring. Everything moves so fast there that you barely even realize time is passing. Flora and Aldo squeeze hands by one of the beds, and Flora murmurs that there are only a few left. Soon they'll be out there picking beans and carrots. He nods along, agreeing with her, and she points to the other beds like she's mapping the future. 2 weeks left in 3 weeks, the urban onion harvest kicks off, and then we'll shift to the next species. The man says, "A season shift is coming, autumn will be here soon." And Flora's cheeks burn as she squeezes someone else's hand harder and promises that the long-awaited event is about to explode at the Autumn Harvest Festival. She finishes her thought, and when Autumn's holiday finally arrives, they'll be officially husband and wife, and the joy hits like fireworks. She gathers food for him to hunt, squeezes a little bag into her lover's hands, and sends him off with a hopeful smile. "Good luck, sir." Aldo's about to step out when the girl whips her hand up, presses a loud kiss to his cheek, and floods her face with red from embarrassment, leaving Aldo totally stunned. The young man pokes his cheek and flinches hard in shock, while Flora just smirks, winks with one eye, and sticks out her tongue like it's all part of the joke. Laughing, they lock eyes, then Aldo grumbles with a grin that his beloved just stole one kiss. All this time, a buddy of the main character is stuck outside the door, grumbling about the scorching morning heat. Then his eyes get snagged on the picture posted by the house. Aldo and Flora are crammed at the doorway, kissing and clinging while Aldo's rage boils over. He's screaming that there's nothing worth being sweet about, and it's finally time to go. Fury tightened in Toke's fist as he snapped that this couple always carries on like this. Then the guy shot back, remembering what happened to him just a few hours ago while he was eating breakfast at his place. One bite of that bun, and he's already swooning. Those eco sandwiches were insanely good, and the idea of having a wife hits him like a dream. Now he's hunting for a girl just like Flora, kind, economical, and sweet. All he can see is Aisha, his girlfriend, staring back in his mind. And the second the thought hits, his eyes blow wide, he coughs and chokes on his food, then scrambles to escape it. Toke bolts into the night, yelling that the new couple is the reason he's like this, and the main character's friend scrambles off too while Flora and Aldo stare at him, totally lost. While everyone else is already heading for the fields, Ina yanks her sleepy sister awake, shouting at her to move faster, shaking her side to side because the only one still buried in bed is her. And it looks like Aisha only opens her eyes, snaps that she's already up then. Wham! She collapses again, flops onto a soft pillow, and drives her sister crazy. The younger sister mutters in disgust, refuses to roll out of bed, and snaps at her sister that she can't just leave and go without her. Then Oenus lets out a furious scream, saying that means Aisha won't be showing up for work at all today. Still, after hauling the girl out of the house, the older sister slams water into a wooden basin and barks at her sleepy younger sister to wash up right now. Aisha squints with one eye half shut, scrubs her face with soap, and mutters that it won't even lather. Then the sister shrieks that the youngest is smearing tooth powder on her face, and the older one rushes in, wipes the girl down with a towel to save the day. The younger sister fumbles into her clothes and slaps on an apron upside down complete with pants, and Anina erupts, screaming that she's doing it the wrong way. She tries to gulp down a fast breakfast, but her older sister is screaming at her. Yet it all falls apart because her eyes are still half-lidded with sleep. The younger one slumps face first onto the table and drops back into sleep, and Amina has to rein her in again, then demands she dig deep and gather her strength. The action lunges into the forest right there. 3 wild deer freeze beside the leaves, totally oblivious that a hunter's about to turn them into prey. Right now, the main character yanks the bowstring tight, locks his sights on a deer and lets the arrow fly, then snaps it straight into the bullseye, dropping his target in an instant. He dropped to a crouch in front of the dead animal and realized Flora was attacked by that red bear a full month ago. At first, every creature scattered in terror. Then later they crept back to their home habitat. Tiny magical creatures tagged along with them. And this mess got handled fast, though he's still wishing the red bear would disappear for good. Then he pushes forward. At one point, the guy spots Karina lurking in the bushes. Then she gets caught and mutters that she tried to sneak past him, but he just smiles because that little trick won't work on him. Pouting through her resentment, she snaps that the young man is pulling out his instincts again. Karina backs up 30 meters, but it still doesn't help. And the main character insists everyone will be able to tell the difference between a human and an animal. Karina's still fuming. Aldo can't be some run-of-the-mill adventurer because he even took down the red bar by himself. The hero smirks and tells her to hunker down behind the wind since you can track anyone by their scent. The girl stares in shock and demands again and again how this could possibly be true. Then the guy leans toward the darkness of the forest and tells her, like it's obvious, that Lauren is coming from the north side. He grins because his hunch is hit, blurting that Lauren is already here. Karina doesn't even look up. Then the main character offers to hunt down the hunter hiding in the bushes all by himself. Karina straightens toward the wind, shuts out everything else, and listens first. Then she leans in and tries to catch the scent hanging in the air. Karina pulls it off, then she asks where that smell is coming from. and the guy shrugs it off, telling her to test her own hunch, so she scoops up pebbles from the ground, lines them up, and fires them at the exact spot she's aiming for. With a savage roar, every one of the 5 stones blasts into the bushes, and right after that, a man's blood-curdling scream tears through the air. It wrecks him that the hits landed. A hunter peeks from the bushes, glaring at the couple as they slap high fives because the prank actually worked. Then he stalks closer, and Lauren asks if he really taught her that, only for him to smirk and say he was just offering advice. Laughing, Karina tells Lauren she tracked him down by the smell of the alley. Then she explains that the wind basically guided him straight to her, so she knew exactly where he was. Caught red-handed, the hunter slaps his forehead, admits he ate the ALA, then curses his luck when the wind blew at that exact moment. Karina stares at the main character with pure admiration, because thanks to him, she's got a whole new skill now. The man gently strokes the girl's head and tells her she can act whenever she wants. Plus, she's got a sharp nose, all that's left is to graduate. And then the hunter waves off any worries in the north and urges the heroes to move forward. Abruptly, the main character slams on the brakes. He doesn't sense a monster or an animal at all. It's something far more dangerous. Overwhelming magic. Altudo cranes his head and spots Karun hiding in the foliage, staring in shock because if she's really here, then how in the world did the sorceress get this close? She's mortified that the main character spotted her so fast, and she admits the truth, she really did try to vanish, but her cover blew the second she was found. The guy blurts in shock, "Why is Karun here?" And Karina and Lauren whip their eyes to the main character, then to the stranger, because whoever's standing in front of them now doesn't ring a bell. Karun and Aldo meander through the village's cozy streets, and the girl's heart swells with joy the moment she takes in the vibe of this place. She halts to admire the tidy houses stacked just right. And Aldo, a bit behind her, simply watches her happiness with a soft smile. Side by side, they push deeper into the alley where gorgeous flowers burst into bloom, and Karuna turns to Aldo like, "I get it, this is exactly where I should stay." And Aldo just nods, grinning with approval. At last, they step into a modest little house that feels warm and lived in. And the girl blurts out, "So, this is the hero's place." And the guy just nods, "Yeah, this is it." Flora, standing off to the side with her eyes wide and stunned, couldn't shake the disturbing thoughts crowding her mind like something felt terribly off in the air. Aisha's loud, indignant voice slammed the moment to a halt as she blurted out to Aldo that Karina had mentioned Flora, his old flame, was back, and Flora visibly flinched like the air turned sharp. Tension snapping tight in her chest while Aldo looked even more worked up than before. Karun's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but a spark of excitement pushed her forward. She lifted a hand to the bunch of confused guys trying to calm the air, then introduced herself and explained that back in her adventuring days, she'd been in Aldo's squad, right there to pull attention away from the tension that kept swelling. The sorceress asks if they can learn the names of everyone standing here, so Toke takes a deep breath and says his name is Toke. He's busy repairing furniture while Aisha smiles, taps her chest, and tells her that she helps out in her family's vineyards. Flora fights back her thrill, strides up to her husband, and proudly tells him who she is. Her dad runs the whole village. Right behind them, Aldo leans in, watching the girl like she's trouble he wants to see unfold, and a sharp little excitement sparks in his chest. Aisha crosses her arms tight over her chest, strides up to the young people with total confidence, and blurts out that Flora left out something crucial. Confusion crashes between Flora and Aldo then. Out of nowhere, they both go wide-eyed, freeze in place, and stare at the shock. Blushing hard, the main character shoots a guilty glance at Flora, and the moment she blushes back, the whole scene turns painfully awkward. Kurune stares at what's unfolding and freezes solid, caught between wild anticipation and pure confusion, because he can't make sense of what's happening between those two. Aldo ends it with an awkward grin, cheeks blazing as he rubs the back of his head, and right beside him, Flora, mortified, drops her gaze and blurts out that they'll be getting married soon. The sorceress freezes, straight up stunned, like reality just betrayed her. Then she sputters out a long, broken mess of words, unable to hide her emotions. Took says that ever since then, the hero and his girlfriend have finally been living in quiet, real peace until Karum cuts in, saying that after the Red Bear incident, their bond leveled up fast and somehow ended with a wedding. The sorceress looks back and says that back then, when she rode missions with the squad, Aldo never spoke cold, locked in, and deadly serious. And forget heart-to-heart chats, he simply wasn't built for that. Aisha blurts out that she can't even picture her friend like this, and the main character just smiles back, saying those talks about him are so damn embarrassing. Flora stares at her loved one and whispers that he used to carry an aura that stirred nothing but trouble, yet she's always known in her bones that beneath all that, he's the kindest man around. Karuna can't stop herself. Did Flora and Aldo meet before Flora snaps back that she first laid eyes on him in this village 9 years ago, and she was 9 years old then too? Karuna's sorceress stare turns icy, and her friend fires back that her guesses are dead wrong. Right now, the table's already laid out, packed with dishes, and everyone gathered around starts the meal by wishing each other a hearty, pleasant appetite. Karuni snatches a spoonful in his hand and digs into the soup, her face lighting up with every bite, while Aldado leans in and asks how it tastes. With a grin, the sorceress gushes that her tomato soup and radish stew are unbelievably good. No fresh veggies like this ever show up in the capital. Then she turns to Aldo and asks if he doesn't think this life switch is amazing. And the main character just smiles back, convinced it's all because of his friends. Flora snatched up a plate, handed it to the guest and said it was venison Aldo bagged all by himself in the forest. Then she leaned in, grinning, insisting the sorceress had to take a bite because it was insanely good. He stabs it neat onto a fork, studies it with a hungry, appetizing grin, then slides it into his mouth and carefully picks what comes next. Karun grunts in delight, raving that the meat is so tender, juicy, and ridiculously tasty, and Flora lights up at the compliment, then tells the girl to dig in even more. He dips his bite into the sauce, smirks, and says it'll hit even harder with a sweet and spicy kick. Then he takes a chew and practically melts at how good it is. Aisha steps in and tells you, if you stack meat and sauce into a sandwich, it hits even harder. Karune swears that this way tastes even better. Then, right there in front of everyone, the girl clamps down, bites off a massive chunk, and gulps it down in one go. She choked on a huge chunk, panic hit her. She begged for water. Then when she grabbed the glass, it was bone dry. Toe lifts a glass toward the girl, who's squinting through a raw, painful throat, but the glass is empty. And that just sparks the guy's cruel amusement, like he's waiting to mess with me. Karun steps in and says he'll help, promising to bring water right now. Aisha's sorceress lashes her spell into the air, whispering like she's calling a miracle. Purest water, bloom on the tip of your finger. Then, after a few heartbeats, her glass snaps full with exactly what she needs. Finally, she chugs the entire glass of water in one gulp, slams it onto the table with a loud bang, and snaps at Toke's joke with pure fury. Pinching her brows down like thunder, the girl snaps that her friend is terrible then. He erupts in laughter because the prank nailed it. Aisha swears Karuna is her savior, and the sorcerer just shrugs, saying she didn't do anything special at all. Although he decides to quiz Karuni how her teaching at the magic school is going, and if everything will truly be okay because she vanished out of nowhere and left the whole place hanging. Heat flares in her cheeks. She snaps her gaze away and tells him to drop the topic for now because she refuses to drag up painful past memories right here at the table, with all that delicious food waiting. The main character finally agrees to talk about it, just not right now, and I swear, with magic you can pull water straight from thin air, so who even needs a well? Now she's staring at her own powers like, can I do this too? And Flora smiles, saying you'd need a special gift for it, something like Korun. The sorceress tells him, every single person has a spark of magic in them, so you can learn to master it, no matter what family you're born into or what outside forces try to shape you. Karune asks the girls if they want to test their magic power, even if the reading won't be perfect, and the moment she says it, they light up and shout that they're in. Aisha kicks things off. She stands there while the sorceress tells the girl to straighten up, warns that Karuni's magic will reach into someone else and might feel weird at first, but she has to stay calm. Then the light bursts around her, and the poor girl can't hide her shock. Flora stares in terror, while Karun snaps at the girl to stay put. Aisha can't shake this creepy feeling like something is pressing on her from the inside. Then the sorceress grips her shoulder, shuts her eyes, and goes in. Somehow the calculus makes her feel amazing. She drops to her knees, trembling hard, mumbling under her breath. Flora explodes into a scream, eyes bulging with shock. Right away, she clamps Aldo's eyes shut, begs him not to look, and refuses to say why. The sorceress reaches her verdict. Aisha's magic is tragically thin, and even with practice it won't jump much, but it will grow next. Flora braces herself and trembles with fear before charging forward anyway. Flora is absolutely freaking out. She begs everyone at the table not to stare at her because if the girl ends up looking like Aisha, it'll turn into a total awkward nightmare. Aisha's skin crawls right away because it feels like she just said something obscene. Karun fires back fast, saying there's nothing shameful here and it's really not that serious. Still, Aisha snaps the main character's eyes shut, then he shuts his own to pass it to his best friend. And that's when outrage explodes in him because he can't figure out why he's forbidden to look. Aisha tells them that when Karune touched her, her body reacted on its own and now Flora's feeling the exact same thing. She clenches her fists, growls through her teeth, and snaps her legs together with pure impatience. Flora's breathy, unrestrained moans thunder through the room as the magics work over her during the assessment, and her cheeks go bright red. The sorceress snaps a hand over the girl's mouth and tells her to stop making that weird noise. Then the guys in the room just stare, stunned and speechless, while Aisha lets out a chuckle and asks the main character if he wants to watch. Two voices crash in at once, one from the guy, one from Talk then. Buttgren jams his hands even harder into his friend's face, shouting that it's impossible. But the young man's eyes fly open anyway as he stares straight at his beloved. The guy stares as Flora parts her lips and shuts her eyes, while the sorceress's hand settles on her shoulder. Then he opens his mouth to savor it, only for his girlfriend to cut the moment short and snap, That's enough. Karune blurts that it is finally ready, then beams Flora can use combat magic thanks to her massive mana supply, and the whole room freezes as the shock hits everyone's faces. Even the girl who can't quite believe she's hearing this. The moment she gets there, the main character's beloved bursts into his arms and whispers that maybe, just maybe, he'll be able to use magic. And Aldo's heart explodes with joy at this wild, unexpected news. The sorceress declares that if this is aerial magic, she'll finally teach the main character's girl, and right now she'll be her mentor. And it hits the guy like lightning. His girlfriend doesn't even mind magic. Flora stared at him with puppy dog eyes and blurted, "If I can learn air magic, I'll dry my lush, beautiful curls in a flash." He lets out a laugh, pats his beloved on the head, and goes, "Of course that's totally her style." Toke frowns and blurts, "So that's not combat magic." Then he wonders, half in awe, half in disbelief, could something like that actually be used in everyday life? The magician glances at the hugging couple, and instead of jealousy or rage, a surprising smile blooms on his face. All she can't wrap her head around is that 9-year love. How did Flora actually wait for Aldo and refuse to move on? So why are they together now? Now the sorceress is hit with sudden shame back in her head. She used to daydream about being the main character's bride before she ever reached the village. And Karun snaps into action, covering her cheeks and trying to shake those old memories loose. She clears her throat, turns to Aldo, and grins. She's thrilled her old companion found a good man, and she congratulates him and the bride on their wedding, wishing them happiness with a bright, smiling face. After getting that blessing from an old friend, Flora and Aldo light up with smiles and gratefully thank them for the sweet words and the good wishes. After that, the guru doesn't jump to the next person. He turns to the one right in front of him and tests his magic, then roars at the top of his lungs so loud you can hear him even beyond the house. A cooking contest while she carried a basket packed with eggs. Dozens of chickens with wild, long feathers crowded around her like a live audience, and the girl gasped, asking, "Are we really baking sweets together?" 2 girls on the sidelines nodded and said, "Yep, that's the tradition." In their village, a bride who ties the knot during the harvest festival has to make the treats for everyone herself. And today, there's even a training session before the holiday hits. She was so completely thrown off that even the eggs in her basket bounced like they were scared. And when the girl Soku said, "Turns out Karun is going to be with us," the girl snapped and asked herself again, staring at the shock like it didn't make sense. All 3 girls marched up to the house, yanked the doors open, and told Flora they were here. Then someone inside blared, "Thank you so much for your help." 2 girls and 2 guys packed into the room. Then the girls who arrived froze when they saw Karina was there too. The named girl snapped back that yes, and admitted she wasn't exactly thrilled. Karina muttered that Aldo told her to hold back, watch her mouth, and not start a mess. Then her mind flashed to that moment. She stormed up to everyone, yelling that Aldo's ex-girlfriend had shown up. Karun muttered like she finally got it, then pointed out that it was her, and the girl beside me groaned, saying, "Guys just don't get humor." Karina dropped her head and begged forgiveness for what happened, and Karumai let out a soft sigh with a grin, telling her she wasn't worried at all. Karina's cheeks flared as Karuna introduced herself, and the girl's eyes lit up with interest before she smiled and said she could call her Karina. Just like that, it felt great to meet her. The girl strode up to Karuna and gushed that she was incredibly beautiful, and the moment Karuna's embarrassment hit, she blushed hard and stared back like, "Wait, what?" Karina stared at Koron in disbelief and blurted, "So you and Aldo really had nothing—" Meanwhile, the angry guy, arms locked across his chest, was already hovering over the girl, and one of the girls yelled to Karina with zero chill, "She doesn't study at all." Cradling Karina's head in his hands and yelling that she'd committed a crime, he demanded to know from Karun whether she'd visited Elgis yet. Karun pleaded, begging him to forgive Karina already, and the girl snapped back, "Yes." Aisha walked her out, and in the end the two finally clicked. Then Karina got her residence permit. Someone brought up the fact that she was also staying at Aisha's house, and I told them, "Yeah, but I didn't want to trouble that sweet couple." Then the 2 girls snapped their heads over and zeroed in on us. Flora, mortified but determined, flashed a nervous smile and blurted that they should start. Already she was about to cook up a storm today. The girl beside her grinned, saying she was fired up too. Then Flora pressed her palms together by her face and snapped, quickly, with a hot flush spreading across her cheeks. She had this wild feeling. She'd done wife-level cooking 100 times. Her cheeks flared bright and she shut her eyes tight. Aldo turned beet red from head to toe, while the girl beside her looked flustered, then grinned and told Flora she was spot on for the role. The guy beside me said they'd handle their own business, but even as the nearby person agreed and asked if they actually needed help, he couldn't shake the worry in his gut. The florist flashed a smile and said, "That's right, no men are allowed." Karuni's eyes widened as she blurted, "Really?" The second girl nodded and added, "It's a whole ceremony for the bride." The guys spun toward the door and marched out, and Aldo whipped his head back to say, "Yeah, sure, if anything, they're basically calling us." The girls shrugged it off and said, "It's fine." Karina stared at Flora and demanded to know what they had to do. Then Flora crossed her arms and said, "It means Idhana, Karina, Karune, and me will make the dough." Flora shouted Aisha's name, saying she'd handle the baking, and Aisha muttered through the displeasure before agreeing. While Ina called out from behind, Flora spun around to Karina and Ina and told them she was handing the mixing of the ingredients over to them. Flora pushed a bowl of egg whisking toward Karuna and told her, "First, you've got to beat them until they turn frothy." Karuna nodded awkwardly and blurted, "So it's white." She thrust her hand forward with a whisk and shot him an awkward look like she was praying he knew which side to use. Then she suddenly needed those eggs that were already cracked in a bowl, only for the bowl to keep slipping sideways as Kurun's disasters sent everything splattering everywhere. Aisha, still close by with logs cradled in her arms, watched the girl struggle with everything she had. Karina, cheeks blazing and breathless, shoved the ingredients into a mortar and tried to grind them down while Ina stood beside her with a bright grin, encouraging her as she chopped the food with steady, sharp swings. Flora slid up to Karuna and asked how the test was going, but there the girl stood head to toe drenched in whatever was in that bowl, while Flora, groceries jammed in her arms, awkwardly stared. Karun just clutched the bowl behind her back like it could save her. She wiped the grime from the girl's hair with a napkin as Karun rushed in with a heartfelt apology, insisting he'd just needed a tiny bit more for everything to click while Flora told her, "Don't worry." Karun spun around and saw the girl behind her rubbing the top of her head, and she told Flora, "Listen, how did Aldo confess to you?" The girl flushed from head to toe while Karun watched her, grinning like she couldn't believe it. She just couldn't picture Aldo like that. Aisha strolled by with logs in her arms, flashing a grin as she said, "Flora was the very first one to confess." Then Flora whipped around with wide, shocked eyes and cheeks burning red. Karun winked and flashed a thumbs up, praising Flora for being brave, and Flora's words stumbled as she started to stutter. She was just then Aisha, smirking like she knew everything, declared that they had a special flower symbol meant to show recognition. Karuni shot up from her chair and blurted out in a frenzy, "In what sense?" While Flora cringed in shame, clapped a hand over her eyes, and shook her red-stained hands, yelling at the girls to stop. Then Aisha just grinned and asked, "Is that a bad thing?" And somehow, right there, they became a couple. Aisha shot Karuma a wink and promised, "I'll tell you later." And right then, Flora's cheeks went scarlet. She trembled in pure embarrassment and blurted Aisha's name like she couldn't hold it in. The guy outside by the table snapped his head toward the house, where screams blasted through the walls loud enough to reach the street, and Karun watched it all with a grin. Karune kept thinking the capital would be totally different. Then she landed here and still couldn't even bake cakes, right? And sure, everyone says magic can fix it, but nope, you can't just magic your way into a real cake. While she struggled, the other girls laughed and chatted like nothing in the world mattered, happily soaking up every moment together. Karun refused to stay down for long. She had to get back on her feet. SAP smoke from the fire drifted through the street, spilling out of the house chimney. Karina clutched the cloth in her hands and started drooling, raving about how delicious it smelled. Ina behind her nodded along, fully backing the claim. Two guys barged into the house, and the blonde smirked. "You can't resist that smell." He shot the girls a question, was it ready? Aisha jolted the moment she heard them. With her hands on her hips, the girl blared at Guy to stay out of here. Then the blonde man shot back, asking whether Mono had at least been training, while Aldo, right behind him, scratched the back of his head in pure awkward confusion. Flora grinned and told them, "It won't work yet. I need a little time to cool off." Then asked them to hang tight. Aisha glared at the guy and snapped that he better not ruin things, and the guy shot back furious. "Do I even have to treat them?" Flora, totally lost, asked, "How would that even work?" as they wrapped up, proud that they'd nailed making furniture today. Karun stared at the guy in shock and blurted out, "Did you make all this furniture?" The craftsmanship was so top tier it practically shouted, "He's the real deal." Karun smiled with her eyes closed and told him she wanted to order furniture from him, and the guy, already blushing, scratched the back of his head and agreed, mortified but happy. Karun lit up and praised the table like it was pure gold, and the worker, red-faced, stood right by her and just listened as Aisha and Ina stood nearby, watching in dead silence. I watched ahead, biting my nails, thinking Kurune and Toka were finally hitting it off, then panic struck, because my sister is going to roast her for being some charming girl from the capital. The moment I said it, that girl went deathly pale and snapped her palm to her face. With her back to her sister, Aisha sniffed hard, panicking as she told herself her sister was in shock, but Aisha couldn't care less. She rubbed her nose and shrugged, saying it was probably just a cold. Then she gasped and crumpled to the floor. Aisha barged ahead past everyone, grinning like she'd found treasure. "It smells amazing. Go check it out." While Ina, still shaking on the floor, stared at her sister as the others went wide-eyed in shock. Forget all that for now. Two pies sit on the table, and one of them is dressed up with gorgeous orange rings. Flora grips a board stacked with two more pies. And behind her, Karina grins at the sweet treats like they're about to be her next obsession. On the table sat a stack of whole pies, while sliced pieces and crinkled wrapping paper with bright ribbons crowded the scene. Then in the living room, the couch was stuffed with bags, packages, baskets, and even aprons layered with fabric. Aldo took a bite of the pie and his eyes lit up like it was pure heaven, while Karun gobbled her slice and told Flora she always nails the cooking. Aisha just grinned right back, making it clear it was all for Aldo, and the moment the girl heard that, her cheeks instantly went hot red. Aina leaned in and asked Flora what she was feeling, and Flora stared straight ahead, hand over her mouth as if the truth might slip out. She jabbed a finger at the pieces and snapped that there wasn't enough sugar, then added, "You can toss in more spices here, but this part is going to be tough." Kurune shot back, "So it goes?" Stunned because, yeah, it's amazing. But if someone said they still need to practice more, Aisha lost it completely, boiling with fury. Flora grinned and promised she could move mountains with her cooking, while he ate in silence, thinking, for now, this meal is theirs. Flora headed outside with Omi, scanned the yard, and spotted a herb she wanted. So she said she'd go pick it right away, humming with a bright smile as she moved forward, then kneeling down to stuff fresh grass into a basket beside her. Behind the girl, cowering on the ground, 5 shadowy figures suddenly loomed with their faces hidden, and the tree leaves blasted upward like they were caught in a storm. She went ghost white as she stared down. While inside the house, Flora's blood-curdling scream rang out and everyone froze solid. Kuparume's shock burst into a scream. She demanded to know what kind of scream that was then. Aldo bolted past her straight for the exit. He burst outside, fear crumpling his face as he shouted for Flora because the uninvited guests were already backing away and Flora was slumped over one of them like she'd passed out. Aldo froze with terror, eyes blazing wide as Flora dangled over someone else's shoulder, and didn't so much as flinch. Then, boom, a thunderous explosion erupted, and Aldo and Kogrun slammed their hands over their faces, trying to shield themselves. Flora's ruined basket, shredded and slammed, rocketed at the hero, then it hit the ground and skidded, bouncing her down at his side. Kurune bolted forward, yelling at Aldo to figure out what was happening, while the same man who'd been slammed by the blast staggered, stared ahead, and couldn't stop trembling. The guy shot ahead while the girl lunged forward with her arm out. The basket stayed on the ground, and Aldo snatched it with both hands and started digging into it. The guy trembled with eyes as wide as saucers, hands shaking as he clutched at the thing. Aldo grit his teeth and stared ahead, then shouted for Flora, but she'd already been kidnapped, and thick smoke was still pouring out from the blasts. Flora's eyes fluttered open as she hung upside down from her captor's shoulder, and I jerked upright in shock. She snapped her head to the side, eyes wide as saucers. The trees were burning like a wildfire nightmare, charred stumps and thick black smoke everywhere. And those 5 kidnappers in black suits marched ahead, smashing through everything, leaving only destruction and flames in their wake. The girl spun around, fear punching her chest as she stared at the chaos trees crashing down and blackening under the flames. Why would anyone kidnap Flora? And on the horizon, between the thick forests, a jagged mountain rose, its peak blazing with a bright, eerie glow. At the mountain's very summit, Karin gripped a glowing magic staff that blazed so bright it could be spotted from anywhere, eyes shut tight. She stood perfectly still like she was zeroing in on something. While Aldo, hunched behind her in a raincoat, leaned in and demanded, "So, do you know where Flora is right now?" The girl blurted out yes, and honestly having that insane magic power saved them all, because it's the only reason they pinned down her location so fast. The girl's smile collapsed. She sagged her shoulders and stared at the floor, completely crushed, and she whispered that there was just one thing. But the guy pushed, demanding to know what it was. She gripped her magic staff tight and told Aldo that Flora was terrified. Then Aldo's jaw clenched hard and he shut his eyes, crushed with sadness. Karuna snapped that she'd battled this exact type before and told Albaldo, "This guy's from the Abylonia Kingdom Guild. I'm pretty sure his name was Zoak." He'd waited out and figured they were probably hired by the kingdom to track him down, but he can't get one thing through his head. Why would they kidnap Flora, and why won't they even negotiate with him? Right behind them, Aisha and Toke barreled forward, shouting for Albedo. Then Aisha shrieked, demanding what the heck was happening and why Flora. The guy snapped his head toward them, and the others stared at the hero, his clothes, his look pure shock on their faces. Aisha trembled and screamed that he couldn't stay silent, so Toke slid his hand onto her shoulder, shot her a quick glance, and nodded his head toward both sides. Aisha stared at him, stunned, while the hero on the sideline stayed deadly quiet, head bowed like he was bracing for impact. She spun back to Aldo and told him she got it. She trusted him, then called his name, and Aldo snapped his gaze to her. With tears streaming down her face, she stared him down and ordered him to bring the Flora back, no doubt about it. Even though he didn't say a word, he kept his eyes fixed ahead, wild with the ready-to-charge energy of a warrior about to hit the battlefield. Toke shot his fingers to the side and bragged that it was all set, then told him to head there while the girls raced off to grab Tawak. Karuni leaned in and asked what happened to Ina and Aisha. They just said they sent her home so she wouldn't get in the way. Now the hero was alone on the mountain, staring at the forest ahead as black smoke curled out like something was about to strike. The kidnappers screeched to a stop. Flora was dangling in midair, wrists yanked to a tree, a blazing bonfire roaring beneath her feet, and the five of them scattered into different directions to hunt down the watchmen. Confusion clouded her eyes as she stared forward, and with every surge of heat licking up around her, she snapped her gaze to the man on the log calmly sharpening his blade. A girl burst in from the side and shouted at Mr. Zoke that Mr. Clark had ordered only Aldred to be captured. So why was she here? Mr. Zoke didn't even look up. He kept sharpening his blade like nothing mattered. Flora heard the name Aldred and immediately wondered if they meant Aldo instead. But she could barely breathe with worry. Then the man grinned and said, "It was all a decoy so they could lure out an A-rank adventurer." Flora heard him and snapped her eyes wide open, stunned as questions ripped through her mind that was this really about an A-rank adventurer? The girl beside him shrieked, demanding to know if he wanted to kill him, and that snapped everything into royal treason territory. Flora stared at them, completely frozen in shock. With a madman's stare, Zoke fixes his eyes on the flames and mutters that the only goal is to survive right now. Then he smirks because magic is exactly what's going to help him do what he's after. Flora shook with wild horror, staring ahead like she couldn't breathe. Zoax's partners snapped into alarm at what they were seeing. The girl choked and looked down, already on the edge of tears, wondering what in the world she could do because they wanted to kill Aldo. She didn't even clock that Zoke had slid up beside her. Then the man snapped his head down, fury burning in his eyes, and pressed his sword right against her. Zoak grinned and shoved his sword to Flora's throat as she shook in terror. Then he told her not to worry about her beloved anymore. "Don't you think you should put yourself first?" He shoved his sword right under her throat. So close she jerked her head back and shook harder, then shut her eyes as tears poured out. The man barked that they had huge plans for her. She was Aldred's bait, and the girl shrieked in terror while a Zoak supporter lurked behind her, sword gripped tight in his hands. Something slammed through the guy's chest and he crumpled backward right as the mage girl's mouth hung open and she trembled. Zoak flashed a grin and then an arrow with a razor tip streaked toward them at full speed. So many arrows rained into Zoax's companions. She snapped up a magical barrier for herself, but the hooded guy beside her got an arrow straight through his chest. Arrows kept raining from above, smashing into another adventurer who'd come with Zoak right in the chest. Zoak yanked his blade off Flora's throat, then threw his hand over his head as the arrow aimed at him shattered into two. The man yanked his sword free, tossed his head up, and in the next breath, Zoak released his bow when a shadow slammed down from above. The tip of that blade shot forward, and Aldo erupted in rage as Zoak smiled like he'd already won. Blade in front of his face, the adventurer froze, then the clash detonated into a massive explosion, and the violent wind from the collision yanked Flora's hair every which way until she snapped her eyes shut. As the smoke finally thinned, two men stepped into the open and clashed blades, one furious hero Azok snarling why he'd done it, and the other answering that it was all so they could fight again. Aldo snatched his sword back from Zoak, swung it up to strike, and yelled that Flora had nothing to do with it. Then Zoak grinned and told Aldrin that if he wanted her back, it would take dying first, over his dead body. Flora groaned as she dangled from the tree, and a mage girl slipped out of the bushes beside her, gripping her staff tight. Then she snarled through clenched teeth and started casting, and a black slime-like substance oozed straight from the staff. Flora clocked it and snapped her worried eyes wide, locking onto her direction, while the mage's projectile tore past in the opposite lane as it screamed forward. The girl snapped her head toward it because that shadowy black mess was closing in on Aldo, right for his back while he was still locked in a fight with Zoak. Flora screamed at Aldo, warning him of what was coming from behind, and Aldo clenched his teeth as he snapped his head around there, swelling by the second. Was a blazing mass pouring out light like it was about to blow apart any moment? A thunderous explosion ripped through the air and thick smoke swallowed everything, so no one could see what was happening inside after that attack. Aldo watched a huge, transparent dome snap into place around the blast. Flora was still lassoed to the tree as smoke billowed and dust surged around her, and she screamed with her eyes clamped shut. Smoke twisted into a furious vortex right at the heart of the chaos. And when it finally cleared, a massive magic circle was there, shielding the two figures behind it. Flora snapped her eyes open and froze at what she saw. She gasped, then screamed Karun's name as a girl with a magic staff shielded the heroes, and Aldo stood there with his back turned to her. As the magic circles sealed the couple from every angle, Zoak crouched behind the stones, peeking from the side, his mind racing with thoughts about that woman. Then he craned past the rock to stare at the hero and the girl. Zoak snapped at the mage girl on his team, and she jolted hard. He told her to take Karun, leaving the job to her, and she went rigid with nerves. teeth clenched tight, while Zoak sprinted past her toward whoever waited up ahead. As he sprinted through the trees, a hero burst out from the side foliage and whipped his sword toward Zoak Grind like Zoak Grind had been waiting for this exact ambush. The man ripped 3 razor blades from his hands and aimed them at the hero. Aldo threw his hand up to block, but the blades still sank into his face. Men launched straight at each other, weapons flashing meanwhile. The Zawaka mage hurled a raging torrent of magic from her staff, but Karuna snapped up a protective circle and brushed her opponent's strike aside with ease. The magician's nerves lit up in her chest as she panicked over one thing. She wasn't Karuna's match. With her eyes shut tight, she shoved her staff forward and hissed a spell. The moment the staff lifted, magic circles erupted around her, hanging in the air like a storm. In the middle of every circle, a bright light flared to life and massive beams of radiance blasted straight for the magician while Karun thrust her staff forward. The hooded girl whipped out magic to shield herself from the blast, then clapped a hand over her face as smoke swirled around her. Right as she snapped her staff toward Karun, she finally realized too late her staff was broken. Karun beamed in the glow of the magic circles, radiating confidence. Meanwhile, Zawaka's mage bit down hard. Sure, their power gap was too huge, while the girl's face stayed hidden under a cloth. Yet you could still see the shock in her eyes. At that moment, Aldo slammed into Zook's space, but Zook darted out of every strike and grinned, saying it was awesome. Then Aldo pressed the hero hard. Is Flora that important to you? The hero snapped to a stop with his back to the monsters, slid his sword to the side, and shielded the girl behind him with eyes like a wild beast. He growled at the adventurer that no one was getting near her. The hero clamped his sword by the hilt and sparks exploded along his grip. Zoak's eyes widened in shock as crackling, lightning-like magic started to coil around the blade. The hero's body flared with magic and his sword stretched out so far it blazed a monster beam of light. Zoax just stared ahead, stunned, as he slammed the blade to the ground and swore he'd protect her no matter what. The adventurer jerked his gaze upward and froze beneath that brutal, blazing light, and when it hit, the force tore outward, shot straight across the massive expanse, stretching farther and farther like a screaming beam. Zawak's face snapped into pure shock as he just stood there, staring at what was charging toward him, while Kurume and the magician Zawaka gaped with their mouths hanging open. And then a massive explosion tore through everything in its path. The trees Aldo slammed into shattered. Now only charred trunks sat there, while thick columns of black smoke shot upward toward him where the hero's blast struck. The ground split and a long moat tore open, and Zoak was kneeling inside it. Stunned, the man stared at the ground as if it betrayed him, then snapped his head up, eyes darting away while his teeth clenched hard. The blast was so brutal it tore the mountain behind them clean in half, carving out a scorched, bone-deep pit that stretched deep down the center. Zoak stood on the cliff, staring at what was happening behind him. When the hero strode straight toward him, Zoak spun around, eyes wide, and looked up in shock. He instantly understood the truth with sickening dread. This was the raw power of an A-rank adventurer, and the hero stared down at him with blazing, angry fury. Ashes burst off the burned mail as plants exploded through the air, and Aldo snapped a small blade against the ropes binding Flora's arms. The freed girl burst into tears, clinging to the hero and shouting for Aldo, while a worried guy with a broken, sad face grabbed Flora by the shoulders and called her name. The hero rushed out an apology, and she shot back instantly that everything was okay because she truly believed he'd save her right beside them. Kurin let out a slow breath and smiled faintly. The couple gripped hands as the guy hurriedly asked Flora if she was hurt, and she shook her head. She was fine. The three of them spun around, stared down from the cliff, and Flora clung to him, hugging him tight the whole time. With the rest of the magicians gone, the remaining one and Zoak bolted from them as fast as they could. Kuruni even said, "We're free," but the hero snapped back that they weren't and ordered them to rush a message straight to the king. Kurun stared at the guy and demanded, "Are you really going to negotiate with the king?" And the guy shot back, proud as can be, "I'm fixing it the right way so it never happens again." A tearful Aisha came sprinting toward them, with a worried Took hot on her heels, shouting for Flora. Flora spun around and shouted at Aisha, and the second they hugged, Aisha lit up, thanking the heavens she wasn't hurt. Tears spilling as Flora smiled, she even apologized for making me worry, while Toke stood behind them, letting out a soft sigh with a relieved grin. Aisha shot Aldo a glare, still standing by Karun with his eyes fixed on the action from the sidelines. She grabbed her friend's shoulders, stared the couple down, and demanded answers. Then barked at Aldo what the heck happened, while Toke just blinked at the furious girl, completely lost. The hero warned them thugs from the kingdom of Abylonia had finally come for him, and Toke gasped, demanding answers like, "Abylonia again?" They'd traveled so far it sounded unreal, and when Aisha folded her arms tight to her chest, she snapped, "So, tell me, why'd you attack?" The hero stared at Flora in front of him, choking on words as silence dragged on. Flora kept her eyes lowered. Then he finally snapped and admitted the truth. They weren't here for anything else. They came to kill the A-rank adventurer Aldred, that was his real name. Aisha's eyes went wide as she blurted, "Aldo's really an A-rank adventurer." Right beside her, Toke froze in disbelief, demanding the same thing, and then they pressed her about Karuna. Was she a rank 2? The girl snapped back fast. Yes, even though they said Zoak, the one who kidnapped Flora, had to be brought back to the kingdom, they were here on a mission to make it happen. Aisha's face went grim, her eyes hidden behind those bangs, and then a hard rage spilled through her voice as she demanded, "Did you kidnap Flora just to lure him out?" The hero admitted he felt they were using her as bait, and the girl's fist clenched hard. Then Aisha shot up and slammed Aldo in the chin, fist first, while everyone else stared in stunned silence. She yanked the guy by the chest, blurted that Flora was so kind she probably wouldn't even swing at him, then added, "This is for him, not me." An A-ranked venture that once killed a dragon, right? But still, he couldn't save the one he loved. Kuruni burst into tears, wiping them away with her own hands, yelling that everything was wrong and it was all her fault. If she hadn't come to North End, none of this would have happened. The hero lowered his gaze with a heavy heart and insisted, "No, it's not her fault, it's all on me." Toke rubbed his head, baffled, and blurted, "So, what's the point of going back to a former A-rank adventurer?" Tearing up, Kurume told Aldo that adventurers like them get praised by the whole town, and they even carry weight with the government. Then, one powerful figure shadowed Aldo, handed the message straight to the king, and with that move, Aldo walked away with trust and authority. Rage boiled in Aisha as she snapped that Aldo wasn't that kind of person, and Toke stared at her with a skeptical grin, firing back asking if anyone like that even existed. Then he turned to the guys and pressed who it was, and the hero answered, "Earl Clark Raymond, the most influential, the most powerful of them all." I'll haul my arms across her chest and ask if it means we can come back here again. And the hero says he already sent a message to start negotiations. But if they try anything again, then the hero told her to stop worrying and watch him handle it, because he had zero plans to turn back. Meanwhile, Flora stood there with her arms folded behind her back, staring down in silence as the wind whipped her dress and hair. A little later, Flora and Aldo's house. The girl hovered behind the hero and said, "When you came for me, it felt like you popped out of thin air. How did you do that?" Even with Toa grinning about how she'd built a catapult and Karun had pitched in with magic, the girl beamed. Then her eyes snapped to the guy's arm and she gasped, "You're bleeding." As he stared at the torn skin, stunned. After a bit, when his arm finally got bandaged, Flora leaned in and said it would be amazing if she could heal like Karun then. The guy thanked her for wrapping him up. They sank onto the bed and fell into a tense hush, the girl staring at her hands in her lap while the guy gently worked his fingers over her injured one. And then she broke the silence first, asking why he hadn't told her he was an adventurer. He dropped his eyes in shame and frustration, admitting that back when he was living for adventure, he ran missions non-stop, smashing monsters, trapping bandits, and even serving as a knight in the war, where he ended up killing people. He craved a fresh start with those memories wiped clean, but the fear gnawed at him. What if she found out and turned on him? For now, he just sat there with his head bowed. She admitted she was scared too because the thought of losing him terrified her. Alda snapped his eyes open, stunned by what she said. The girl leaned closer, and the guy turned toward her, slid his hand onto her shoulder, and soothed her with her name. Then he apologized. She told him that today everything finally clicked into place. Then she whipped her head toward him, and tears shimmered in her eyes as she confessed her first love. His wish to come back alive and unhurt finally comes true. Then she can't wait to share her grief and her joy with him, learn everything about him, and promise herself she'll never hate him no matter what. And the moment they hear her fishing, every face in the room flushes red. She begged, "Let me stay with you." And the guy, eyes blazing with tears, snatched her into a tight hug, shouting her name, and the two clung together, crying like their hearts were breaking. He clung to the girl with everything he had, and the guy swore that no matter what storms hit, he'd protect her and the village, no questions asked. They stared into each other's eyes, hands pressed to her cheeks, and kept breaking down into tears. A gust of wind scattered the street's flowers in every direction, and the lovers, still curled up on the bed in each other's arms, kept kissing like nothing else mattered. The hero and Flora stood right by the house's door, knuckles tight with tension as he stared forward, unsure of what came next, while Flora slid her palm into his clenched hands, gripping him steady. The guy froze, totally flustered, his face burning red as he gawked in shock. The couple stared at each other, clutching hands while Flora beamed at him. Aldo hesitated, then lifted his hand over the door, ready to knock. The girl stood right beside me, gripping a basket in her hands. A little later, 4 people sat in tense silence at the table while the hero kept his head bowed, not daring to meet the girl's parents' eyes. All of it clicked for Flora's father, at last. Aldo was an A-rank adventurer, and somehow the man stayed calm, like he'd just confirmed what he already expected. That guilty-faced guy snapped into a quick apology for keeping it bottled up for so long, because if he hadn't been an A-rank adventurer, nothing would have ever happened to Flora. Then he apologized again, like he couldn't stop. The man kept staring at the guy in crushing silence, head bowed. The woman beside him wore worry on her face. Flora mirrored her, tilting her head down and saying nothing at all. The father glanced at his daughter, and with his gaze dropped, his thoughts started turning. At last the man dropped a secret on the hero, telling him why he'd never said a word about it before, like he had a reason burning in his chest. Then Floreau's father snapped, "Raise your head!" And Aldo, choking on guilt, stared straight into the eyes of the man in front of him. The man suddenly flashed a grin at the guy and said, "Thanks to you and your skills, Flora's already been saved 3 times." He didn't judge him for a second still, with a weight like that on his back. You can bet he wondered if coming here alone was even smart. As an adventurer, he never asked for any of this, yet somehow he got yanked straight into the chaos. And just when everything felt like it would swallow him whole, memories of the flower field in Northhand burst through his mind. That's when he realized he was truly glad he came. The man finally admitted he'd been terrified by what happened. But Flora, Aldo, and every villager are convinced he's done nothing wrong, and the man's words hit Aldo so hard that tears welled up in his eyes. Flora's mom grinned and winked, telling him it was the truth, and the whole family only asked that he trust them more, so the guy nodded with a shaky smile, wiped the tears from his eyes, and thanked them for it. Flora watched the hero and grinned. Her cheeks flared red, and happy tears sparkled in her eyes like the guy's did too, while her mother looked on with pride, praising how amazing it was that Flora was finally marrying an A-rank adventurer. How honorable. The man burst into laughter, bragging that if he'd known everything right from the start, he never would have had the chance to face him as an equal. Aldo, mortified, swallowed his pride, and asked to talk like always, and Flora clenched her fists, indignant as she remembered just how brutal it had been for Aldo. Her mom scooted right up to her husband, flashing him a smug little smile as she teased that he'd look amazing, like she'd already learned the ropes of an adventurer's wife. The man grinned and told her to keep at it, and the girl instantly blushed at every word. Blushing so hard Flora could barely breathe, she screamed for Mom and Dad to stop as Aldo, teary-eyed, kept smiling at her. Then the woman asked how the holiday preparations were going, and Flora shuddered. She admitted bluntly that the finish line is still way out of reach and there's tons of work left, the woman gasped. Yeah, that's exactly how it was. Then the girl slapped the parcels down on the table, handed over sweets, and begged them to taste it today. Aldo shoved a box of desserts into the man's hands and swore he ate them every single day, and the guy grinned like, "Same here." Then the girl pulled everyone in for tea, and her mother lit up, clapping her hands with pure A massive grape field stretched out, vines heavy with already ripened fruit, and Ina strode past with a basket packed full of ripe berries until she snapped her head toward the voices and asked what was going on. Because someone was teasing Karun, saying she'd keep that sour face forever. Crouched behind a bush, she watched the 3 huddle at the table and chat, and Karune shot out an apology saying it was all because of that thoughtless move of hers. Aisha waved it off, telling her not to sweat it and that everything was okay. But the moment Karune got excited, worry still clawed at her. She couldn't shake fears that she might have damaged their friendship with Aldo. Toke smiled at the girl, finally clocking what she meant, and told her to stop panicking. He knew she didn't hit him out of hatred. He slapped her hand over her mouth, stunned by the blow, and Aisha stared at the guy like, "Wait, did you just flip into best friend killer mode?" Thinking about it, yeah, Cornette was hurt too. She told them to end this conversation. Karun tried to argue, but right then, Tuck's hand lunged toward the girl. He rested his hand on the girl's head, flashed a grin, and told her she didn't have to worry so much. Then, Karun jolted, blushed hard, and stared with wide eyes, mouth gaping in sudden embarrassment. Yana on the sidelines went wide-eyed and scared, staring at him like, "What's going on?" Right then, Aisha's face twisted with anger. Then he soothed him by stroking his head. The guy pinched the insect in his fingers and explained there was a fly on it. Karun stared back, instantly blushing hard. With Aisha slumped over the table, hiding her face, the couple whipped their heads toward the side where Agina lay, and surprise hit them hard. Even Karun couldn't believe Agina was there too. The girl burst into laughter, and Toke hauled Ina to her feet, then spun toward the sound and demanded what was so funny, while Aisha shot Karuni a look full of embarrassment. Clearing her throat into her fist, Aisha forced out an awkward smile and said, "Think about it. Flora is insanely lucky. She married an A-rank adventurer, and that's no small deal." Then she leaned in and asked, "So, where do I find a person like that?" Toke blinked, staring at her like, "Wait, what?" Kerne stared at the girl in confusion, and then said, "Aisha was getting married too, and when she revealed the details, the whole couple went ghost pale." Aisha choked on air while the guy's face turned as still as a dead man's. They were trembling. Aisha shot an irritated look and pressed the question again and again. The guy clutched his head, demanding to know why he could hear Belzina, sitting beside me, blinked in shock, thinking Karun was somehow doing great. The guy blurted a denial and shot a question at the same time, then stared straight at Aisha and said he thought Karuna was better. Ina immediately crumpled and fainted, while Aisha's anger flared hot. She shrieked that he said it while staring at the body, and the girl pressed Toa like, "So you're really one of those?" Then someone shot Ina, "You okay?" while Toa yelled at Karuna, begging for help. A little later, at Flora and Aldo's place, the guy thanked me for everything. Today he finally had the guts to speak the truth, and he swore it was all because of her while she just smiled and played it off, denying it right to my face. A band-aid was stuck to his arm as he took a sip of water from the glass. Then the girl locked eyes on him, asked the hero how bad the wound was. He shrugged it off as, "I'm fine," and she snapped, "Let me see for myself." She leaned in and inspected his hand up close, tracing the skin like it mattered. Then her fingers drifted higher, boom. The guy started trembling and laughing, yelling that she was tickling him, and she just shot back that she had to check every last bit carefully. Light burst from the girl's hair, and the guy couldn't help but sniff the air. Then he locked onto it, her hand in his. She shook like she couldn't stop. Suddenly, she burst into tears. Then the guy shot off the chair, dropped to the floor beside her, and with his hands out, asked excitedly what had happened. She was blubbering and begging for forgiveness like she'd hit him out of nowhere, and the guy just froze, cupping her face with both hands, totally speechless. Flora leaned in and said, "When I touch him, I keep feeling it again and again, like we're really alive." With a face full of sorrow, the guy called out to Flora as he stared at her. And you could tell he was thinking, was she really that terrified? On the floor, he clung to her with everything he had, swearing he'd never let her fear for him or for her life again. And they just kept holding each other tight. Flora's whole life, someone has had her back, but now she finally gets to be near her loved one because he's the one who saved her. And if she's going to repay him, she'll do it from this day on, forever. She'll become the support he can lean on. Hand in hand, the couple stepped out of the house and headed forward, grinning at each other like everything was perfect. Then they leaned over a towering cliff, looking down at the tiny buildings and the busy people moving far below. Aldo just stared forward, smiling like everything was perfect, while the wind whipped his hair and rustled the leaves. Then he grinned and said, "It felt like a dream right beside him." Flora smiled back, watching him like the moment was too good to be real. She whipped around, grabbed his hand, and swore this wasn't some dream. Then he turned toward her with that soft, tender look and promised she'd be his wife for real. Pure happiness lit up his face, and she just stared back, cheeks burning as she blushed hard. She clasped his hand and beamed with quiet confidence, eyes fluttering shut. Then she opened them, stared straight ahead, and whispered, "It really feels like a dream." He ran his fingers through her hair, shut his eyes, and grinned like her words were pure magic, two dreams sharing the same heartbeat. She said she'd start training for the festival the second she got home. Then he casually blurted, "I've got to swing by Aisha's for raisins. Raisins are awesome." Karina gripped her bow and sprinted between the trees, charging toward a massive, towering cliff that rose like a wall yet was packed with trees inside. The girl's foot caught on something buried in the grass, and with a scream she pitched forward face first, catching herself with her hands as Karina and she tumbled straight into the pit. She slammed to her knees, head bowed, and groaned through the pain, then snapped her eyes up in pure shock while Karina dazedly stared at the cliff she'd tumbled from, into a massive pit. Way too high to be real. A colossal monster burst up beside the girl and charged straight at her, so she shot to the side in a blur. She snapped her mouth open, eyes bulging with fear, then glanced sideways, and there it was, a giant, boar-like monster towering in front of her. When it exhaled, steaming breath blasted from its nose. The board stomped its hooves like a threat. The girl curled up in a pile of leaves and clapped her hands over her head, shaking so hard she couldn't even move. Then, when the danger didn't strike, she yanked her hands away and stared forward, eyes wide with terror. Cabana froze, staring straight ahead. Then a blazing light snapped on from the cliff above Karina, and the monster with the arrow in its forehead blinked in confusion, like it couldn't believe its eyes because that light was really a swarm of arrows screaming past Karina and diving straight toward the boar. Most of those shots slammed straight into the monster already shredded by arrows. It crumpled onto its side and died, and through Karina's teary blur she looked up just as two looming shadows dropped in on either side of her. Two men loomed at the cliff's edge, and when Karina yelled for the Master and Mr. Aldred, both of them panted hard, staring down below with fear-filled eyes. Aldo hurriedly wrapped a bandage around Karina's ankle as she sat on the ground, while Fiona's father stood there in silence, watching from the sidelines. Clutching his head and squeezing his eyes shut, he blurted out that he should have guarded her better and begged for forgiveness. Then Albeida snapped her gaze toward him like she'd been waiting to hear it. Guilt crushed her chest, and she stared down with wide, round eyes while the man watched every second. He demanded to know if she realized just how deadly it was, and then he grilled her on why she'd gone so far into the forest alone. The girl cowered, guilt filling her as she bowed her head to his scolding. Still planted on the ground, she tore her gaze away and blurted out her reason she was trying to catch prey with the new tool she'd just bought, hands busy as she worked the rope around a snapped stick. When he pushed her on why she bought it in the first place, she clammed up. She had no clue what to say, not a single word then. He demanded when she bought it, and she finally answered, "This morning before we left for the trip." Aldo stared at the man, totally lost, while fear clung to him, and he demanded why she was looking away, then pushed for answers about that morning. The girl said she'd been using Aldred's tracking technique to keep eyes on what was happening, and the second the man heard it, he snapped his gaze to a terrified Aldo. Both men went deathly pale as Karina stood right there, and dread hit them hard. The child was from her father's side. He snapped, saying she still didn't get it. Hunting isn't something you pull off alone, and buying from strangers is just as risky because you never know what they'll slip into the deal. The girl dropped her gaze, totally baffled, while the man shrugged and said, it didn't matter what was on the line. Aldo figured she thought she could just snipe him with an arrow from far away. She got warned that every time someone comes near a wounded demon, it flips into pure rage, violent, merciless, just like that boar that tore into her. With those skills, landing an arrow on them would be brutal, yet the boar dodged every shot like it could read her mind, and those traps didn't even slow it down. Aldo warned her that some demons would strike from afar, and she couldn't afford to forget animals and demons alike could come barreling at her, not easing up for a second just to get out of the way. And then the moment the fight ignites, it instantly turns into a full-on melee right as that demon lunges at her. She bolts forward, says with her eyes cast down that this is exactly how it all happened to her before, and then admits she just cowardly fled the battlefield to save her own life. Someone had strung up tight ropes, and she stumbled, toppled off the cliff, and went down with him. She remembered soaring into the drop and crashing into the pit with the boar. The men exchanged blank looks, completely lost, and one of them forced an awkward smile at Karina's father. He shut his eyes and asked, "Do you get what I'm saying?" She has to be super careful every time she buys anything, because if he walks away and leaves the stuff unattended, something bad could happen fast. The girl kept her eyes on the floor, drowning in guilt for what she'd done in front of the two of them, clearly mortified, while the man fumbled a scratch at the back of his head, staring at her, then patted the top of her head and said, he didn't care about anything else as long as she was okay. Karina, cheeks burning with guilt, blurted an "I'm sorry" and begged forgiveness for how stupid she'd been. A little later, the men dropped into the forest and stuffed the last of the stuff into bags, while Karina sat off to the side, watching in silence. Then Aldo walked past and told her, "It's all good." Aldo leaned in and told Karina, "Yeah, I was young too. Same raw, clueless energy. I couldn't even catch a demon back then. I once chased the dream of beating one monster, but it didn't go the way I thought. In my homeland, they didn't just call me strong, they treated me like a sacred beast." He wanted it so badly, he snapped and went after Aldo. Then the villagers uncovered his hunt and nearly cooked him alive at the stake. But he somehow got out, only for them to lash him to a tree with torches blazing until his companions rushed in, begging for mercy and forgiveness. Karina flashed a smile and said it meant he'd failed too. Then he nodded along, admitting he'd racked up plenty of mistakes. He swore it's crucial to learn from your mistakes, and the girl nodded, "Yeah, that's true." Then the man glanced over with a grin, quietly listening without butting in. He jerked his gaze away again, exhaling as he finally let his body loosen up, then marched up to Karina and Aldo and promised he'd teach her how to hunt monsters after all. They'd better start cooking before the Harvest Festival hits, so go ask Aldo about cooking. Hunters dive into the Harvest Festival pure tradition, and they only cook with ingredients they've pulled from the source themselves. Aldo finally got what people meant when Lauren said she could cook, because the man made it clear hunters had to know how to do that too. Aldo asked what was going on here, and the girl looked down as she said the pot's cooking wild boar with mushrooms. Then she added that mushrooms and rice together are flying off the shelves. Roast up beef with venison and stewed rabbit, then toss in some gut dishes alongside the drinks for an extra punch. Those whole roasted hares cooked over an open fire are packed with nutrition too, and the girl admits the smell there is kind of rough. Aldrin told her, "If that's the case, grab a herb called sand soup and it'll wipe out that smell," and the girl just stared. I had no idea. One day, her master's wife cooked this for her, and she dished up snow rabbit meat with jam that tasted unreal, but the man snapped back, saying it wasn't a hunter's dish. That guy asked about the jam, and he couldn't even picture what it tasted like. The man rubbed the back of his head and muttered that it was way too sweet, and that it was a local dish from the north. Karina lit up and said she adored him, and the girl flashed a satisfied smile as she remembered him. The man even remembered they sometimes turn monster meat into dried jerky, and Karina swore you could whip up a wild new dish with it. Aldo got it, so Karina went all in today, and the guy's grin lit up the moment. The men snapped their focus onto the girl, and she looked just as devastated again, staring at the ground with her head bowed. She used to think her mentor was just annoying her with his big opportunities until today. When it hit her how much his words mattered, he straight up asked her about that very opportunity. She swore she'd give it her all, then begged me not to leave, and Lauren couldn't tell if it was a real apology or if she was just trying to rattle me. Karina whipped around to Aldo and shouted for him, thanking him for always watching her back and apologizing for the mess he'd been dragged into. Then he shrugged and said the only thing that mattered was that she was okay. The girl finally admitted she could catch something on her own, then she snapped her hand back for her bag grabbed it with both hands, and shoved it into the guy's grip, telling him to hold tight because it was her wedding gift. He stared at the bag, embarrassed, and snatched it into his hands. Then Lauren gaped at him like, "So that's it?" While the girl shut her eyes, went beet red, and bowed her head in total confusion. Lauren and Aldo froze, then grinned as they peeked into the bag. "Is it a turkey?" they asked. They turned to Karina and praised her like crazy, and Aldred beamed, saying he was over the moon and thanking her. "Flora's going to love it too," he said, while the girl stared at him with pure admiration. Lauren's smile flashed wide. She was glowing with pride at his words and grateful for the gift she'd handed over. Then she said, "I've got a sharp eye. Not just anyone can spot a turkey out in the woods near North End." And Aldo stared straight at the man. The man started to descend, shouting for Karina, and she snapped her eyes to him. Then he crouched, shoved his hands behind him, and told her to climb on. Karina stared, stunned. Aldo grinned as he watched everything unfold. Then Lauren snapped her head back and admitted it was rough for her to walk, while the girl just stared at Aldo with eyes as wide as saucers. Right then, Karina demanded Aldo carry her, and when Lauren heard it, she practically couldn't believe a word. Aldo bent low, hoisted the girl on his back, and charged forward while she giggled like it was all part of the plan. Confused, Aldo stared ahead, and behind them, Lauren glared, furious and menacing. Karina called Aldo and told him to listen. Could he catch her red bear for her? If he did, that holiday's main dish would be hers for sure, and she'd finally show him how to make jam. Lauren blasted, shouting from behind Karina, and wouldn't you know it? She sounded mad, as if she should be ashamed, but Karina just grinned, clearly amused, and didn't look embarrassed for a second. Honestly, what a naughty little kid. Lauren's face hardened with annoyance. Karina burst into laughter, said, "It's begun," and jutted her finger forward, ordering Aldo to go while he stared back at her like, "Wait, what?" Aldred followed the girl's command, sprinted ahead to her cheers, then Lauren burst forward behind them, shouting that they better not abandon anyone older than them. Aldo, Flora, Aisha, and Toa stared straight ahead with their jaws dropped in pure shock, and Aisha immediately blurted, "Is this place way too big? Because that two-story house was enormous? Even the magic room didn't look this massive." Karuni met them right at the entrance, waved like crazy, and blurted out, "Welcome!" Then she explained that aristocrats used to call this very palace home. Blushing, she scratched her head and thanked them for helping her clean up. And Aldo just smirked, saying, "Cleaning the palace by yourself is a nightmare." Frola thrust the bundle into the confused Karuna's hands, grinning that it was a gift for the move, simple as it was, so she should just hold on to it. And Karuna thanked her with a surprised nod. They'd come all this way to help anyway, so it barely even mattered. Flora grinned and pointed at the basket as the guy hoisted it up for everyone, and she told them they'd brought bento too. Then they all dug in together. Karun slipped away from the aisle, shouting for everyone to pass, and the four of them followed her into the huge house's dark depths, then gasped and stared as they explored inside, finally freezing at the long stairs in the corridor. Flora gawked and asked, "How many rooms are in there?" Aisha stared in shock and blurted out, "He's so cool." But Toke's face twisted as confusion hit. "Wait, do we have to clean all of it up?" Right after he spoke, everyone snapped out of their awe except Flora, because the future work suddenly looked way too massive, and Karune turned to the guys, screaming that they couldn't lose heart, not when they hadn't even begun. Karun bragged that this mansion even has a huge bathroom, then asked, "So, want to freshen up in there?" and promised that's how she'll repay them for today. He blurted it out, stammering about the bathroom. Then it hit him when he was hunting for a place to live. All he wanted was one thing. A bath. Aisha shuddered, just looking at it. She shrieked that she wanted to swim. Kurune grinned like she couldn't wait and promised they'd have a blast once they finished cleaning, then urged everyone to start already. Aisha snapped at Toga Kogak with a smug, "Well, well," and the guy fixing a handkerchief on his head turned to stare at her. She grinned and said his headscarf looked ridiculously good on him, then teased, "So, you want to be a janitor?" And he just smiled and said, "Yeah, sure." Then she snapped that it doesn't suit her at all. She looks like some grandma out in the garden. As Toku and Aisha shoved through their monsters, glancing back at each other with pure annoyance, Aldo sprawled beside them, totally ignoring the whole thing. Aldred snapped his gaze forward. Flora stood there with her back to him, tugging her long hair into a ponytail, hairband clenched between her lips as her fingers worked to smooth and gather every strand. Then she pulled a headscarf onto her head. When he looked at her, embarrassment hit him like a wave. His entire face flooded with a thick blush, so Flora turned his way with a bright smile and asked what was going on. As he stared at his beloved, hearts practically burst out of him, and he blurted that her hairstyle was adorable right behind him. Karune started wagging her tail like crazy, asking if he'd tied her ponytail, and honestly, he agreed. It was cute. He ignored her and kept going, dryly saying it fits her too. then rattled on about cleaning as an angry Kurun fumed behind him. Aldo cracked the window open, grinned, and leaned his hands on the frame as he stared out trees and mountains rolling for miles like a breathtaking masterpiece. Flora darted over to Aldo, pressed the brush into his hands, and stared at all those windows like, whoa. And if every room's this huge, they might even have to sleep here. Either way, they've got to scrub this whole place till it shines. Karun glanced at the tow sack beside her and said, once they were done cleaning, they'd have to figure out where all the furniture goes. He nodded right away, grabbed his measuring tools, and went with her to plan it. Aisha stood in the corner, brush stretched out, clutching Karun as she blurted that she couldn't reach her wand at all, so could he not try something like this? Karun shot back, yes, then told Waka, who stood beside him, to wait just a bit, and Waka said he could. Karun stepped into the hallway, shouted for Aljado, and asked if they had any rags, and the moment he turned to her, he confirmed they did, then told her to hang tight for a second. The guy shoved a stack of rags into his girlfriend's hands, and Flora stared at them like they were a mystery. Then snapped, how on earth are we supposed to watch the ceiling with this? The guys huddled in a circle as Aldo barked, watch? Karun took a breath, started chanting, and vowed to turn her thoughts into reality with telekinesis. Then the rags from her hands ripped into the sky. Everyone but Aldo stared in shock as rags burst upward and scattered to the ceiling, and Aisha couldn't hide her skepticism, muttering about how surreal the whole scene was. Rags snagged onto this palace ceiling like they had a mind of their own, scraping away grime in seconds. When it started moving by itself, Flora blurted, wait, it's cleaning. Toke stared at it and said, that's just how things are. If she really had magic that convenient, then there was no reason to drag them here, so the girl spun around to take a closer look. She blurted out that she'd gladly wipe everything down with her own magic, but she still couldn't juggle multiple objects at once, so some spots would just never get fully cleaned. And yeah, there are things she can't pull off with magic at all, and someone nods along going, magic can't do a ton of stuff. Then Flora stares up at the ceiling with starry eyes, whispering how adorable they are and how they look just like little caterpillars. Aldo told them Karun was almost done and pushed, keep cleaning, and the rags kept scrubbing the ceiling all by themselves, while Flora tied another handkerchief over her nose and mouth and scrubbed every dusty surface with a brush. Dust caked the walls so thick that Aldo wrapped himself in a choking cloud, and the moment it hit, he instantly started feeling awful. Tote got hit by a blast of dust, sneezed like it hurt, and sent clouds of grit streaming through the open window like smoke. He grabbed his forearms, insisted he'd only ever worked with a broom, but his hands were already worn out. Florida lunged into view, clutching rags, while he blurted, grab some buckets of water now, we've got to clean this floor. Toke stared at him in shock. Toke leaned on the railing, peered down, and shouted at Karun, asking if she could clean the floor herself with magic. Then Karun snapped back, annoyed that she couldn't. Flora broke into a smile and urged them to dig a little deeper for Karuna School, the final push. Then the girl from the crowd below gasped and stared up at her with wide, pleading eyes. He trailed a rag along the stair railing, stared straight ahead, then bent down and asked her, do you think we need a sign so everyone realizes magic is right here? Aisha nodded hard, saying it was true. So far, she felt nothing at all, like magic wasn't even being taught here, Karun pushed, asking if he was sure. Then the guy flipped open his notebook, started sketching, and demanded what he could come up with a sign just for her. He pulled out a sketch from his notebook and hit them with it, and the girl stared for half a second before roasting it as trash. Then the guy whipped up another option and showed that too. Karun narrowed her eyes and asked, is she coming with us too? Because if she wasn't, they'd have no chance of anyone backing them up for sure. In the end, she said it was way too soon to obsess over signs and told him to focus on where the chairs and tables would go, because we've got to fit 10 people. He flashed her a different version of the sign and asked what she'd do if 20 or 30 people showed up, like she seriously needed a sign at all. The irritated girl snapped back that they should just ignore him and keep cleaning, but she listened anyway, and yeah, he's a fool. Everyone kept cleaning in total silence. Aisha scrubbed the door while Aldo and Flora tackled the windows and the floor, and Karune watched her friends work through that massive place, smiling the whole time. Karune told Tawaku they'd have to haul in chairs and tables for the students here, and Aisha snapped her head toward the couple. Flora and Aldo, posted on the sidelines, shot each other a look. Then Flora said, we'll need baby chairs soon too, and Aldo nodded, pointing out there's even a kid's room. Aisha watched it all from the side. In one room, Toke pushed the idea that they should hang up some extra boards, and Kurun nodded along like, yep, that's right. In another room, Aldo insisted they had to get a baby bed before anything else, but Flora cut in and tapped his shoulder, warning him he was rushing way too fast. Aisha flicked her hand to the side, insisting Flora and Arid were already together. So everything was fine, yet the two were still out here acting like a real couple, and the girl grabbed her chest, pretending she'd just been hit. Why did something feel like it was stabbing her chest? She flushed hard, snapped her palm over her face, and hid her eyes. Then stared at To and Karun, panting like her heart was weighed down by the air. When she saw their smiles, it hit her. This was a heart attack. No doubt the girl looked wiped out, like the thought alone drained her. After what felt like forever, the palace finally sparkled, stairs shining, walls gleaming, and the second floor looking brand new. They threw their hands up in pure joy and shouted that the cleaning was finally done, and Flora clapped with all her heart. Aisha was drooling too. So that was fine, and now every single person in the bathroom was suddenly involved. Aisha shoved him out of sight and told him to wait a sec, while the annoyed girl snapped that she'd settle it with a rock, and then scissors, paper, who would be the one to go first. Aldo leaned in and asked Flora if they'd play with him before the first win, or if they'd settle for calm talks after she smiled like she already knew him, said she wouldn't push, and they both agreed to do exactly what she wanted. Talk and Aisha shot their hands up and kicked off a game where the winner gets to hit the bathroom first. Flora stared ahead, fists clenched to her chest like she couldn't believe what she was seeing, while Kuru gaped at just how huge the bathroom was. Aisha even chimed in that you could literally swim in it. And then Kuru insisted, "You've got to give it a proper wash in here." The girls started splashing themselves with water, and Aisha snapped her gaze away as Flora walked past. Then she yanked the cloth off her and hissed that she couldn't show up here with a towel. When the cloth finally dropped, everyone stared at the girl in stunned shock. She grabbed at the girl and bragged that they'd totally gotten bigger, and Flora snapped in shock and called out to Aisha. Aisha then shouted for Karuna to come over, saying they were soft and big as she kept touching the girl. Flora snapped that it only slowed her down and she still wanted a beautiful body like theirs. Karun beamed as if her troubles were a treat, and Aisha said, straight up, that her greed meant she deserved to be punished. The girls started raging in the bathroom, and Flora snapped tears in her eyes as she plotted revenge for their embarrassment, while outside the guys stood frozen at the door. Toke was scribbling in his notebook, then he whipped his head toward the door the moment he heard the chaos. After a bit, the guys headed into the bathroom too, then came back looking relieved. You straight up said, "Man, what a huge bathroom." Aldo nodded and said he felt way better the second he stepped out. The girls lounged on the floor, waiting for their turn to come back, while Karun thanked the two of them for today and rushed out an apology that she'd been the first to drag them to the bathroom. Then Flora pushed food into their hands to keep everyone going. Karun even apologized for making them eat on the floor, and Talk waved it off like it was no big deal. Then Aisha dropped the bomb that she had a heart attack after using the bathroom, so Talk stared at her, totally thrown like, "What do you mean?" Aldo stared at Flora and noticed her hair was already dry. She grinned and said Karuna used magic to dry it for her. Then Aldo caught Karuna watching them like she was on the edge of something, while Flora passed over the food, and today's pick was crispy sandwiches fried on both sides. Toke and Aldo ate with gusto. Aldo grinned at the girl and explained that mustard oil on bread hits them with this special kind of flavor, and it was so delicious that I couldn't help agreeing. Toke spun toward Karuna and told her, straight up, that he was sure her school would blow up with success. Then Karuna lit up and said a bunch of kids had already started asking about it. I'm pretty sure that means everything's fine. Wait, speaking of magic, Karun's convinced it's useful way beyond battles, even for everyday stuff. And Flora proves it with one simple trick: you can use it to dry your hair. Aisha coughed into her fist like she'd just fought her own nerves. And then yeah, she really had smashed through and made major progress toward the new Karun school. With a huge grin, she raised her glass and yelled along with her friends as they lifted theirs too. Flora grinned and said, "If you need anything else, just tell me." Karun stared at her, and with a blush crawling up her face, the girl dropped her gaze and tilted her head down. Then she asked if she could call her just Flora, and she'll call her Karun. Flora's cheeks burst into a blush as she stared back with wide, shocked eyes, while the girl grinned like she'd just won something, saying, "Of course, Karun was over the moon happy." 5 friends sat on the floor grinning and cracking up together. And that's exactly how they turned into best friends. Karun rallied everyone and asked, "You ready?" Then she jabbed at a massive, thick tree and declared she'd turn it into their blackboard. Toke stared at them with wide-eyed shock and demanded the answer all over again, while Aldo behind him grinned, like this tree was next on the chopping block for their magic school, and Toke snapped, "So why did you bring me out here into the forest?" Toke stared at his friend, totally confused, and blurted, "So, what do you want me to do with him?" Aldo froze at the sight on his friend's face. Karune, shaking with fear, snapped her hand toward the tree again and shouted, "Couldn't we at least make furniture out of it?" Toke turned his gaze to the girl. Toke shot back, "Yeah, we're city folk after all," and said the wood for furniture takes years to age, otherwise this tree would ruin the whole thing, turning the furniture crooked and cracked. She stared at him with those puppy dog pleading eyes, insisting she'd just cut down the tree. Toke's face went ghost pale as he stared back, confused and wide-eyed, because the look on her was exactly the same as his. The guy stuck his hands on his hips, threw in the towel under their pressure, and asked, "So, you want to try cutting down that tree?" He pushed forward and said he'd grab the tools right now and that they should hold on for a bit, while inside his head he couldn't stop wondering why those city folks were so desperate to cut down this tree. Behind him, the two guys whooped with glee, throwing their hands up and grinning like they'd already won. Then he remade the axe and shoved it toward the girl, telling her to grip it. She smiled, thanked him, and took the tool, then tucked the axe behind her back and leaned into it as his weight pinned her down while the guys stared with wild excitement. Letting out a frustrated sigh, she slammed the axe into the tree, but it didn't even budge, and the heavy weight crushed her fast right behind her. Aldo steadied her, cheering that she could push through, and she yanked the axe back with angry strength, shouting that he was the reason it was so heavy only for the axe to slip from her hands and drop. The instrument tore through the air at breakneck speed straight into the standing Toke, his round eyes popping wide as he stared then. Right as the blade skimmed his startled face, the hero lunged, snatched the handle, and yanked it to a stop. Shocked, Toke went bone-pale and froze in place as the hero casually asked Karun if she was exhausted already, then laughed like it didn't matter because now he let out a nervous chuckle, loitering by the tree and studying it, then clamped down on the tool and drove it straight into the target. A jolt like lightning ripped through the plant then. One heartbeat later, that massive tree split down the middle into two razor halves, and the two behind it just stared, stunned. The joyful girl cheered him on, telling him he was doing great while Toke stood right beside her, shaking like crazy and blurting that he'd smashed a 60-year-old tree with a single strike. Aldo grinned and declared it was more than enough for them to board, and the evil Toke behind him snapped, shouting, "Enough for what?" Indignant, he thrust out his palm and demanded the axe. "Give it here, I'll cut it myself." Then, seething, he gripped the axe as the girl called him a carpenter, asking if he'd chop down a tree with them to make furniture. In the forest, sharp blows rang out as Toke nailed the rhythm, landing each hit perfectly while the couple stood by, watching. He swung that axe hard and struck with total focus like this wasn't even his first time. His friends stared at him with mouths hanging open. And then boom, the tree started to shake. He slammed his hand onto the cut trunk and shoved, and the others snapped their heads up as the trunk crashed down untouched to the ground. The girl praised Toke and said he was doing great, even when she joined in, saying he'd cut it down that fast. Toke let out a breath, puffed up with pride, and snapped into a serious face. If he couldn't do the work, he'd never have built a life as a carpenter. So he leaned in and asked Aldo whether it was no big deal for a former adventurer. Aldo just shot back that it wasn't at all. He confessed he'd bought every piece of furniture in the whole city. So when he chopped down that tree, Aldo snapped into realization. He didn't have a clue what to do with it. Toke told him that if he ever wants to be a carpenter, he'll have to track down the right trees and cut them for furniture, and sometimes even grow them depending on what the job demands. He's just not sure the city worker will ever learn that. Karun bragged that chopping trees and turning them into furniture all by himself is the best, most fascinating life ever. Then he glanced away, scratched his face, and rubbed the back of his head like he was embarrassed, and basically asked, "Do you think so too?" She tilted her face up at him and demanded, "So what do we do next?" Then he said, "We cut this tree down first if we want to use it. We have to let it dry for years." The hero pressed her for answers, stunned, and she fired back with the timeline. She looked just as shocked that the tree they've got won't be usable for another 2 years. He said, "Then you've got to tear out the insect-made parts, level the boards, and get the colors and sizes perfect. Only then does the tree finally turn into something worth building furniture from." And Aldo realized Toka was dead serious about it. She even told him that's exactly why every piece costs a fortune. A little later, they burst into the workshop. Now it was time to pick their boards. The thoughtful girl, Moon, zeroed in on the exact option she needed. Her eyes shot wide the second she spotted something she loved. She snatched one of the blackboards and declared they'd turn this one into a proper blackboard with the same wood also perfect for chairs and tables. Aldo flashed a grin and shrugged. "Not a bad board, huh?" Then Toke leaned in and fired back, asking about the bulletin board. Would they build it from the very same material? The girl shoved the board into his hands and told him to hold it steady. Toke stared at her like she'd lost her mind, and Aldo demanded what was wrong. The guy dragged his palm over the wood and said it was still wet, so Aldo told him to dry it off with steam. Aldo snapped back about the steam drying, and Toke shot him down fast. "That'll just make you wetter. The water's not the problem, it's the juice. Steam will blast that juice into vapor." Karun went toe-to-toe with the steam issue, insisting she could summon heat, forge water, and crank up the pressure. Toke's eyes widened, and he blurted, "Wait, so for real?" Then he shoved the question in, "What about magic and how long until it dries?" The girl said it would take a while, but she insisted they could speed it up if they just slammed all the boards together. They hauled every board outside, stacking them in neat little gaps so they never touched. Then Toke finally asked, "Is it good?" Right there, the girl stood watching with a magic wand gripped in her hands. He said, "Yeah, that's perfect." Then he leaned in and warned that if they cranked it higher, the heat would rise fast right as magic started spilling out from her staff. She snapped into spellcasting, demanding fire and water obey her and fuse as one. Eyes shut tight while she focused all her power. From her staff, huge whirlwinds of elements tore forward and smashed onto the boards ahead when they collided. They swallowed the materials whole and steam erupted everywhere. Keeping the spell going, she pressed the guy for an estimate how many would need to be dried. He jabbed the board with a finger and said, "Once those cracks grow to be twice as wide, we can finish." She asked if it was normal for it to crack like that, and he said the cracks actually show how ready the tree is. They only show up on the board's edges, so there's nothing to worry about. The tree first started to split, slow at first, then the crack suddenly widened, and the guy grinned like, "Yeah, that's perfect, this is enough." Then he told her, "Now bring your temperature down bit by bit." Steam burst up from the boards, curling into the sky, and Toke yanked the top board free, gripping it tight in his hands. He slammed his fist into the wood, over and over like a true first-class adventurer living up to his name, and the girl awkwardly shot back that he'd told her what to do, so she did it. Aisha was waving like crazy, and Flora was clutching a basket as they marched right toward the three friends, and the guys snapped their heads around to face them. Aisha came striding up, waving like she owned the moment, and the moment her friends saw her, they gasped because it was Flora and Aisha. Florida said they'd brought food, and Karuna nearly burst with joy she was starving after all that sorcery. Toke stared at the girl with zero emotion, then demanded why she was even here. Aisha snapped at him to shut up, because it sure wasn't his place to stare. Flora stepped in and said she'd helped her pick out a dress for the Harvest Festival. A bit later in the workshop, Toke sat at his table, sketching hard in his notebook, eyes locked in deep thought, while the four other guys hovered in the doorway, staring in silence, like they didn't dare break the moment. Karuni burst out first, gushing that Tokak was just unreal. He'd cut down a tree so fast, Aisha flashed a skeptical smile and shot back like, "So, chopping trees, is that amazing to you guys?" Karune flashed an awkward smile, clapped a hand over her mouth, and blurted that they couldn't handle this job, while Aisha stared at them like they'd just lost their minds. She let out a heavy sigh, saying he was the same age as her, and already he was out there working with his hands, trading like a pro, making useful stuff. Aldo nodded and confirmed it when he started asking for a place to stay. Everyone pointed him toward the carpenter. Everybody knows him. They said he was trusted all across the village. Aldo almost immediately trusted him, and even though Aisha didn't want to say it out loud, she shut her mouth with a quick, grudging reply, "Yeah, it could be." Everyone stared at the guy again, and Aldo barked, asking if it was time for him to finally take a break. He nodded, said he got it, and begged for one more second to finish what he was doing before he crashed. Flora and Aldo spun around and headed out, dumping those two girls alone out there while they stared straight ahead front and center. The guy kept sitting with his back turned, working like he didn't even notice. Kurune stared at him with sparkling admiration, praising how fiercely devoted he was to his work and how amazing it was, while Aisha stood right beside them with a stone-cold, emotionless face. She watched him work with this cold, indifferent stare until one moment her expression flipped, and suddenly that blank face melted into eyes brimming with pure adoration. After a while, the wow in his gaze faded a bit, but that spark still glinted in her eyes as she sipped her tea and it spilled past her lips, sliding straight down. Flora shot Aisha a worried look, and when she asked, "Are you okay?" Aisha suddenly choked on her tea. She awkwardly wiped the tea sliding off her chin with her hand, stammered a nervous, "Yes," then snapped the conversation to the side and asked, who would steal the spotlight as the main princess at the Harvest Festival? Flora's face went hot as she kept wiping at it, mortified, while Karun let out a quiet giggle. Aldo stared at Flora with a confused look, clueless about what was going on. Kurun couldn't stop smiling as he said the festival was only 3 days away, and honestly, a wedding at the Harvest Festival sounds downright magical. She's never been to a Harvest Festival before, so she doesn't realize how wild the fun can get. Then someone tells a guard to jump in as a hunter, and he shuts them down on the spot, saying he'll be too busy. Flora beamed and promised that the suite she'd made for Karun's help would be finished right there. Then Karun and Aldo froze, both jolting with horror at the same brutal thought they hadn't wrapped it up. The guys at the table were laughing and chewing the fat, while Toke kept right on working in the room behind those open doors. Aisha still looked mortified, huddled with her back to that guy, while Karun let out a quiet giggle and Aldo dug into the sweets. That guy on stage bragged that, thanks to everyone's help, they pulled off a massive harvest festival this year, promised the tents would be packed with all kinds of goodies, and told the crowd to come party hard today. He kicked things off by telling everyone to start at the new gate, where the grooms and brides line up to receive good luck, and right there, decked out in their wedding best, Flora and Aldred stood together as the crowd erupted in loud blessings, cheering for a bountiful harvest, and the two joined in, thanking everyone and wishing the same. In the crowd, smart girls twirled in gorgeous dresses, Karina, Aina, Kurun, and Aisha clapping with bright, happy faces, while Flora and Aldred locked eyes over their wedding dresses and burst into joyful laughter. The crowd erupted, cheering the three couples and calling down blessings for fertility, and then someone yelled, "Seal the alliance right now." The other residents caught the meaning right away and jumped to their feet. Begging for the same thing, Aldo stared at them, confused. while he pointed out what was unfolding on the sidelines. Two people at their side were making out as the crowd screamed, and Aldo snapped to attention, staring in total shock. Then he swung around to Flora, who stood right there facing him, hands clamped over her eyes. Blushing hard, Aldo raised the wedding veil off Flora's face with shaking hands, his cheeks burning with embarrassment. Then Flora's expression slipped into view, eyes squeezed shut, lips pushed forward, waiting for the kiss. The guy inched closer to her, then slammed a kiss on her mouth as the crowd erupted with cheers. Flora's father declared that with these couples gathered, the sun would finally shine on all of them. And as he thanked everyone for backing them up, Aldo and Flora stood behind him, cheeks burning with pure embarrassment. Once the ceremony on the stage wrapped up, the couple strolled through the festival, and Flora's mom couldn't stop praising how awesome it was that they chose to come to this event together. The woman lit up with a happy smile, told them they were doing great, and then Boom declared it was time for gifts. Karina stood with the other girls, lifted her basket of treats, and shouted that the sweets had finally arrived. Between the festival stalls, a whole crowd poured through the aisles, and right in front, a couple of newlyweds clutched baskets as they strolled, while the other girls followed right behind. Flora told Aldo he had no idea the tents were split into sectors, and each one meant something totally different. She pointed to one and said, "The winemakers live there, while the cheesemakers were over on the other side." Aisha shot her gaze away, and Karun immediately shifted his focus to the girl. Aldo pushed the idea of circling them one by one, and Flora nodded in agreement. Like friends were rushing up to the winemaker's tent, giant barrels packed with fresh grapes and bottles of wine sitting right there. Villagers thrust their baskets of treats at the couple, and then they headed straight for the cheesemaker's tent. Sellers shoved a basket of treats into their hands, while tables packed with cheeses begged them to taste so. Aldo and Flora grabbed a piece each, took one bite, and then darted through tent after tent. Even after he was asked to beg for forgiveness and he spotted the friend he'd been looking for, he broke into a shout the moment he recognized him by name. Then he strode up, grinning, and said, "Today was a blessed harvest day," begging them to let him properly thank everyone for showing up. The couple kept thanking the crowd for every gift right up until the one who'd been standing off to the side finally turned around. Aisha stood frozen in confusion as the guy demanded what kind of horse outfit that was. Then the girl snapped back, asking what he thought she was wearing, or if he was just blind, while he went on clattering around in the same filthy rags. They stared each other down, pure fury sparking like they were seconds from a fight. Then Ina snapped, calling her sister, while Karina and Karun just groaned on the side, knowing the two had slipped back into their old habits. And even though Aldo lifted his hand and told everyone to move on, nobody was buying it. Karun snagged a bite on his fork and raved about how the meat melted in her mouth, and Lauren burst out laughing, asking if she really meant it because this is his signature recipe, so she'd better hurry up and eat faster. Lauren nearly couldn't believe his luck he actually caught this rare animal, so he cooked the meat up with fruit and honey to tame that tough bite. And the result was so excellent it still feels unreal. Karina stared at the man and asked the master if he was hurt, but the man immediately tried to deny it, claiming he only cut himself. The man blared that he had to be exhausted them out. Then another voice laughed back, "You'll say the same thing again." Karina cut in, declaring Aldo was her master. The enraged man snapped, "Again!" And the whole group erupted in laughter. Flora's mom stood right there in front of the couple and said it looked like they'd greeted everyone. And Aldo just nodded along. Yeah, he agreed. Of course she apologized, but she also pushed them along like, "It's time to go back." The bride and groom had to rest up for the very first night. So once they're done circling the tents, she has to lead them back. Aljo snapped, fed up, saying that's just how it is, while Karina munched meat behind them, practically swooning over how delicious it was. Flora thrust a basket into their hands and promised, "Before we go, you can take it." Kurune blinked in shock. "Wait, why?" Flora just smiled. "Because I owe you a favor." Then she urged them to thank everyone for today, and the girls waved them off with, "Come back next year." Karina tore open one bag and Bam found a cupcake and some cookies inside. And if you ever get treats from a couple blessed on the day of the great harvest, you're basically guaranteed good luck. Especially for the unmarried girls, Karuna shot back with sarcasm. And when Aisha stared at the bag, she thought, whoever gets it is going to be blessed too. Then she snapped back the moment she remembered Toke, cheeks burning red as she started denying it, acting totally disgusted. The couple hiked up the hill, slipping farther from the festival's noise when Flora suddenly tripped. Aldo yanked her back in time. He asked if she'd snagged a strand, and she blinked in confusion, explaining that her foot had just caught on her dress. After he glanced at her, the guy scooped the girl up in his arms, and she blinked in confusion. Asking if she was heavy, he burst into laughter and told her, "No, not at all." They finally stumbled back home, and the guy kept her locked in his arms until the second they crossed the door. Then he carefully set her down. The girl flashed a grateful smile. They laughed like everything was okay. And Flora wasted no time calling Aldo, who looked up at her. She clung to him with all her might, shut her eyes, and blurted out that she was wildly, ridiculously happy. Then he froze, blushing hard. But when he finally hugged her back, he confessed the same, cupped her cheek with his hand, and kissed her. As they ripped apart, the guy ducked hard and slid under the wedding dress, and the girl caught him off guard, eyes wide, cheeks burning. She screamed, then pleaded, "Please, at least let me take my dress off."